Welcome to Mystara, and welcome to the book that launched the setting, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, Gazetteer number 1. If this book failed, Mystara would have been a passing curiosity instead of the best Dungeons & Dragons setting ever written. This book was a gamble. Where Forgotten Realms was officially launched in the same year as a box set, Mystara was released as one comprehensive nation book after another. So while we had snippets of information regarding Greyhawk, Dragonlance, or Faerun, Mystara gave you tons more information about each nation, but spread it out over a longer release. Karameikos was unique of the four setting introductions. It was comprehensive, yet it was incomplete. It relied on hooking the players in with an engaging setting filled with adventures, heroes, and villains, where players could make a difference and impact the nation that would become one of the most famous in Dungeons & Dragons history. I'm Mr. Welch, and we are on the threshold of adventure. Karameikos was written by the late great Aaron Alston and released in 1987. Clyde Caldwell did all the Gazetteer cover art, and he established the pattern of 3 people per cover book, 2 of them usually attractive women, and none of them usually appearing in the book. We have no idea to this day who the knight, the blonde, or the swordswoman is, but you cannot deny that is some damn fine art. Stephen Fabian did all the internal art, and the Codex set the standard of 64 pages per book. This standard would quickly be expanded to 96 pages after a few more Gazetteers, and you can only wonder what a 96-page Karameikos guide would have included. The first thing people noticed about the Grand Duchy of Karameikos was this was not a nation based on Western Europe like most of the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk, but instead it had its roots in Eastern Europe. The Grand Duchy was very obviously inspired by nations such as Serbia and Romania, with the new rulers and namesake of the country obviously being Byzantine Greek. You also get to visit places with names like Solescu, Vorlai, and Marilenev. But you also get places with names like Threshold, Kelvin, and the capital city of Ylaruam, a city whose name has aged badly over the years. The name translates directly into watchtower in Latin, but that's not what it sounds like. So because of the constant snickering, the capital's name was changed to Miros in the timeline. That bit of trivia came directly from multiple TSR employees who were more than happy to share that little bit of information about why they changed the name. Karameikos' history is a lengthy one, though one with a lot of gaps in the timeline. Recent history from the last few centuries saw the region, originally called Traladara, conquered by the Thaetian Empire. It was ruled over by various governors for about a century before Duke Stefan Karameikos offered to trade his rich ancestral lands for the largely unexplored and lightly settled Traladara. Emperor Thenkal of Thyatis is a close friend of Stefan, and the empire needed resources. So Stefan got his autonomous province, free to rule over as he saw fit, and Thenkal essentially strip-mined the Duchy of Machatos for all its wealth to pay off Thyatis' debts. This was 30 years ago in the timeline. Stefan took the title Grand Duke as to give the impression to outsiders that Karameikos is just another province of Thyatis. In a way it is. If Stefan does anything to go against Thaetian politics, his nation can easily be taken away. However, relations between Karameikos and Thyatis are close, so that's never even come up as a problem. As long as Stefan is friends with Thenkal, Karameikos is left to its own devices. The military of the nation isn't numerous or well established, but any attempt to overthrow Stefan would be defended by the legions of Thyatis, so the nation is largely safe from outside attack. The first problem of many Duke Stefan encountered is the fact that many of his new subjects despised him. When he first arrived to claim his nation, the noble family Marilenev rose up against him in a revolt that was brutally put down. His first official act before he was even crowned was the decimation of a noble family whose ancestors had rolled over Traladara before Thyatis arrived. Every male heir was killed in the revolt, leaving a very bitter Lady Marilenev to plot revenge and watch her family line die out as a result of her family's actions. The second problem facing Duke Stefan was the nobles he brought with him to help rule over the nation that now bore his name. He brought several of his cousins who sought increased power compared to their lot back in Thyatis, and named them as the barons over the Traladaran nobles. Some, like Desmond Kelvin, were fair and just. Others, like the dreaded Ludwig von Hendrix, ruled through tyranny and violence. Duke Stefan has the flaw of giving people far too many chances than they deserve. So when word of misdeeds of his vassals come to him, he's often far too lenient with them, hoping they will see the error of their ways. This has caused some conflict with the subjects who feel that the Duke is doing nothing to address their grievances with the lords and ladies. A third problem that has emerged since the establishment of the Duke is he overturned the power structure that existed between the old, powerful Traladaran families and where they stood in the Thaetian occupation. Thyatis largely left the nation alone, as it was underpopulated and outside of a few cities there was little of interest to the largely staid governors. Stefan changed all that with his more hands-on approach. Now the old moneyed families jockey for favor in the ducal court, or in the more extreme situations plot directly against the Duke. The families are feuding not only with the new Thaetian nobility, but also with each other for influence in the Duke's court, and also power among the Traladaran people. A fourth problem facing the nation, because this nation has a lot of problems, is that outside of the High Reach River and its tributaries, the nation is mostly wilderness. It makes sense that all the major cities are either on the coast or on a river, but it also means that huge sections of Karameikos is unsettled. In Mystara, that means humanoid raiders abound. In ancient times, the Trolldar people fought a massive battle against the newly created gnolls. Because of these ancient wars, Trollodarans have a long and deep hatred of orcs, gnolls, and other humanoids, and the feeling is mutual. The issue is that the Duke doesn't have the military force to deal with the interior threats, so humanoid raids on remote settlements are a constant problem. A fifth problem facing Duke Stefan and his nation is that of religious strife. While there isn't actual physical violence among the three different religions common in Karameikos, the political machinations between the leaders of the various churches frequently cause headaches for the Duke and his ministers. The Church of Karameikos is attempting to make inroads with the Trollodaran people, while the Church of Trolladara is doing what it can to keep the population loyal to the old religion. Adding to this mix is the troublesome but well-meaning cult of Halav, who see Duke Stefan as the reincarnation of Halav, the patron immortal of the Trollodaran people. The cult tries to win the favor of the Duke through acts of contrition, though of questionable judgment. Now, for all the problems facing Karameikos, it is a major source for adventures that the players will immediately notice. The design for the setting book was what made it an instant classic. Cormyr got a few paragraphs in its initial write-up. Karameikos got 64 pages in its initial appearance. The nation felt real for people discovering the setting. You empathized with Duke Stefan and got to know his family, from his understanding but put upon wife, and his children who were struggling to adjust to the new culture they were ruling over. There was a large number of NPCs introduced, and almost all of them had an adventure hook attached. While there are a few characters that are unabashedly villains, others could go either way depending on the dungeon master and the adventure. Sheikh Abdallah ibn Hamid of Ylaruam is a gruff man who is unused to not getting his way, but he's also love-struck and hopeless with women. So you can thwart him as he attempts to abscond with the object of his affection, or instead you could play wingman for an ambassador who is honorable at heart, but he's got the charisma of a brick. The various NPCs have deep backgrounds. None of them are mustache-twirling villains without motivations. Well, except for Bargle. Because he's a total bastard, and that's the way he likes it. The book goes into a large amount of detail on the culture of the Trollodaran people, as well as the laws and traditions of the nation. Duke Stefan does his best to show that he's a fair and just ruler, and has changed Thaietian laws that he objected to when he assumed the throne. He has abolished slavery, and he has provided for a judicial system that also applies to the nobility. Over the decades that he has ruled, he is slowly winning the favor of his subjects, though the older families still have several members that despise him. Karameikos has a large population of demi-humans in terms of percentage compared to its total population. The gnomish kingdom of Highforge sits near the city of Kelvin. While it's more of a medium-sized town than an actual kingdom, it still has thousands of gnomes in its borders, as well as about 1,000 dwarves. The Duke's law doesn't apply in Highforge, but the gnomes rarely make trouble, so the Duke allows the gnomish king his grandeur. Inside the borders, there's also two clans of elves. The Kalari elves can be found in and around the city of Riflian and the surrounding areas. They wholeheartedly approve of Duke Stefan's ways, and have even provided troops that form his elite royal bodyguard. On the Thaetian border, the Vialia elves patrol their ancestral home in the Dimrak forest. These elves aren't as friendly as the Kalari, and they prefer to be left alone. The Duke doesn't press the issue, especially considering the fact that the elves favor Thaiatis politically. Karameikos does not lack for villains. Some of them are some of the most iconic D&D bad guys that are still referenced today. First and foremost, you've got Von Hendrix and Bargle, who run the Black Eagle Barony with an iron fist. The Iron Ring Slavers Guild is featured heavily, and when you need truly incorrigible villains, they are perfect for the job. The Veiled Society is an organized crime group run by one of the more powerful Trollodaran families. They mostly operate out of Specularum, where they typically prey on Thaetians, non-humans, and Trollodarans who don't pay them protection. For low-level parties, they are a constant threat. One aspect that the players fell in love with regarding Karameikos is that the nation, like all Mystaran nations, offers room for the characters to ascend in social ranks. The Duke can and will knight characters that prove themselves. Heroes that clear out sections of the nations of monsters and humanoids can become landed nobility in appreciation of them helping pacify the country. All the money that the players make cleaning out the Caves of Chaos or the Palace of the Silver Princess will be spent on building a manor home, improving their barony's infrastructure, or building defenses. The players will be adopted by the nation if they aren't already natives, and possibly even gain the ear of the Duke and join his inner circle. These are options that were built into the nation's setting. Those rewards are suggested several times throughout the book. It's not something that a dungeon master has to just randomly give to the players. The nation's customs give a lot of opportunity for character growth. The shearing custom is where teenage Trollodarans are sent out into the world to learn a trade before returning to their family as an adult. Even the Thaiatian noble children are participating in this tradition, which actually helps soothe the ethnic tensions between the two peoples. The examples of the shearing given in the Gazetteer include Adriana and Justin Karameikos, who, despite being the children of the Duke, took on the occupations of a city guard and a sailor during their shearing. In-game, this means that no matter what a Karameikan player's family status is, their background can be just about any profession found in the nation. Another aspect Karameikos has in abundance is a lot of characters that can be either ally or enemy, depending entirely on the whims and the needs of the Dungeon Master. In the city of Celescu, their leader is Zimaruz Celescu, who seems to have ruled over his people without aging for decades. He's not hostile to players automatically, unless they push him beyond reason. In my personal campaign, the players constantly tried to prove that he was a vampire, though he always had a legitimate reason why there were no mirrors or garlic in his castle, or why he was always in formal gear and always had pale skin. In short, the lands surrounding the Celescu estate don't exactly get a lot of sun. Other characters that can serve as villains or allies include Sergiev of the Cult of Halav, Flameflicker the Thief, or Demetrius King of the Beggars. The book leaves a lot of room for expansion. Baron von Hendrix has been the subject of several topics on the Vaults of Pandios, where people have tried to turn him into something of an anti-hero, where instead of just being evil for evil's sake, he is instead resorting to desperate tactics because of a lack of support from his cousin fighting the swarms of humanoids that threaten his barony. I've given him a wife and children to act as a foil to the Duke's family with their own agendas. There's a lot of ways to explain the Baron's cruelty and evil, but giving him a relatable motive makes him more of a villain. Whether out of desperation or conspiring with the Hadians of Thyatis to usurp the Duke, it helps the Baron if he has motives the players can thwart but understand. Now for Bargle, he just likes being evil. It's his thing. It makes him happy. After he blasted Alina, he was probably skipping and singing all the way back to Fort Doom. Because he likes being a bastard. Karameikos did suffer plot-wise when the timeline advanced 10 years after Wrath of the Immortals. Von Hendrix was gone, replaced with a well-meaning but incompetent young noble. An inexperienced baron who doesn't know how to do his job pales in comparison for adventure compared to an evil baron who has a doctorate in evil. Karameikos in the 1010 timeline suffers the same problem as most of Mystara, which is a lack of bad guys. Now, King Stefan is loved by his people and the nation is prosperous, as Karameikos was untouched in the wars that devastated Darokin and Thyatis. While this is great for the newly minted kingdom, it makes for a boring nation to adventure in. This is why the Grand Duchy of Karameikos is a treasured masterpiece, while Karameikos' Kingdom of Adventure is largely glossed over by players. The beauty of the book is that it compacts so much information about the nation in its pages. There is no space wasted within. It includes things that other settings leave out. Want to know what the flag of Karameikos is? It's on page 32. Flip over to the next page to look at the calendar. The comprehensive military guide is on page 25. A guide to dress yourself in Ylaruam is on page 30. The book does introduce the skill system on page 9, though it was greatly refined in later books and finally formalized in the Rule Cyclopedia. If the Dungeon Master needs a quick adventure hook, they start on page 62. The book balances fluff and rules very well. After a full read of this book, you will be more than ready to practice your fake Serbian accent and clear out the Radleb woods for your Byzantium rulers. So why do you want to play as a Karameikan? The Trollodarans are known for being an insular and superstitious people who are distrustful of strangers. The Thyacians aren't welcome in their adopted home and are trying to enforce laws on a people long conquered. But after a few decades of the Duke's reign, ethnic tensions have started to fade. The people are starting to adapt to the efforts of Duke Stefan's modernization efforts, and the nation is beginning to become recognized for its own merits on the international stage. Paladins from the Order of the Griffin have served their nation loyally, and their reputation is beginning to spread outside its borders. If you want a copy, you can get a reprint on DriveThruRPG, though you don't get the awesome fold-out separate map, unfortunately. If you want that copy, get ready to spend $50 or more on the various auction sites. If you just want the PDF, it's $5 on DriveThruRPG. The Grand Duchy of Karameikos is the entry to Mystara for a lot of players. The book's quality and in-depth writing was part of the lost talent that was Aaron Alston. Many of us remember picking up this book for the first time like it was our first crush. All the years haven't aged it one bit. We still love Duke Stefan. We despise von Hendrix, and we just want justice for Alina. Next up is the Emirates of Ylaruam, which stands out from the other settings as its guide was almost a choose-your-own-adventure setting. But until then, remember, Bargle did nothing wrong. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Mystara, as today we're looking at the second nation officially created for the known world, the Emirates of Ylaruam, the desert kingdom that is somehow situated between Sweden and Italy. This is not just a land of infinite sand, but has a strong sense of tradition and a history that unifies its people. Throw in a mysterious past, hidden dangers everywhere, and a fill-in-the-blank gazetteer, and this is one of the more adaptable nations in the known world. The Emirates is a hard nation to talk about, in parts because the nation was intentionally left undefined to allow DMs to modify the nation to fit their campaign. The name of the Sultan in Ylaruam is never mentioned once in the book. You have to find his name in the Poor Wizard's Almanac, written years later, to discover his name is Muhammad al-Kalim. And even then, his biography is about a single paragraph. Ylaruam suffers from its vague creation by having very little mention in the future metaplot. Writers can only use what they're given, and Ylaruam was given very little to go on. Now that's out of the way. Ylaruam does delve deeply into the geography and government of the nation. None of the major cities are described in any detail, only the village of Kirkuk is detailed, and that's not even on the map, so the DM can place it anywhere in Ylaruam that he needs it to be. The book does talk about story structure and how to create an adventure appropriate for an Arabian setting. That's actually a good tool for DMs, but for lore videos it's not that helpful. For example, it mentions that the Sultan and the Vizier need to be at odds with each other. If the Sultan is good, the Vizier is evil, and vice versa. The Vizier is never named, so canonically I can't tell you anything about him, especially since the Sultan that is mentioned later is completely on the fence about everything. Lore-wise, the story of Ylaruam starts with the rise of the Nithian Empire, about 1,000 years after the Great Rain of Fire. While the initial Nithians were a primitive people focusing on agriculture and fishing along the banks of the now lost river Nithia, they quickly reached the Iron Age, and in the span of 500 years became the most powerful empire in Mystara. The empire discovered new magics, conquered large chunks of Brune, reaching at least as far as the Savage Coast. The Nithians became the dominant culture for hundreds of years before their culture fell into decline. Over time, the Nithian Empire became corrupt and started falling under the influence of the entropic immortals. Adding to the Nithians' problems in 800 BC, the Elves of Alfheim altered the climate of Ylaruam, pulling rain from the region into the Camelbarth forest that caused droughts in Nithia. An earthquake then diverted the direction of the river Nithia, eventually shifting the river underground, causing the nation to become the desert that it's famous for. This causes results among its large slave population, endangering the nation even more. The final nail in the Nithian Empire's coffin was their embrace of a fire cult that started a war with elemental creatures of water. The creatures that the cult embraced turned on the nation when the war started going badly. This caused the Nithians to look for a new patron to save their empire. They chose Thanatos. Thanatos encouraged the Nithians to save their empire the only way he knew how, by embracing undeath. The pharaohs began efforts to turn the entire population into creatures that don't need food or water at the expense of eternal slavery to Thanatos. The other immortals were not having any of it, and instead punished the Nithians by wiping the entire empire from the face of the planet. Those that remained had their memories wiped of their own history. Nithia was not only gone, it was completely forgotten. This has caused great confusion for the colonies and conquest that suddenly found themselves without a country and no idea where these great buildings came from. The pyramids and obelisks were gradually attributed to various other cultures, and Nithian influence was completely destroyed. There are Nithians remaining in the furthest reaches of Ylaruam, but there are savage people who are scorned by their own countrymen as little more than bandits. With the Nithians gone, Ylaruam hit a dark age because the few that remained had no memory of their own culture. There are a few Nithians remaining, but they're isolated in the highlands and don't get along with anyone, having turned to banditry or worse over the years. With Ylaruam now largely unpopulated, other tribes began to migrate into the region. The Makastani were once Ethengar in nature, considered one of the weaker tribes. They fled into the steppes of Rockhome, who directed the people into northern Ylaruam. They gave up their nomadic ways and learned to till the soil and built proper cities in the years that followed. The largest tribe to arrive in Ylaruam after the fall of Nithia was the Elysians. Ahead of Nithia and Makastan, they are the dominant culture in the emirates of Elysia, Abishan, Nicostinia, and Dithystia. The people are further divided between the nomads that wander the deserts going from oasis to oasis, and the city dwellers who are determined to survive in the vast deserts of their nation. While tensions between the two can run high, they are Ylarii first and will band together without hesitation if they are threatened by an outside menace. Ylaruam did not last long as a nation after the arrival of the Makastani, as the empires of Thyatis and Alphesia both eyed the nation for expansion. Thyatis struck first in 150 AC by sending in colonists to the outer edges of the nation. In 100 years, Thyatis had claimed all of Ylaruam as their own and enslaved a large number of people. A few centuries after that, Alphesia invaded Ylaruam looking to take territory from Thyatis and started a period of wars across Ylaruam that lasted 3 centuries. The most significant event in Ylaruam history was the birth of Al-Kalim, who would later become the patron immortal of the nation. When he turned 25, he established the city of Ylaruam from a small village he captured at the start of his War of Liberation. Well, except for the Nithians. And within 2 years of the founding of Ylaruam, he had driven out the Alphasians. 3 more years saw the expulsion of Thyatis with the siege of Karameikos. With that, the Confederated Tribes of Ylaruam were founded, and the nation of Ylaruam was declared in 831 AC. Al-Khalim then went about creating the system of laws and governments for the Emirates, establishing the various political divisions inside the nation. He was a highly charismatic man, espousing a philosophy of unity and piousness that brought the various chiefs, sheiks, and clan leaders together under his banner. He was able to obtain allies from unusual sources, such as the dwarves of Rockhome, and even elemental creatures such as Ifrit or Jinn. He was approached early in his life to begin the path of immortality by his patron Proteus. During this period, he wrote the Nama, which serves as both his biography and the main religious teachings of his faith. Shortly after he created the Nama, Al-Khalim formalized the dream of the Garden University and tasked all magic users, both arcane and divine, to find a way to return the nation back to its climate before the fall of Nithia. The legends told of a time when Ylaruam was green with plant life and rivers flowed freely throughout the land, but all tales ended in mystery due to the erasure of all evidence of the Nithians. Al-Khalim ascended to immortality after nearly 100 years, having turned over the reins of power decades ago. In his absence, the nation developed two rival factions that alternate control of the nation. The Preceptors are the more tolerant faction, descended from the advisors and allies of Al-Khalim. The Kin faction are the direct descendants of Al-Khalim and are more conservative. The Preceptors are in favor of trade and are open to outside influences on the nation. The Kin are more popular with the nomads and are far more isolationist. Al-Khalim encouraged the rivalry, as when the nation needed a change in leadership, the factions would then accommodate this shift. While not all transitions between the factions have been amiable, the system has seemed to work in the years since Al-Khalim has given up the Sultanate. The Ylaruam, despite being considered aloof and standoffish by those outside their nation, actually value tradition and civility. The conflict is their version of politeness is often misunderstood to outsiders. The Ylaruam as a people have suffered under the occupation of numerous invaders and have only earned their actual independence less than 200 years ago. Because of this, they're distrustful of outsiders, and value people that respect the customs they developed after all those centuries of hardship. Even the entertainments of the Ylaruam are often considered boring by other nations. One of their favorite pastimes is storytelling and poetry reading. Because the culture values its history, with most of it being oral, those that keep the tales of the old bring in crowds at the local gathering halls, and the most famous storytellers will even gain audiences before the Sultan. Oddly enough, this love of history and tales has reached the Hin, who also appreciate a good tale spinner. While the Hin and Ylaruam couldn't be further apart culturally, Ylaruam poets and orators have found themselves in demand in the distant Shires, even if they do have to stoop when entering the tavern. If the Ylaruam had a national sport, it would easily be horse racing. Ylaruam don't like sprints, they prefer marathons. The races in the Sultanates go on for hundreds of miles, with checkpoints at each town that will draw in crowds just to see a few racers cross the line before going back to work. The Ylaruam breed order considered the best horses in the known world just for this reason. The desert steeds are faster than any horse the Ethengar or Corindans possess. Their stamina allows them to complete long trips with few health issues. But the horses are prone to being inbred, so it's important to inspect horses from merchants so you know how to avoid birth defects. The best Ylaruam horses fetch sums several times that of normal horses. Another love of the Ylaruam is fighting, not drunken bar brawling, but organized attack on mutual enemies. This is almost always against bandits, especially the Nithian tribesmen that plague anyone crossing into their territory. Another target of Ylaruam hostility is the Sistik, a numerous and militant race of reptilian humanoids found in the deep desert. The Sistik believe themselves to be the lords of the desert and despise the humans occupying it. The Ylaruam return the sentiment, and bloodshed usually follows. One way to get in with the Sultan or the Emirs is to join the frequent conflicts against the Desert Scourge. Of course, a defining trait for Ylaruam is the religious fervor that scares many of their neighbors. While pantheons are common in all parts of Mystara, the Ylaruam venerate only Al-Khalim. Other immortals have no real following in Ylaruam, and even the spheres are held in lesser regard than Al-Khalim. His teachings forbid alcohol except on certain holy days. Water is sacred to the Ylaruam. Sharing water with a traveler or a stranger has far more effect than offering a swig of whiskey. Ylaruam take their customs seriously because they help them reflect on the hardships that their people have faced. People that learn to accept this and respect the customs will quickly find that Ylaruam people are fiercely loyal to their friends. The culture clashes tend to occur when the Ylaruam venture into other areas, far enough away from the borders that the locals are unaware of their customs. Only the dwarves of Rockhome understand the desert nation's customs and culture and respect them for their tradition. While dwarves may love drowning in their meads and ales, they will have tea or coffee prepared as well for their visitors. Of course, the Hin, upon hearing that their visitor prefers non-alcoholic beverages, will try to impress her with the staggering variety of teas and coffees they produce. The Ylaruam learn to take their beverages with them when visiting other, less knowledgeable areas. Ostlanders don't understand or even care why the caravan master won't drink with them, but the caravan master will also know how to pass on his drinking horn or find an excuse to empty it out of sight to save face. Al-Khalim's influence on his nation is everywhere, not just in terms of religion, but he also set up the government that still rules over Ylaruam. He set up the laws of fealty and dictated who was eligible to earn each title. He created the office of the viziers, who serve Ylaruam itself rather than just the sultan. If the sultan does something that would be detrimental to the whole of Ylaruam, the vizier can use the emirs to overturn the decision or in drastic situations even remove the sultan. In case of a sultan dying without a clear successor, the vizier has to lead the emirs to select a new sultan. One aspect of the government unique to Ylaruam is that of the voucheries, which serve as the nation's bureaucracy. These are offices devoted to the running of the nation, leaving the sultan and the emirs to attend to more important matters. These voucheries are led by their own vizier, who handles all the government officials below him. If you need assistance from the government, you go to one of these voucheries for assistance. If they deem you worthy, they give you the paperwork allowing you to access the help you need. In other words, they give you a voucher. The larger voucheries, like taxation or the military, are notoriously difficult to work with. The voucheries of the provinces, which is tasked with securing the untamed areas, is more than happy to give explorers and adventurers all the help they need if it brings just a little bit more of the wilderness under control. The vouchery of water is the most powerful of the voucheries, as it controls the most important resource in the nation, obviously water. The vouchery can save or destroy a town by deciding where wells are built or reservoirs established. They are a prime source for new adventurers because of the urgency of many of their decisions. The military of Ylaruam was established by Al-Khalim, who dictated that the warriors should be a religious organization. He also created a group for lay followers as well as scholars, and those are almost always clerics of Al-Khalim. The clerics do not, however, include the famous dervishes, which are not tied to any formal worship of Al-Khalim. The dervishes instead are individuals who go into the desert to meditate on the teachings of Al-Khalim and to pass on their knowledge to those that seek them out. Dervishes are known for being mysterious, very durable, and are looked upon with no small degree of reverence by the other Yalari for their ability to survive in the deep desert without help. As far as the military orders go, they are quite difficult to join, as the way of the warrior has strict prerequisites. The applicant must have their own horse, as well as weapons and armor. Even if the warrior is destined to be in the infantry, they must prove that they can still ride. Those that fail or unable to supply all the needed equipment are instead just sent to the rank infantry in the army. Those that pass but lack magical abilities are divided into the Order of the Pike for heavy infantry, or the Order of the Arrow for mounted archers. Wizards can join and don't have to provide any extra gear except a horse, but they have to prove that they can ride just as well as any other applicant. Clerics that are accepted join the Order of the Mace and become officers in the military. Applicants that excel in the testing process are invited to the Order of the Lance, who are automatically made officers and marked for rapid advancement. This is the only way the Faris, an order of paladins sworn to protect Ylaruam from its enemies, are selected. So why do you want to play a Yalari? They're rigid, honor-bound, and intolerant of most outsiders. Well, for starters, the Ylaris represent a nation of survivors who have weathered foreign invaders, immortal curses, and environmental disasters. They're a proud race because they have survived events that have wiped out lesser civilizations. The Yalari represent classic adventures like the Sheik, 1001 and Arabian Nights, and the Prince of Persia. You're going to be lightly armored, highly mobile, and chasing down the magical treasures lost for 1,000 years. Ylaruam adventures are going to be equal parts Sinbad the Sailor and the Mummy. Not the Mummy with Tom Cruise, the Mummy with Brendan Fraser. I mean, you could go with the Boris Karloff Mummy from 1937, but that movie's actually a pretty slow grind. So go with the one with Rick O'Connell. Seriously, they could have turned him into the next Indiana Jones, but the producers didn't realize that he was the reason why we liked the movie. And while Arnold Vosloo did a great job as the villain, we wanted more of the hero. But back to Ylaruam. The Gazetteer's design showed that TSR didn't have a set style for the setting just yet. Canon-wise, there's nothing solid to talk about until Joshuan's Almanac years later. A revised Ylaruam Gazetteer would be a good thing, if nothing else to bring it up to the same format as the others. Next time around, I'm remastering Glantri, and that one should be a doozy because that's the nation people tend to remember when you mention the known world. But it's time to leave Ylaruam because a lot of people don't like the fact that it's coarse, it's rough, and it gets everywhere. Welcome to Mystara for a delve into one of the most popular nations in all of the known world, Glantri. The third nation released in the Gazetteer line, and without a doubt the most dysfunctional. Glantri follows the old writer's mantras. If you want to make something memorable, make it flawed. Start with a bunch of racist wizards, throw in ethnic strife, political tension, xenophobia, secret societies, hidden magics, and egregious magical OSHA violations, and you've got Glantri. The only people they hate more than each other is everybody else. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're looking at the love child of Hogwarts and Yugoslavia, the Principalities of Glantri. Glantri was written in 1987 by Bruce Hurd, the editor of Mystara himself. He insisted that the book needed to be 96 pages instead of the then standard 64 pages, which TSR allowed. This size increase would become the standard for future Gazetteers, though Ierendi would go back to the 64-page format briefly. The book wasn't divided into a players and DM section, something that would be later changed in future versions. The cover was done by Clyde Caldwell, of course, as he did all the Gazetteer cover art. For a change, at least two of the characters on the cover actually appear in the book, Princess Brannock McGregor and Jarek Veriana. Though I'm not sure why Veriana has cat eyes. Not sure who the red-headed wizard is supposed to be either. The basic breakdown of Glantri is it's ruled by wizards and wizards alone. Clerical magic in the nation is punishable by death. Being resistant to arcane magic is punishable by death. Possessing unknown forms of magic is typically punishable by death. Attempting to spread any form of religion is punishable by death. Practicing dark magics like necromancy or witchcraft is perfectly legal, and they have their own lobbying groups to help encourage their forms of magic. Glantri has its own priorities, and other nations can't even begin to comprehend them. Glantrians have a long-established bias towards all things arcane. In their formative years, the wizards decided that only magic users should rule, so all the fighters and thieves had to contend with being second-class citizens. Since arcane magic was obviously superior to divine magic, the worship of immortals was banned nationwide. Actual clerics, when captured, are tortured to death as a lesson to other religions that Glantri's official religion is atheism. This makes them no friends among the more religious nations like Ylaruam and Ethengar, and not that the Glantrians care. Race relations are even worse than international relations. Elves are welcome in Glantri, they can cast spells. Dwarves, on the other hand, are resistant to magic, and that infuriates the Glantrian wizards. Nothing that restricts the supremacy of arcane spells is tolerated. Because of this, dwarves found in the borders of Glantri are often captured and dissected to try to understand their magical resistance. Likewise, the Hen of the Shires, with their magic warping denial powers, are hunted down by Glantrian wizards to discover their secrets on some dissection table. Gnomes are tolerated because of their arcane abilities, but distrusted because of their association with dwarves. The Glantrians avoid the Sidhe, despite their obvious magical origins. While a Glantrian wizard might be curious how the Sidhe generate their own spells naturally, the thought of waking up to an enraged reality-warping 10-foot-tall archfey with green plate mail armor and pressing questions regarding your poor choice of scientific subjects is more than enough to satisfy most wizards' curiosity. With their intolerance of non-magic-using races and their almost psychotic hatred of clerics, Glantri doesn't have a lot of friends. Okay, they've got Darokin, because Darokin's everybody's friend. Despite ties to both Alphatia and Thyattis, tensions between the empires are strained at best. Alfheim has cultural ties to Glantri, but doesn't trust them at all for fear of the constant feuding between the two elven princesses that are spilling into their nation. Karameikos has exchanged ambassadors, but the nations are too distant to have much more than diplomatic ties. Apart from that, every nation is either too distant to Glantri to deal with them in any meaningful way, or just outright hates them. Glantri's list of enemies includes Ylaruam, Ethengar, Rockhome, the Five Shires. Even the city of Serene won't go near them because of the machinations of their princes. Geographically, the nation is located in a heavy mountainous region in the northwestern part of the known world. Glantri shares a small border with Darokin and Ethengar, and a larger border with the Broken Lands. All access to the nation is through heavily defended mountain passes featuring numerous forts. These forts, along with the various wizards that are going to be stationed there, make any frontal assaults on the nation unfeasible. Ethengar might want to see the wizards burn, but every attack they've launched into the principalities have been repulsed with great losses. The reverse is true for Glantrians, as their sorties into Ethengar have always met defeat, because the superior numbers of the horse nomads easily enveloped Glantrian expeditions on the wide open steppes. Because of their lack of contact with outside nations and limited access to their neighbors, in that aspect alone, Glantri is reminiscent of a fantasy Switzerland, if Switzerland was populated by a bunch of xenophobic pricks. There are 10 principalities in Glantri at 1000 AC, and they couldn't be further apart politically. Each principality is run by a noble house, and those are filled with internal politics and backstabbing, in some cases quite literally. House Silaire runs New Averon, which is led by Etienne d'Amberville, the same Etienne d'Amberville from Castle Amber, though he was Stephen Amber in that module, they just translated it into French. This noble house arrived from another world, which was an alternate Earth, complete with fantasy France. Since fantasy France was burning witches and wizards at the stake, Etienne took his family and a large number of his subjects and headed through a gate to Mystara. House Silaire is possibly the most screwed up of all the noble houses, as Etienne isn't dying fast enough for his relatives. Couple this with the fact that most of his immediate family are more than slightly off their meds, and you've got a wonderful mix of intrigue. Throw in secret werewolves and secret cabals, and you've got a potential for some really messed up adventures. House Crownguard of Clantia represents Scotland in the known world, and I mean actual fantasy Scotland, not some knockoff Scotland. Real, transdimensional, radioactive necromancer Glaswegians. Prince Brandt MacGregor comes from the same world as the d'Amberville family, and brought his family across using the same gates House Siler did. Crownguard is not a nice place to live. It's filled with haunted moors, unruly ghosts, and traditional Scottish food. The Crownguard nobility is famous for the necromancy, and the commoners hate them for it. The problem is the nobles have lots of magic and undead monstrosities to counter any potential revolt. I would like to thank David McGregor for helping me with my brogue all those years ago, because he wanted to sound like me and I wanted to sound like him when we were growing up, so he taught me how to talk like a Scotsman. Of course, it's easy to learn a new dialect when you're like 5 years old, but the best part right now is David McGregor is walking around the streets of Aberdeen going, "Hey y'all, how y'all doing?" The other undead-related house in Glantri is House Ierendi in Moldavia. Think Strahd, only without the massive amount of support material or his own personal setting. Prince Morfell Gorovich Wazlani might be considered discount Strahd, but in his defense he has a lot fewer waifus. Moldavia is Transylvania with only half the serial numbers filed off. The people live in fear of their vampire nobility, undead roam the forests, and all sorts of fell creatures stalk the unwary. But then again, there's no one complaining about the placement of prosthetics legs and artwork in Moldavia. House Linden of Berghoven is where the Flemish lived. Led by Vansari Vlardoen, who is generally regarded as a bit of a jackhole, the Flemish were the original settlers of Glantri back when it was called the Highlands. Because of this bit of history, the Flemish believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of Glantri and constantly remind their fellow countrymen of this fact, causing the people to be generally regarded as a bunch of jackholes. The Flemish love fire. They are one of the three major factions of fire wizards in Mystara, representing the neutral alignment compared to Ierendi's good faction and Alphasia's evil faction. They're also one of the most despised houses as they have a beef against pretty much everybody, and they control enough of the nobility to remain a force politically. House Ritterberg of Alban represents Germany in Mystara, and the house is led by the militaristic Jager von Drachenfels. House Ritterberg was created by a marriage between nobles from Alphasian and Thaetian families, causing the house to be racked with numerous internal conflicts. As the Drachenfels name suggests, the house loves dragons. They love to hunt them. They put dragons all over their architecture and their clothing. Draconic research is a common profession in Alban. Alban's biggest rivals in Glantri are Houses Silverstone and Serechia, who are of pure Alphasian and Thaetian stock, respectively. But while Prince Jager has control of the army, there's nothing they can do about it. House Silverstone of Blackhill is led by Volospin Andir, a pure-blooded Alphasian. The Andirs arrived in Glantri when Alphasia was trying to seize Glantri for itself. But when that went south, the family claimed a portion of the nation for themselves. They're long on pride, but short on allies, as everyone assumes that they're loyal to Alphasia more than they are to Glantri. The fact that Prince Volospin has proved himself to be quite treacherous hasn't helped their popularity at all. House Singabad of Krondahar consists of a breakaway clan of Ethengarian descent. Prince Jarek Viriana IV has a death sentence in Ethengar, but that doesn't prevent other princes from considering him loyal to Ethengar first. The region is relatively poor, but strategically important, as the entrance to the Ethengar. The various nobles of Singabad are magically sworn to be loyal to Glantri for 7 generations, though no one knows the effects of the curse, as no Singabad noble has ever violated the oath. The people are torn between the Ethengar that hate them as traitors and their countrymen who despise them for being potential spies. House Serechia of Corrins is a nice place to visit, but you certainly don't want to live there, and even visiting it can be very hazardous to your health. Inaceti de Malapetria is of Phaeacian stock, and is known for being a paranoid psychotic. Paranoia is a common trait in Corrin's nobility, as death by poison is the leading cause of demise in the region. De Malapetria has risen to the leadership of his house by being the most paranoid of all. The house is considered spies for the Phaeacians, but their prince rarely passes on secrets, believing all of Thyatis too stupid to understand the magical secrets that he possesses. Clan Alhambra of Belcadiz is the first of the 2 elven clans found in Glantri. Led by the fiery Carnelia de Fedoras de Belcadiz, the entire clan of elves is pretty much fantasy Zorro. Belcadiz elves are known for being shorter than other elves by several inches, and are willing to duel at the drop of a hat. The elves are hot-blooded to the extreme, and they allow no slight to go unpunished. They also cause a fair amount of continuity snarls, as they're obviously Spanish, but they came from the south, while the Spanish-themed nations of the Savage Coast supposedly came from Thyatis, which doesn't even have a Spanish-themed area. There's a lot of different headcanon explaining this, but I'm not going to go into that here. Last of the houses of Glantri, but not the least, is Clan Ylaruam of Erawan, led by Carlotina Erawan. These elves are traditional Sylvan elves with ties to Alfheim. Princess Erawan is one of the few truly good people in Glantri, even if she does play their deadly politics. Like other princes with ties to outside nations, she's considered a spy for Alfheim and distrusted by the other houses. She's also disliked because she has managed to get the right to maintain the forest on the eastern edge of Glantri, which allows her to control the supply of lumber into the nation, which is a vital resource. One of Glantri's biggest problems is the various princes hate each other for a laundry list of reasons. On their list of allies and enemies, the ally list is typically one specific noble or another, while the enemies list is an entire house, usually several. The political infighting makes for getting anything passed in Parliament almost impossible due to the rivalries. Only an outside threat can unify the princes, which they will do almost immediately. Glantri is the only nation in Mystara that allows the free research of magics forbidden anywhere else. All of the wizards need Glantri, because they can't go anywhere else to do their research and test their magics. However, once the threat is dealt with, the houses will fall right back into their infighting and their treachery. Piling on the absolute mess of Glantri's internal politics is the staggering list of secret societies found within its borders. Numerous terrorist organizations look to bring down either specific houses or various nobles, like the Moldavian Liberation Organization, Order of the Claymore, or the Elven Liberation Front. Various criminal guilds, like the Fellowship of the Pouch or the Sisters of the Private Houses, have become semi-legitimate by unionizing, paying taxes, and more importantly, offering discounts to important members of Parliament. To gain power in Glantri, you need either magic or contacts. To gain a lot of power, you need both. Of course, if you're talking Glantri, you're talking magic, and Glantrians have more magic in their day-to-day lives than pretty much any nation. Not just in Mystara, I'm talking across the multiverse. If a spell can make your life easier, there's a magic item sold that can cast it. Glantri doesn't have magic shops, it has magic department stores. Various wizards spend their entire lives cranking out minor magic items, and the Alchemist Guild brews potions by the barrel. Continual light spells have replaced street lights. Wizards race to create new spells to make available to the public because new scrolls sell out within hours. Behind the public displays of arcane prowess, Glantrians seek out new sources of arcane power. The secret crafts are new approaches and schools of magic that are unknown outside the nation, and poorly kept secrets among the nobility. The crafts are new forms of necromancy, illusion, and conjuration, and all new schools like cryptomancy or witchcraft. They aren't fully understood just yet, and practicing them can be dangerous to wizards just starting their research into them. The crafts can ultimately lead to passive immortality, but more often will just lead to the wizard's laboratory vaporizing in arcane fire. The biggest secret Glantri has is the Radiance. This is a magical radiation leaking from an artifact located miles below Glantri City. Few know of this magical power, and those that do guard it with a murderous intent. The Radiance enhances magic like nothing else. Channeling the Rad as it is known by its practitioners can supercharge spells and rewrite the fate of its users. At the highest level, the spell can elevate a wizard to an immortal, though it's quite dangerous, and failure results in a fate worse than death. The wizards that use the Radiance excessively take on a large number of risks. First, Glantrian wizards are always looking for a new source of magic. If you reveal one they are unaware of, they will more than likely try to take the knowledge from you. More than a few Radiance users languish in dungeons where they are tortured for information. The more physical threat is the Radiance warps a wizard's body. The more it is used, the greater the chance part of the wizard's body shrivels into a useless husk. Too much exposure to the Radiance causes the wizard to become an undead lich, though one with unheard of magical powers. Glantri's capital is known for being the city of gondolas, as it resembles real-life Venice, only high in the mountains. It's actually the only city detailed in any meaningful way in any of the books dedicated to Glantri. The city contains a parliament, as well as the Great School of Magic and most other important government buildings. The school is the most famous building in all of Glantri. Almost every wizard of any note is trained there. New low-level spells are created there on a daily basis, and the school funds itself by selling the magic items students create as part of their lessons. More experienced wizards use the school's faculties for their own magical research, which means even the school is dominated by the politics the nation is famous for. So how did a nation that is almost dysfunctional beyond belief with its internal politics and divisiveness, as well as hated by most of its neighbors, come to be? Piece by piece. After the fallout from the Great Rain of Fire was dying down, some elves found what would be the future setting of Glantri. And there they found an item left over by Blackmore, and of course they had to push all the buttons. Later, after the fallout from that device died down long enough for people to live in the area, the Flamish showed up after being chased out of the world the Alphatians would later flee from as well. The Flame founded the city of Brazier and sat back bragging about how much better they are compared to everyone else. After 300 years of hogging all the cool magic for themselves, the Flames are disgusted when the Elves show back up in their country, having returned to the land they originally claimed for their own. Settlers from Traladara and Thyatis also show up because of rumors of secret magics in the area. The Flames attack and defeat the Elves and settlers and drive them south. There, the refugees are rescued by an Alphatian force who has also heard about this magic land, and with the Alphatians' help, the coalition defeats the Flamish army that was chasing them. The Alphatian wizard Halzenthraum leads the new army, and he divides the nation into 3 territories, one for the Elves, one for the settlers, and one for the Flames. And then he seizes the entire nation for Alphatia anyways. Dwarves show up to mine the mountains, regardless of what the Proto-Glantrians think. A plague hits the region, but the dwarves are resistant to it, because they're dwarves. The Glantrians blame the dwarves for the plague, and open war breaks out. During this time, Alexander Glantri of the Phaeacian settlers ambushes Halzenthram and liberates Glantri from the Alphatians. About a decade after this, the wizards of Glantri realize that they're in most of the positions of power, and decide to declare only wizards can be nobles. Actual wizards, not bards, not sorcerers, not warlocks, or anybody else that can cast arcane magic. War breaks out between the wizards and the rest of the non-wizard nobles, which results in complete victory for the wizards. After that, other wizarding types begin to migrate openly to Glantri. The Belcadese elves arrive from someplace far to the south. The French and the Scottish show up from the portals to another world and claim part of the nation. Land is granted to the various wizards. With the more powerful the wizard, the more important the title. When a title is made available or abandoned, another wizard is promoted and leaves behind their old domain, allowing for the old title to be filled by a lower-ranking wizard. It gets complicated, and it is one of the biggest sources of backstabbing between the nobles. Glantri is a very complicated nation, with dozens of NPCs detailed, but surprisingly no cities outside the capital. The nation already has multiple languages exclusive to its borders, which just adds to the contentious politics between the regions. Everything about Glantri's inner workings just divides the nation even more. The Phaeacians and Alphatians hold grudges from their old empires, and hate the mixed-race Albans even more. The two elf clans fight over what forest Glantri has. The French and the Scots have ancient grudges, and everybody hates the Flame, which is fine because they hate them back. So why do you want to play a Glantrian? They're one of the most divided people in all of D&D. Glantrians make the citizens of Sigil look unified. They're known for being racist, and their love of vivisection makes them no friends. However, when it comes to variety, nobody comes close to the Wizards of Glantri. The nation churns out adventures faster than Disney burns out child stars. If you want to play a wizard, nobody does magic better than Glantri. Players wanting to try a unique culture have 10 to choose from just within Glantri's borders. There's a reason this book is considered one of the best nation books TSR ever produced. And now it's time to continue with the remasters. Next up is the island nation of Ierendi, considered one of the worst of the Gazetteers, as the pop cultural references didn't stand the test of time, and the book didn't go into a lot of detail about things people wanted to hear about. So that's the next nation that's going to get tuned up and fixed. But until then, kiss me, baby. Let the fire get higher. Welcome to Mystara for another remastered video, this time looking at the Kingdom of Ierendi, the tropical paradise nation. An archipelago consisting of 10 different islands, Ierendi is known for its booming tourist trade, its fearsome navy, and its friendly people. It's one of the few nations completely explored, though it is also located next to hundreds of small islands that have never been discovered. It is the last of the 64-page Gazetteers, and unfortunately has the reputation of being one of the worst of the line, second only to the Atruaghin. But with a little retcon help, many of the previous issues can be smoothed over. I'm Mr. Welch. It's time to work on our 10. Ierendi is one of the few nations in the known world with no enemies. It's located 50 miles south of the 5 Shires. It's comprised of one of the 3 island nations of the known world, the other ones being Minrothad and Osland. It is a nation comprised of 2 people, the native Makai and the prisoners brought in by Thyatis decades ago to work the plantations. After Ierendi won its independence through the efforts of both groups working together, the 2 people formed the modern Ierendi. Despite their different backgrounds, the 2 people gradually fully accepted each other and worked for the betterment of their home. Ierendi was first settled by the Makai almost 3,000 years ago, where they lived in relative peace except for clashes with the native lizardmen. During these years, the Ierendi developed their legendary nautical skills. 700 years later, they were conquered, like many of their neighbors, by the Nithian Empire. The Nithians ruled over both the Makai and the lizardmen for centuries, until both the Nithians and the lizardmen suddenly vanished, leaving the Makai in sole possession of their island chain. The islands were further populated decades later by exiled prisoners from the 5 Shires, who became the first non-Makai settlers since the Nithians. A year after those exiles arrived, the Phaeacians invaded and conquered the islands. The native Makai were no match for the swarm of Phaeacian troops. Ierendi became an occupied prison colony where Thyatis dumped its prisoners it no longer wished to take care of. The occupation of Ierendi ended over a century later when the Makai and the prisoners rose up as one and drove off the Phaeacians, creating the modern nation of Ierendi. The islands were further reinforced later by the arrival of the Honor Island wizards, who offered magical protection in exchange for control over an unpopulated volcanic island. Thyatis attempted to retake the island several times, but the combination of Ierendi's ships and Honor Island magic kept the empire at bay. Decades later, the Honor Island wizards commissioned the construction of their fire ships, 9 indestructible ironclads who proved their worth, by annihilating a Phaeacian fleet attempting one last invasion of the island. Ierendi's government stands out as their monarchy is purely ceremonial. The king and queen are selected through a tournament and rule for a year before having to defend their titles in the Tournament of Adventurers again. Despite the titles, the king and queen are not married. In fact, both are allowed to move their families into the royal palace. The monarchs are mainly there for public relations and to welcome foreign dignitaries for formal visits. The actual power is held by the tribunal, a group of branches of government that handle the day-to-day operations. These tribunals are normally operated by powerful families, but if someone is unable or incapable of handling their duties, they're replaced by an appointee agreed upon by the monarchs and the other tribunals. The primary tribunals include agriculture, which supervises hunting and fishing to prevent the depletion of natural resources. It also helps farmers find workers to help with the harvest and provides financial support in case of disaster. The Department of Foreign Affairs handles all trade agreements and treaties with foreign powers, as well as appoints ambassadors as needed. Customs and Assessment is in charge of tax collection and works as a kind of coast guard to track down smugglers. The department is capable of handing out letters of marque, which are supposed to help curtail smugglers. Unfortunately, this leads several privateers to develop loose definitions of the term smuggler, causing some international problems. The Department of Internal Affairs handles all infrastructure issues, mainly fixing up roads and keeping buildings from falling into disrepair. And lastly, the Department of the Military handles the protection of Ierendi. It oversees not just the navy and the small army the nation has, but also maintains the peace through the local constabulary called the Guard. Despite its reputation as being a tropical paradise, Ierendi has one of the most established criminal justice systems in the known world. Many of the Thaetian prisons are still intact, something the islanders take full advantage of. Criminals are brought before tribunals, where their case is heard and judgment is passed if necessary. There is an appeal system, but the odds of getting a verdict overturned are slim, and the court can increase a sentence if it thinks the prisoner is wasting its time. The Guard does have a reputation of asking for a lighter sentence if bribed, but some of the local Guard are completely honest and will charge a suspect with bribery if approached. There's 10 islands in Ierendi, each with their own customs. Ierendi Island is the largest of the islands and is the center of government. It contains the Palace of Ierendi, a coral castle that is used more to entertain guests and tourists than actual government business. The island also contains a number of schools, and all Ierendi children are required to attend public schooling. Since the population of the islands are small, the school is more than enough to handle all the children. This policy does result in Ierendi having the highest literacy rate in the known world. Nearly 100% of its citizens can read and write. The island also has the School of the Arts, the largest bardic college in the known world, where every type of art is taught. Bards and artists from numerous nations flock to Ierendi just to attend this school. Safari Island is the second largest island after Ierendi Island. It is home to numerous tourist attractions for the various nobles and merchants that come to see the beauty of the islands. It has an animal preserve that houses numerous rare species, and tours are arranged for visitors that want to see the various animals. Adventurers are hired to protect the tourists, and a number of druids oversee the animals to make sure they stay healthy. The druids aren't always happy with rare animals being turned into tourist attractions, but the money being brought in is used to help maintain the creatures, so the druids look over the transgressions. For the truly rich, there's Gastineau's World of Adventure, a park designed to recreate dungeons and other hazardous locations. The park has numerous charmed monsters, hired humanoids, and constructs available to serve as challenges to the various nobles paying to play the part of adventurers. The park also pays numerous shape changers to play a variety of roles when needed. Weapons are blunted and magic spells are restricted to illusions, but accidents have been known to happen. These are quietly swept under the rug by park management. Alcove Island is known for being the home of pirates, though that fact is always denied as rumor. In years past, the island was entirely controlled by pirate fleets, but as civilization began arriving on the island, the pirates were pushed further away from the natural bay that is the main attraction of the island. The fact that the island was known for pirates is exploited by local merchants, and many conmen will sell bogus maps to hidden pirate gold. One particular entrepreneur takes advantage of the numerous shipwrecks by placing worthless costume jewelry or painted coins in the area and leading expeditions to them. It's well known that the treasures are worthless, but he does always leave a valuable gem behind to guarantee a steady demand for his tours. There are pirates on parts of the island, but thanks to the Royal Navy and the encroaching settlers, they're having a difficult time staying hidden. Utter Island is a mysterious land of ancient buildings, enigmatic natives, and strange customs. Populated largely by a group of albinos, this group has been part of an Ierendi culture for so long, nobody remembers where they originally came from. The albinos have a strange belief that through the construction of buildings, their souls will find peace in the afterlife. This belief, paired with the low number of albinos, means there are dozens of abandoned buildings that were created and left empty after their builder died. The albinos also build large structures for every possible need, including elaborate grain silos and barns for livestock. They are a private people, only marrying outside their culture to maintain genetic diversity. Despite their unique appearance, it is against the law to harass the albinos, something the Guard does strictly enforce. The albinos are rarely seen during the day, but have superior night vision that allows them to perform their duties at night. Settlers have claimed unoccupied albino buildings, but the albinos can demand those buildings back without notice, something that the Ierendi Guard will enforce. White Island is one of the 2 forbidden islands in Ierendi. The island is cursed, with incurable madness befalling anyone who sets foot on the island after a few hours. The island is populated by around 100 insane monks who chant in an unknown language that even magic can't translate. There is also a large population of white apes and doves who also seem to be connected to the land by the magic. The Ierendi Navy has a permanent presence around the island to prevent ships from approaching. Anyone who shipwrecks on the island can attempt to swim out to the waiting naval vessels, as they will not approach the island due to the risk of madness under any circumstances. Royster Island is at the southern tip of the archipelago, populated almost entirely by Makai. It is known for being uncomfortably hot in the summer months and plagued by swarms of mosquitoes for most of the year. The island's population has actually created several spells designed specifically to deal with the flying pest. The mosquitoes, called Mau Mau in the Ierendi tongue, carry numerous tropical diseases and are a constant threat to the islanders. Makai who harvest rare plants from the swamps have to wear full protective body clothing to avoid the Mau Mau. The island is also known for the excellent fishing in the area, and charter boats are a profitable business for the local Makai. Aloysius Island is a source of conflict in Ierendi for a variety of reasons. First, it serves as the nation's prison. There aren't any actual walls, but prisoners stuck on an island with no hope of rescue don't have a lot to look forward to. Naval vessels patrol the coast, making prison breaks all but impossible. Another problem is the recent discovery of gold and silver on the island that have caused dwarves to flock to it. The sudden influx of dwarves has caused problems with the prisoners due to the miner camps springing up all over the island. The prisoners suffer from tropical diseases, while the dwarves are much more resistant. The local Makai are being pushed off Aloysius Island because of the increased migration, while the prisoners and miners are at odds over the decreasing space on the island. Elegy Island serves as the nation's cemetery, though it does have a fairly large population of farmers and sheep herders. The island is self-sufficient, but other than farming and sheep, it has no strategic value. The island lacks the natural beauty of the rest of the nation, meaning tourism is limited. The population is entirely Makai, who are happy with the fact their island is considered ugly by outsiders. The island is the traditional burial ground for the Makai people, and their graveyard takes up most of the island. The graves consist of both traditional graves as well as cave burials. The entire island is considered hallowed ground, and there's never been a case of an undead uprising. The graveyard is watched over by a mysterious caretaker named Jamie Honeycreeper Ahua. It is not known whether he is a benevolent undead creature, a timeless shaman, or something more, but Ahua has guarded the cemetery for longer than anyone can remember. There's numerous legends about Ahua, that he guards sacred Makai artifacts, that he was young when the nation was founded centuries ago, or that he only appears when graves are disturbed. What is known is he tends to the cemetery, but no one has ever spoken to him, or how even people know his name, but he is known by all the islanders regardless. Fletcher Island is known for its large bird population, as well as a thriving agricultural industry. The island produces numerous luxury items from the natural environment, including down mattresses, clear crystals that can start fires when exposed to sunlight, and a large selection of foods like olives and wines. Because the island was created by a long-dormant volcano, most of its population lives in caves created by the lava flows. Other people find the living arrangements unusual, but it's completely normal for the Fletcherites. Of special note is the creature known as Mr. Cork. He owns an estate where he stages elaborate recreations of tourist fantasies for a price. Okay, this is where Ierendi has aged very badly. Mr. Cork is obviously a reference to Fantasy Island. There's even a Magnum PI version represented by the investigator Magnus, complete with a red chariot and a butler named Iggins. If you want to use Mr. Cork, change him to an Archfey to explain his powers. Just replace the name if you want to. The pop culture references are going to be lost on newer players, and older players are just going to roll their eyes. Honor Island is one of the most famous islands in all of Ierendi, home to the fire wizards. This is where the dreaded fire ships came from. This is also one of the biggest sources of visitors from the Plane of Fire. Honor Island is actually an independent nation that is allied with Ierendi. Honor Island provides military support. In exchange, Ierendi provides them with food and keeps unwanted visitors away. This is where part of the lore breaks down, because as written, Honor Island and Ierendi are distant friends at best. But for 300 years, these two nations have shared mutual defense, traded with each other, have no territorial disputes, and have even shared in the tourist trade. Two nations that close and having no external issues for that long are going to grow closer together rather than camping on centuries of mistrust. Honor Island does its best to study the element of fire, and even brings in tourists from the Plane of Fire. The fact that Ierendi has special tours for those same tourists tells me that these two nations coordinate on an almost casual basis. That's always bugged me as a continuity error. Ierendi stands out as one of the only nations that doesn't have internal threats, the government is competently run, and there's no threat to them abroad. There's nothing wrong with a peaceful nation with no conflicts. While it does limit your possible adventures in the islands, there's no room for a lost temple of ultimate darkness on an island where everybody knows everybody. It also lets you use it as a hub for other adventurers. The island provides for a lot of background options for characters. Bards will flock to the nation because of its bardic college. The Adventurers Club is a guild comprised of different classes that perform various charitable acts in exchange for always having a place to call home. There's tons of mysteries and intrigue in Ierendi. It's just hidden away in merchant stalls or at the bottom of the ocean. More people will visit Ierendi than you will find Ierendi natives abroad. The native islanders are split between the descendants of the prisoners and the native Makai. Both groups have largely interbred with each other over the centuries, and they're considered one people now. The Ierendi language is spoken by everyone there regardless of ancestry. They're a welcoming people, but few migrate to Ierendi because of the limited space available, and because of the storms and the heat. There's a few Makai natives that still believe in the old ways before the Thaiatians came, and they perform ancient ceremonies and dances from that period. These Makai are viewed with some curiosity, though they take their customs very seriously. Ierendi is a nation that does need some updating. It's been criticized since its release that it relied too heavily on pop culture references that have aged badly. The nation itself has a lot of possibility, hidden pirates, sunken treasures, and of course tons of parties to crash. It just needs a little tweaking to update it. I am closing in on 5,000 subscribers. I'm not quite big time yet, but I'm definitely getting there. So please like and subscribe so I can finally get this setting the attention it deserves. Next up is the Elves of Alfheim, one of the most defining setting books in Mystara. But until then, isn't it nice to live on an island with no large cities? Welcome to Mystara with another remaster as I get rid of some old shames with some new fresh shames. This time I'm doing the Elves of Alfheim, the 5th Gazetteer written in 1988 by Steve Perrin and Anders Svensson. Get ready for some hot elf-on-elf action, as well as one of the beefier books in terms of new material and background information. And just a few short years after this book came out, TSR destroyed the entire nation and there was nothing the players can do about it. A lot of people still sore over that one. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to sharpen those ears. Written in 1998 by Steve Perrin of RuneQuest fame and Anders Svensson, also of RuneQuest fame, Alfheim is the elfiest elfland that ever elfed an elf. Seriously, if there was more of a combination of elf tropes in one book, I haven't found it. The cover is classic Caldwell, naturally, with the usual 3 characters gracing it, though it does continue the style of pants being a human-only thing, as none of the elves seem to sport them at all. Of special note is the dark-skinned elf that was supposed to be a shadow elf, despite their appearance being confirmed with pale skin. Word of God said that this was a miscommunication between Caldwell and the author. The book does return to the 96-page format that Glantri started, after briefly going back to the 64-page format in Ierendi. However, it doesn't split into the DM and player sections just yet. The story of Alfheim, like most of Mystara, starts with Blackmoor, because of course just about every ancient story in Mystara starts off with a huge explosion. Alfheim does fill in a large chunk of the Blackmoor story regarding the Great Rain of Fire, so that is a major plus. The original elven homeland was in Grunland, which is now called Vulcania, part of the southern Arctic region. The elves were closely allied with Blackmoor, except a small faction that thought up giving the elven ways for the new cool technological toys was a bad thing. These elves, led by their future patron immortal Ilsendal, decided to leave Grunland and start their own elfland. Then Blackmoor blew up. Grunland got shifted to the bottom of the planet, and everybody else generally had a really bad day. Other elves that survived decided to stay, and little is known about them, though the Belkades elves said their ancestors hung around for another 3 centuries trying to make it work, then headed north as well. The elves that remained, that stayed true to the Blackmoor way of life, were preserved in the Hollow World before they froze to death, trapped as the Blacklore elves forever afterwards. The elves finally made it to the northern part of Brune and settled in a land they called the Sylvan Realm. There were conflicts with the humans who felt the elves had something to do with the Great Rain of Fire, but the elves stayed to themselves, and there was peace for a while. Eventually the elves started to run out of space, and rather than fight the humans in the surrounding lands for territory, they sent a large portion of the population through magical portals to find another homeland. Here they arrived in what would become Thaiatis in several hundred years, and started migrating to the future Alfheim. Several tribes split off from the main group, settling in various regions of Karameikos, Thaiatis, Glantri, and Windar, though the majority stayed with the main group. Arriving in the arid steppes of future Darokin, the elves asked for, and were given, land to settle by the humans who thought nobody could survive in the barren steppes. Fully expecting the elves to starve to death, humans left them alone to do their own thing, which is exactly what the elves proceeded to do. Only being elves, they couldn't help but enrich their own lives by ruining someone else's. In this case, they used powerful weather magic to steal the rain that was normally destined for the Nithian Empire. The extra water, coupled with elven magic, allowed the elves to create the magical Canalbarth forest, all the while Nithia and later Ylaruam turned into a blasted desert from a once green and verdant plain. The Nithians sent an expedition to figure out where all the hell their water was going, but this expedition was destroyed by elven magics. Within 3 centuries, the Nithian Empire was erased for history by the Immortals for a host of sins that are covered in the Nithian Empire video. Alfheim flourished after the fall of Nithia, as they could steal all the water away from the fallen empire and nobody could stop them. The great forest prospered, and soon the Canalbarth was fully grown. An evil wizard conquered the Sylvan realms far to the south, and Alfheim took in the few survivors before they had to cut off the magical portals to their former homeland. With the arrival of Clan Filiadil, the Alfheim clans were complete, though Clan Ierendi splintered 100 years later and large portions of the clan relocated to Glantri. The elven population of Alfheim is broken into 7 major clans, with multiple unnamed smaller clans that don't make up a noticeable part of the population. Elves view their clan as more important than their family, for the simple reason that children are rare in Alfheim. There are typically less than 10 toddlers in a clan at any given time. Add to the fact that elven children nurse until they're at least 3 years old, and probably spend a decade in the Terrible Twos, there's a reason why elves developed birth control about the same time they mastered fire. Children are raised by the clan rather than the parents, because children are vital to a clan and everyone has to chip in to help rear the child. Clan Chosim are the merchants of Alfheim. They were largely responsible for the creation of Alfheim town, and are even now pushing for merchant routes to the north, east, and west of Alfheim to increase the amount of elven goods in foreign markets. They are the friendliest of clans, but the other clans view them as regressive due to their time in Grunland, when those elves grew too close to the elven ways and were destroyed. Clan Ierendi is the ruling clan, led by King Doriath. They are the relatives of Clan Arwen and Glantri, who relocated there because of its strong magic centuries ago. Unlike other schisms, the 2 clans are relatively close politically, and Arwen's loyalty to Glantri is often questioned. Ierendi is known for its craftsmen, who sell their creations for high prices to the merchants of Darokin. Other crafters from all over the known world come to learn the elven method, which does make Ierendi one of the richer clans. Clan Filiadil is the most recent clan, arriving as refugees from the fall of the Sylvan realms. Because of this, they are rather distrustful of outsiders, and are known to have a chip on their shoulder because of the guilt they feel for being defeated by the wizard Morcroft. They have the largest percentage of adventurers, as the clan seems to feel it needs to prove its bravery. They get along with dwarves more than other clans, but they don't trust humans at all except for druids. Clan Grunolf maintains the forest, and represents the best trackers, woodsmen, and boatsmen Alfheim has to offer. They also have the most experience with the Shadow Elves, having been on the receiving end of the Shadow Elf invasion over 400 years ago. Grunolf elves are known for their over-the-top boasting. They love to try and outdo one another given a chance. Because of their skill with the outdoors, Grunolf produces some of the best tree keepers found in Alfheim, one of their few traits they don't openly brag about. Clan Longrunner is the most insular of all the clans, having nothing to do with the outside races, and they even distrust elves outside the borders of Alfheim. They are almost primitive in appearance, preferring leather for their armor and maintaining ancient elven clothing and makeup. The clan leadership does make exceptions for human wizards and druids to help maintain the forest and control the monsters that emerge from the bad magic spot of Stalkbrow. The clan makes extensive use of a use name, or a name they give themselves to keep their actual name secret from outsiders. Even the actual name of the clan in Elven is secret. Longrunner is just the name used by outsiders. They will change their use name over time as their interests change. It's not uncommon for a member of the clan to have several names. The clan is also stolen straight from ElfQuest, with Cutter and Lita representing the clan leaders, only quite a bit taller, and possessing the ability to grow awesome stashes. Well, not Lita. Still, if you're going to steal, steal from the best. Clan Mialadil is the most conservative of all the clans, tracing their heritage back to Alfheim's founder, Meliadin Red Arrow. They also serve as the archivists and historians of the elves, possessing books and scrolls reportedly going all the way back to the time of Blackmoor. They base their decisions off of those of Mialadin, claiming his wisdom still holds true today. They venerate their patron immortal and still dress in ways that were common back when he was still immortal. While they possessed a vast knowledge of the history of the known world, they're also loath to share it with anyone outside their own clan. Clan Red Arrow is the military of Alfheim. They have the distinction of being the most internally ambiguous, as they are not fans of other races and nations, but they're fascinated by their military and tactics. They were once part of Clan Mialadin, serving as elite guards of the then king, but after repelling multiple invasions, their mentality had changed enough to make them their own clan. They located themselves near the largest Darokin settlement at the time of the clan's founding, and have been at the front of every major invasion into Alfheim since. Their clan leaders want to remove Alfheim town, viewing it as a strategic weakness. He has been overruled constantly as his vision for Alfheim would cripple the nation economically. Being populated by elves, Alfheim is an incredibly magical place. The trees that make up the forest were created by altering existing trees into the enormous sentinel and home trees. Sentinel trees loom above the forest, standing hundreds of feet high and used by the elves as lookout posts for possible dangers. The wood is also quite hard and used in building materials when possible. Home trees possess an oversized gall which can provide a home for up to 20 elves. The elves turn these galls into comfortable homes or use them for other reasons. With the exception of Alfheim town, all elven towns are found above ground, with ladders and bridges connecting the home and sentinel trees. This makes the elven towns all but impervious to assault, as even fire is of little use against the magic of the sentinel and the home trees. Elves have mastered powerful magics that they call their own, turning normal druidic spells into arcane spells for their own use. It's not a matter of just finding a scroll and learning an elven spell. You have to be taught by an elf personally. The higher level spells can only be learned inside of Alfheim or another elven kingdom, as they're far too complicated for just a single elf to teach. The spells are largely of a nature theme, though the tree keepers do have a large amount of melee and touch spells, as they possess superior fighting abilities compared to other wizards of similar levels. Elves are not the only creatures native to Alfheim. Vast numbers of sylvan creatures such as treants, Hasau, and centaurs populate the lower regions of the forest. Many of these races helped create Alfheim at the very beginning of the nation. Alfheim also serves as the primary portal to the Good Kingdom, the land of the Fae connected entirely in the dimension of Fairy. While there are numerous portals from the Good Kingdom to the Prime Material Plane, none are more important than the one found in Dreamland, a good magic spot in southwestern Alfheim. While the Fae swear no allegiance to King Doriath, it is in their best interest to maintain the peace outside of the Candlebarth Forest. There is no more strange citizen inside of Alfheim than the Orcs of the Orc Quarter in Alfheim town. Survivors of a defeated Orc invasion over a decade ago, some of the Orc prisoners assimilated into Elven culture and now work as physical laborers. While they're a strange sight, the Elves are protective of them, considering them part of Alfheim culture and won't let outsiders harass them. The largest town in Alfheim was founded on the site of an ancient battle that left the land barren and lifeless. Rather than let the field go to waste, the Elves created Alfheim town, where foreign traders are welcome and embassies were established. It's not the capital. The clans actually meet in Elamir, home of King Doriath, but Alfheim town is the largest city in Alfheim, dwarfing the clan holds in size. Here the Elves sell their wares, and merchants come to unload foreign cargoes. Alfheim town is run largely by Clan Chosim, though the profits from the various taxes are distributed to help all of the clans. If you're not an elf, you are restricted to Alfheim town, as visiting other portions of the nation are by invitation only. Sylvan and Fey creatures aren't uncommon in Alfheim town, visiting more out of curiosity than anything else. Even Archfey have been known to visit the trading post, especially on holidays or cultural events. The entire nation is built around the Elven Tree of Life, a powerful artifact that is possessed by every major clan. All of the trees were created as avatars of the elven patron Ilsendal and given to the original clans that founded Alfheim. Only Clan Theodil's tree is different. It was a cutting from the original tree in the Sylvan land. The trees are cared for by the elven wizards known as Tree Keepers, who have mastered several druidic spells to help them with this task. Because of their sworn task, Tree Keepers rarely adventure and tend to be lower levels than other elves with the same amount of experience. Their one advantage is the unique spells open to them, mostly for the care and defense of the Trees of Life. The Tree Keepers are the ones that create special elven artifacts from the bark and leaves of the Trees of Life, some of the most sacred possessions that the Sylvan Elves can earn. Crafting these artifacts take decades, and awarding them are a major event in Alfheim. Visitors will find the Sylvan Elves highly pragmatic in the ruling of their nation. Punishments for outsiders are largely restricted to exile or death, as they have no prison and they have little need for foreign coin from offenders. Elves will not think twice about using magic to garner the information from suspects or witnesses. Resisting mental interrogation is considered suspicious and will be used against you. Alfheim uses Darokin for governmental roles they find beneath them, such as creating currency or maintaining the roads into Alfheim town. While Darokin is Alfheim's closest ally, the Elves only assist their neighbor in times of great danger, believing everything outside their borders is a human problem. So why do you want to play a Sylvan Elf from Alfheim? They're known for their arrogance, they care little for outsiders, many of them are distrustful of visitors, and a few of them even dislike elves of other clans. However, the various clans have their own unique traits, giving players a variety of options to play an Alfheim elf. The lack of a monolithic culture among the elves mean you can have a party of elves and all of them have a different approach to life. While a character is never tied to the background of his culture, at least partially keeping with the stereotype of their clan, gives them something to build around. A militant Red Arrow elf, a mercantile Chosim, and arcane Meliadil might all have different approaches to the same problem, but they're all loyal to Alfheim first. Finding a physical copy of Elves of Alfheim isn't cheap. With the map, you're looking at around $60 on average, and the map is difficult to acquire in the first place. There's no DM's Guild version in print, and only a PDF for $5. Other books dealing with Alfheim include Tall Tales of the Wee Folk and the module Tree of Life, both of which are also hard to track down as originals, though Tree of Life is on POD. Next up on the list of remasters is the Dwarves of Rockhome, who are some of the dwarfiest dwarves to ever dwarf a dwarf. But until then, remember, if the elf is rolling badly, it doesn't mean you need to water him. In a time where everybody is trying to reinvent fantasy races, it makes sense that the Dwarves of Rockhome are the personification of the dwarven stereotype. Here you find magic-resistant subterranean miners with a penchant for artifice and complex social lives. This remastered video is taking you to the dwarfiest of dwarf settings, Rockhome, where even the beards have beards. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and hi-ho, it's off to war we go. Hi-ho. The Dwarves of Rockhome was written in 1988 by the late great Aaron Alston. Clive Caldwell, of course, does the art, and this is the only Mystara cover without a woman on the cover. At least we think so. These are dwarves, after all. Stephen Fabian did the interior art, so any resemblance to Ravenloft is intentional. Seriously, some of the interior art looks like the start of a horror movie. The book is 96 pages, and while it's divided between player and DM section, the books aren't separate yet. Rockhome is one of the oldest nations in Mystara, coming into existence in 1400 BC after the immortal Cagiar created the Rockborn Dwarves, after he had to remove the Kogalor Dwarves to the Hollow World thanks to the radiation from the Great Rain of Fire. He changed the area into what would be Rockhome, and then created new dwarves to populate it. The dwarves, being happy in their way, just stayed in the region until King Dinwar finds the great cavern that would be the city of Dingar, and crowns himself the first dwarven king. He then disappears on an expedition to the lower caverns, leading to the rise of King Everast I, first of his line. The dwarves spread out below the surface, and the nation comes into its own. Rockhome is located in the northeastern part of the known world, surrounded by multiple nations, including Darokin, Ethengar, Ylaruam, Vestland, and Solderfjord. There's two parts to Rockhome, the heavily populated underground and the sparsely populated surface. Every major town in Rockhome has a surface section, but without exception the dwarves largely live underground. This means the surface towns tend to have a larger population of other races than dwarves, as long as the humans, gnomes, and miscellaneous other races behave themselves and, of course, pay their taxes. Internationally, the dwarves have a large list of friends and enemies, depending on if they stay in their own nation or not. The dwarves maintain good relations with their immediate neighbors, as they pride themselves on their mercantile prowess. Dwarven goods are always in demand, despite their higher prices. Their proud dwarven culture and religious beliefs make them natural allies of Ylaruam and Ethengar. Their constant wars with the humanoids, both above and below ground, make them close to the nearby northern reaches. The problem Rockhome has is its annoying habit of claiming every large mineral find as their own. They will swarm an area that discovers a payload of precious metals, ignoring local laws as the dwarves descend to clean the area out. This has led them to open conflict in the Five Shires and Glantri, and is straining relations currently with Ierendi because of the increasing presence on that island nation. Dwarves will pursue their love of gold and gems across the continent, resulting in their race spreading out across the planet from Rockhome over the centuries. Dwarven cities in Rockhome tend to look the same because dwarven architecture hasn't changed in centuries. They are creatures of tradition. If a building design is considered optimal, it will be used across the nation. Entire city blocks will be duplicated from city to city. It's actually easy to get around in the towns and settlements of Rockhome because they're laid out identically, with only the individual contents of the buildings changing. A residential block will have the same number of houses in it, the same as a commercial block or even a city park. Everything is built the same, and the blocks are the same dimensions with few exceptions in every city. Rockhome is not a welcoming nation. They love merchants and the gold they bring in, but it's not a tourist attraction by any standards. The underground cities are built to dwarven proportions, and since the dwarves have infravision, are often poorly lit. Taller creatures find the cities claustrophobic, as unlike the Hen of the Shires, dwarves do not make human-sized accommodations for visitors below ground. Food and drink are almost always of dwarven origin, they consider their alcohol superior to other races, and have no need of imports. Visitors to the underground cities often get the feeling that they are unwanted, and in the case of many of the dwarven clans, they are. Rockhome is famous for being self-contained. The nation can grow its own food in large caverns in the form of fungal forests. Multiple rivers run above and below ground, giving the dwarves an unlimited source of water. Entrance into the nation above ground is through narrow passes that are guarded by unassailable fortresses. Over the centuries, the dwarves have had periods of isolationism where they closed themselves off completely, depending on the whims of the current king. While the kingdom has been open for several hundred years currently, Rockhome still has a reputation for standoffishness. The dwarves do have a sizable presence above ground despite what other races think. While the vast majority live underground and never see the sky in their long lives, a fraction live as merchants, farmers, and soldiers in the towns and forts that dot the surface. Of special note is the farmers of Clan Weirwolf, who provide the large amounts of food for the nation. While the dwarves can survive on the fungal forests in their caverns, the Weirwolf grow all sorts of grains and raise various livestock that the dwarves prefer for food. While there's little glory in growing crops and raising cattle, it is a vital enough service that it elevated the farmers to clan status. The dwarves hold the distinction of being the most technologically advanced nation in the known world. Unlike the fanciful magitech of Alphatia or Glantri, Rockhome dwarves create practical and industrial strength inventions. Their ability to craft magitech without wizards is a secret that the dwarven folk guard with their lives. They are loath to part with many of their inventions. It takes a king's ransom to get the dwarves to sell just a single one. Emperor Julian XI turned over 100 tons of gold to the dwarves to have them modernize his war machines with their finest engineers. Darokin, a few decades ago, spent a full 10% of the nation's yearly GDP for the secret of the printing press, which allowed the nation to standardize its certified letters of credit. This has repaid Darokin several times over with the profit generated since. Most dwarven inventions will never see the eyes of outsiders, or aren't even recognized by those who see them in action. An elaborate set of dams and locks allow multiple rivers to flow from Lakes Clintest and Stall, providing the cities downstream from the water sources not just fresh water, but hydraulic power as well. Complex ventilation systems pump fresh air into the underground cities and even provide air and cooling to the various residences and businesses. Elevators powered by pneumatic tubings raise and lower entire caravans for trading purposes. To other nations, these inventions would be national treasures, but to the dwarves, they just consider them part of their everyday life. More fantastical inventions for the dwarves include an underground train network which transports ore and minerals from the mines to the factories. The dwarves also have a fleet of stone ships which can pass through rock like it was water. These are national treasures and only used in emergencies. Other inventions include drilling presses, giant cranes, and rapid-fire war machines that guard the mountain passes. Unlike other nations that employ large amounts of magitech, Rockhome doesn't create a lot of items for personal convenience. Dwarves have little need for magical dishwashers or washing machines, especially since they can do the work themselves. Labor-saving devices are lost on the workaholic dwarves. Dwarven culture is all about productivity. A dwarf incapable of work isn't considered a real dwarf. Even dwarves that have been crippled by accidents or hobbled by age will find something that they are capable of working on. A punishment unique to dwarves is forced inactivity, a period of time where the dwarf is not allowed to create anything. Other races find this strange, but the dwarves consider it to be one of the more sadistic punishments. Even when dwarves have leisure time, they find ways to be productive. Many dwarves will actually get more work done on their day off than scheduled work days. The reason for this is dwarven social clubs. As they are a highly social race, they find comfort in surrounding themselves with like-minded dwarves. Because of this, the dwarves will get together for any and all possible hobbies. There are numerous clubs formed around subjects like sports, history, songs, or even cooking. They are given overly grandiose names like the Poor Society of Northern Bakers or the Eclectic Conglomerate of Underappreciated Duckpin Experts. These names are a source of amusement for the dwarves, much to the confusion of visitors who don't understand dwarven humor. Most dwarves will be members of at least 3 guilds, though they rarely have time for more than 6 memberships. Some of the groups can grow to be problematic, especially groups targeted to antagonize others. A dwarven group calling themselves the Thorns, or a thorn in the size of those pesky elves, are devoted to causing trouble just in Alfheim. They are a source of constant embarrassment to Rockhome, though their antics are never more than just petty vandalism. They will openly mock any elf they can see, but they have been known to try to sneak into Alfheim to make pests of themselves before returning. They have been kicked out of the Elven Kingdom numerous times, and Rockhome punishes them appropriately, but their burning dislike of elves mean that they are always ready for another go at their chosen target. Oddly enough, the rivalry only seems to go one way. The elves don't hold a grudge against the Thorns, only punishing them when they are caught. The dwarves are divided into clans based on their birth. Changing clans is possible, but difficult, and typically only happens when a dwarf gets married. The clans determine the profession of each dwarf, though there is a little wiggle room in some cases. The militant clan Torcrist is not going to turn away a dwarf who wants to become a cleric, and the farming clan Weirwolf welcomes merchants into their ranks to help sell the large amount of food they produce. If a member of a clan is set on changing clans, the clan chiefs will often set up an exchange where two dwarves, each wanting to change their position, are released into their new clan, easing tensions between the dwarves. Clan Beauredar is a theocratic clan that goes back 2,000 years to the struggles between the dwarves and the orcs over the rulership of the lands. Originally called the Order of Golden Battle, or Burad Hrodar, in the Dwarven tongue, the clan helped defeat the orcs at a great cost in lives. The few survivors after the victory began to rebuild their numbers, eventually ending up as a powerful family that fully embraced the worship of Kaggiar. While the clan is not all clerics, it does possess the largest number of them by far. They are a powerful clan and a strong backer to King Everast. As long as he promotes the worship of Kaggiar among the dwarves, they will remain his ally. King Everast is the ruling clan of Rockhome. They claimed the first dwarf to support King Dinwarf at the creation of Rockhome was an Everast. From that point, the clan has sat on the throne for longer than all the other clans combined. They have a large number of their clan in governmental positions, though not one of them has earned their position through nepotism. Rockhome is a pure meritocracy. Every Everast in charge of a governmental agency earned the position because of talent rather than a blood relation. The family also has a disproportionate number of artisans in their number, and are strong proponents of keeping the borders open. You can't be diplomats and isolationists at the same time. This is a firm belief of the Everast line of kings, and it hasn't changed in over 1,000 years. Clan Herwarf is comprised by dwarves not unified by blood like other clans, but instead by belief. In this case, the belief is isolationism. They want the borders closed and the trade stopped. Dwarves are already self-sufficient, and trade with outsiders invites change into society. And change is not a dwarven trait. The majority aren't angry or bitter. They're still dwarves and follow dwarven traditions. They just believe that Rockhome doesn't need the help of outsiders, and that dealing with the politics of humans is inviting trouble. There are a few members of Herwarf that want immediate change and are willing to depose King Everast to get it. These dwarves are called the Repossessed, and claim to re-establish long-abandoned mines in former Rockhome colonies like the Shires or the Northern Reaches. In reality, they're planning a coup against Everast and using the money gained from the reclaimed mines to hire mercenaries and assassins. Skarad clan is one of the most prestigious clans in all of Rockhome, being comprised largely of engineers and architects. These are the dwarves that design and manufacture the elaborate technological marvels Rockhome produces. They are masters of the art of dwarven artifice, able to create magical devices somehow without arcane magic of their own. They are known to be workaholics, even by the lofty dwarven standards of production. To them, the to-do list is a religious script. The clan has vast political power and is one of the wealthiest clans in the entire nation, but they don't use their power or their wealth to gain favor. They know they have the power if needed, and the other clans are very aware of this, so Skarad doesn't need to throw its weight around. Circlist clan are the miners, craftsmen, and smiths of Rockhome. They work the mines, shape the ores, and sell the goods. Every clan needs them to move goods across the nation and beyond, and without the mine, the nations collapse. This gives Circlist both wealth and power, something they don't take advantage of unless pressed. Outside of Rockhome, this is the clan that most people are familiar with, which only increases their prestige. Circlist is the staunchest foe of Herwarf clan, as isolationism would be the ruin of Circlist. Torcrist is one of the oldest clans and represents the military of Rockhome. They date back to the days of King Dinwarf, when their founder acted as one of his generals in the wars against the orcs. While Torcrist does not comprise the entirety of the military, they do occupy most of the positions of leadership within it. The Rockhome army is already formidable. A fortified dwarven army is largely considered unassailable by military strategists. The Torcrist mean to maintain that reputation, and will use any excursion on the surface by humanoids or other hostiles as a reason to mobilize. While Rockhome is surrounded by allies, and the dwarves have no interest in expansion, the Torcrist are always looking for a battle. The clan is utterly loyal to King Everast. Right now, their biggest target is Glantri. Ethengar pays handsomely for dwarven mercenaries, though actual conflict with Glantri is unlikely. Werwarf clan is the poorest and least respected of all the dwarven clans, consisting primarily of farmers. It's telling in dwarven society that farmers are held in less regard than criminals. While the rest of the nation might not appreciate the efforts of the Werwarf, they have to grudgingly admit that without them the nation wouldn't be able to feed itself. Werwarf has more members above ground than any other clan, running the surface farms located deep in the valleys of Rockhome. The Werwarf have had to prove their power in the past. When Clan Torcrist threatened to disband the clan of farmers, they responded by delaying food shipments to the military for a week. Torcrist immediately relented, but never forgave the Werwarf. The other clans are, at best, neutral to Werwarf, who are beneath notice for most of them, which is, frankly, the way the farmers prefer it. Dwarves are known for their slow acceptance of new ideas, and their rampant adaptation of them once the idea is assimilated into their culture. They took the concept of writing from the Elves reluctantly, but once their written language was finalized, they created mechanical means to reproduce written works quickly. Where elves have libraries filled with numerous scrolls, the dwarves have row upon row of printed books, each one stored in a highly regimented system created by their lore masters and librarians. It takes the dwarves a while to determine if an idea is a good idea, but once they've accepted it, they embrace it without reservations. Oftentimes they will create competing devices to facilitate the advancement, and the best machine will be the one that the dwarves mass produce. The surface of Rockhome is considered a wild and untamed wilderness, with only a few roads leading into the nation. The dwarves don't care as much about their surface territory as their underground areas, so they leave areas outside of the above-ground cities alone. There are humanoids found in Rockhome, but they are a favorite target of the military who will use them to keep their skills sharp, meaning humanoids keep well away from dwarven settlements. Most intelligent monsters also stay far away from dwarven towns, lest they be hunted down for target practice. The exception are the mountain giants, who are on quite friendly terms with the dwarves and have long been allies of Rockhome. The mountain giants make their homes near the tops of mountains, and often work for the dwarves as either laborers or mercenaries as the situation needs it. As the giants have no use for the underground cities of the dwarves, and the dwarves don't venture into the peaks, the two races have developed a beneficial symbiotic relationship. Mountain giants are common sights in dwarven armies when they have to go to battle, serving as living battering rams or trebuchets. The dwarves do have a secret to their vast wealth, and that is their use of magical transportation to open up the inner planes for mining. An artifact known as the planar drill allows the dwarves to venture briefly into other planes to mine all available metals and gems they can find before returning to Mystara. These operations are usually done under heavy guard, as the denizens of the planes of earth or minerals aren't keen on these sudden strip mining operations. The planar drill can also reach the outer planes with great difficulty, or even other worlds like Kryn or Orth, though those are usually avoided because the gods of those worlds don't appreciate outsiders stealing their wealth. But since Rockhome believes all metals and gems are theirs, they will take the chance if the profit is high enough. Rockhome does not hate all wizards despite that commonly held reputation. They despise Glantrian wizards, certainly, but a spellcaster walking into Rockhome isn't signing his own death certificate. While the dwarves have no need for arcane magic themselves, and their resistance to it is legendary, they recognize it as a tool. Wizards can find employment among dwarves if their magic can help with one of the numerous projects. These terms of employment are almost always on an individual basis, and the employment is rarely long-term. Rockhome has a strong love of clerical magic. While the nation is monotheistic in its worship of Kaggiar, they respect other immortals and welcome their clerics. Druids are informally welcomed in Rockhome, as they have no official standing, but as long as they help maintain the wilderness above ground, the dwarves leave them to do their own thing. Bards are embraced by the dwarves, who love to hear tales of old, especially regarding past dwarven battles and achievements. Most bards find the dwarven taste for entertainment dry, but the large amount of gold the dwarves toss at them help them get over their hesitation. So why do you want to play a Rockhome dwarf? They have reputations for being sticks in the mud. They're pragmatic to a fault and hard to convince at the best of times. Their innate greed can cause a lot of problems when it comes to dividing up the treasure, and their reputation abroad isn't the best. The dwarves do represent the most technologically advanced nation in all of Mystara. They are also highly educated and loyal to a fault. But dwarves will open up to their friends, and they always love a good yarn or a stiff drink. Rockhome dwarves are an acquired taste. They come across as stern and standoffish, but once they've earned someone's friendship, you have a friend for life. Okay, moving on to the next video, we're going a Viking with the 7th Gazetteer, the Northern Reaches. Get ready for runes, longships, and mead as we take on 3 nations at once. But until then, remember, nobody tosses a dwarf. Lo, Gjordeg Sermin far. Lo, Gjordeg Segmin mor, mina sostre, og mina brodre. Lor, Gjordeg jeg ser ledningen av mitt volk tilbake til Abegenje. Lo, de kaller til meg. De ber meg tar mitt sted på Asgard, in Halina av Valhalla. Havor din modege kan leve forevig. I hope I pronounced that as closely as possible, because I really don't want to have to go back to 1298 and have Skelga, Helfde, Ranulf, and Leonard walk me through the phonetic pronunciation again. As you might have figured, this is the remastered guide to the Northern Reaches, comprised of Vestland, Ostland, and the Solderford Jordons, or Westland, Eastland, and South Fjord for people who know the slightest bit of Swedish. I'm Mr. Welch, and we're going a Viking. Northern Reaches was written in 1988 by Ken Ralston and Elizabeth Danforth, with the classic Caldwell art. It was the first Mystara Gazetteer that split the book between players and DM's guide. It also included a cardboard section that you could cut out and turn into a Viking village, which is quite rare today because cardboard isn't the sturdiest of materials as you can imagine after 30 years. It had an optional system of personal traits that helped you to find your characters further, though it wasn't well received and was never used again. The Northern Reaches have long been a problem for Mystara and Dungeon Masters because of the numerous contradictions and having to explain where the Norse pantheon suddenly came from when every other immortal was created specifically for Mystara. But here you'll find Odin, Thor, Hel, Loki, and the rest. They have been retconned heavily to fit in the Mystaran mythology, with the latest Great Barrier explanation finally settling on the Norse immortals being reincarnated avatars from gods that tried to get through the barrier while it was still being formed. Odin of Mystara was caused directly by the god Odin, but now they're separate entities after the barrier was completed. There's a few other contradictions, like the Nithian Empire invading the Northlands and getting turned back by wild gnolls, despite the Nithians being the creators of gnolls and every other bit of Mystara history. So ignore the part about the gnolls being in the Reaches before the Nithians got there. The Northmen arrived in what would be the Reaches about 2000 BC with the receding glacier ice. They settled down in the fertile valleys where they thrived until the Nithians noticed how much food they were growing and fun they were having and promptly invaded. The Northmen were considered a backwards people at the time, still in the Bronze Age. They did have a unique form of magic in the runes, something the Nithians did their best to eliminate during their centuries of occupation. The Nithians introduced traditional magics to the Reaches, but once they disappeared, the Northmen turned away from arcane magic, though fortunately various followers of the Aesir preserved the runes for their people. The Reaches have the largest amount of demi-human and humanoid populations of any of the human-settled nations. Dwarves are the most common demi-human, and are welcome additions to any settlement. Only the cursed Modrigswork dwarves aren't welcomed by the Northmen, but the nature of their curse means they can't leave their lairs high in the mountains. The gnomes occupied a section of the mountains that they called the nation of Falun, but were driven out after being first enslaved by the Nithians and then later attacked by kobolds and other humanoids. There was a large number of gnomes still living on the surface, but they longed to return to the caves of their lost homeland. Elves are rare, with legends of the Schattenalfen still lingering, though none have been seen in living memory. Only the Hin are considered strangers to the Northern Reaches, as they are not fond of the mountainous terrain. The mountains of the Reaches are filled with kobolds, trolls, gnolls, and other humanoids that have been driven out of Rockhome and Ylaruam. They are a plague on the nations, but as they are firmly entrenched high in the peaks, it makes them all but impossible to exterminate them. This doesn't stop the northern warriors from attempting to do this every spring after the first thaw. There's also a large population of giants across all three nations, and more than a few dragons. There's also a sizable number of fae found deep in the wilderness. Monster attacks on towns and settlements aren't common, but the warrior culture of the Northmen make the more intelligent monsters look for easier prey. In 478 AC, King Canute of Zealand, through alliances, trickery, and violence, united the northern tribes into an actual nation. With the help of his wife Gudrid's diplomacy and the magic of hired wizards, they forced all the Jarls to swear allegiance to their new king. King Canute unleashed the Ostland raiders on nearby targets, specifically settlements in the Helden freeholds, Ylaruam, and the Thaietian coast. Soon the raiders were landing on the islands of Minrothad and as far away as the Isle of Dawn. He gave the mainland regions of Ostland to his numerous sons, who founded the many modern cities across what is now Vestland. His sons drove back the trolls and giants, winning the support of the Vestlanders, who saw them more as saviors instead of conquerors. Unfortunately, this attitude wasn't going to last. After the death of King Canute in 526, and then Queen Gudrid in 552, their descendants began to treat Vestland as a source to be exploited, then not as an extension of Ostland. When Ottar the Just of Vestland grew tired of oppressive taxes, he raised the Vestlanders in open revolt. King Finnbogi, Ottar's cousin, launched attacks across the coastal cities of Vestland, resulting in a revolution that would last a full decade, until Finnbogi attempted to besiege Norvik and was captured in a counterattack for his efforts. He was forced to sign a treaty that gave Vestland its freedom and recognized King Ottar as its rightful king. In 950, the Soderford Jarldoms were created, though more as a mutual defense pact through the numerous and scattered Jarls in the largely unorganized southern part of the Reaches. A mutual agreement between the Jarls gave the region some semblance of a defense pact, and a treaty between the Jarldoms, Vestland, and Ylaruam protected caravans that made their way through the nation. They still practiced the raiding from their Ostlandic ancestors, but not on the same scale. Their lack of unification works against the nation, as the Jarls are known to turn on each other if promised wealth or an increase in power. While Ostland has abandoned the region, as it wasn't profitable to begin with, it did cause Ostland to ally with Thaiatis to prevent any further regions from breaking away. Occasionally, a Soderford Jarl will attempt to unify the nation under him to become the king, but every time this has happened, the infighting has doomed the attempt, and often the Jarl. The three nations tend to behave like bickering siblings. The family lines still run tight through all the nations, and it's not uncommon for someone living in one nation to have kinfolk in the other two. Ostlanders still raid the other nations, and Soderforders raid them back. Vestlanders try to modernize their nation and have turned more towards a mercantile system. While their cousins would love to raid Vestlandic shipping, the Vestlanders are still Northmen and know their way around the business end of an axe. Osland wants to return both nations to its control, but Sodafjord has always rallied together when threatened by Osland, and Vestland's wealth means they can afford to fortify their ports and build better ships. Most nations tend to group all the northern reaches together in their dealings. The differences of the governments and the people of the three nations are obvious to each other, but they're lost on the populations on most nations outside their borders. They're just known as Northmen in other lands, and don't bother to correct outsiders as they aren't really interested in the finer points of northern culture. Not that the various nations of the reaches care what the other nations think, except maybe the Vestlandic merchants, who are tired of potential customers flinching when they make sudden moves. Ostland is the most politically stable of the Northlands, the only one with a strong king who is in complete control of all of the nation. It is an island nation, consisting of 4 primary islands with several smaller islands of little importance. Noslo is the largest of the 4, larger than the other 3 combined. As expected, this is where the capital is found, along with the majority of the population. It is known for having some of the best soil in the region, which means the island is largely self-sustaining. Kalslo Island is the next largest. It's known for its independent streak, as the population there largely wants to be left alone. They've never been fully trusted by other Ostlanders because of this, especially as they prefer to worship Frey and Freya instead of Odin and the other northern immortals. The island is known for its large number of monasteries, and swaths of the island are considered sacred ground by Ostlanders. Osterslo and Kunslo Islands are barely populated, and their population is just fishers and whalers. They aren't a friendly type. Visitors are warned away and trespassers are attacked on sight. Ostland's political scene revolves around the king and a stable line of succession. Unlike other kingdoms, the transfer of power is not always through family lines. Noble families send their children to live in the capital of Zeeburg to serve in the court of the king. If the king is without heirs, he will pick his successor from the scions serving in his court. In rare situations, the king will even adopt another noble's child to be his heir, rather than name one of his own children to be king. It's an unusual method, but it has served Ostland for centuries. The current king, Hord Darkeye, is an aging king who has prospered, serving as a pirate and occasional mercenary for Theadas. His new wife has given him 2 sons, and he's content to live out his days watching those sons grow up. His young wife is also teaching her children to modernize the backwards Ostland, while Hord's spiritual advisor is trying to convince the boys to maintain the old ways. The current threat to Ostland is the growing schism between Queen Ursa and the Goatee of Odin that advises the king, Asgrim the Bowed. Asgrim is encouraging King Hord to allow him to remove the Ostman clan of Kalslo and tear down the temples to Frey and Freya, allowing them to plunder the tombs of the ancient kings on the island. Ursa is attempting to persuade the Ostman clan to ally with her so she can preserve the nation. The Ostmanners themselves have sought assistance from the other northern nations, and are willing to fight to protect their culture, even if it means secession. Ursa also encourages Hord to strengthen his ties with Theadas and increase the pace of the Ostlandic colonization on the Isle of Dawn, though that is something that will anger the Alphatians. Making things worse is King Hord doesn't have many years left, and that is not a secret to anyone. His sons are too young to rule, so the regent will be the power behind the throne for at least a decade, and both Ursa and Asgrim are fighting for that position behind the scenes. Vestland is the most modern of the northern regions, having turned its back on its violent past and becoming a mercantile power in its own right. Only about half the nation is under control of the government, with large portions of the interior in control of various humanoid tribes or monsters. Vestland has trade routes into Rockhome, Ethengar, Sodafjord, and Ylaruam, which they guard fiercely with all the internal threats to their caravans. They have a friendly relationship with Sodafjord compared to the antagonistic Ostland, though Sodafjord's chaotic nature can change that relationship instantly. Despite Vestland's abandonment of its raiding past, the nation's aggressive defense of its trade routes mean the warrior clans never lack for battle. King Harald Gudmundsson rules Vestland with the help of the Royal Council, which includes jarls, merchants, clergy, and representatives of the freeholders. Vestland provides agency to all aspects of its population, as the king knows that a problem that affects one part of the nation might not affect another. Vestlanders are known for being incredibly patriotic, as the agency provided by the Royal Council has resulted in a strong national pride. It doesn't have a standing army, at least in an offensive capacity. The nation isn't considered a threat by their neighbors because of their lack of aggression. However, the nation has a strong defensive force called the Home Guard. This group is known for its competency and its prowess, as they know how to use their natural terrain to their advantage. Their experience, gained from centuries as raiders, has given them training as a rapid response force, both across the ground and by sea. Attacking one village will result in a spirited defense by their Home Guard, who will be quickly reinforced by nearby units. Because of this, an invasion of Vestland is considered too costly to attempt by outsiders. The Sodafjord Jarldoms is the youngest of the nations in the known world, and is also considered by many to be the weakest. It's a loose alliance of jarls, who meet 2 weeks out of the year to decide the policies of their nation, though most of that time is actually spent arguing over trivial matters. They have no standing army, only the guards of the individual jarls. There is no king, no formal government. In fact, any time a jarl has decided to become king, it has triggered one of Sildurfjord's countless civil wars. 50 years ago, Sildurfjord agreed on the Minrothad Defense League, which forged the region into an actual nation. It established the war leader, who only has the power to raise a defensive force to protect the region, but no other duties past that. The Council of the Great Jarls meets twice a year to pass new laws, but has no method of enforcing these laws from jarldom to jarldom. To make matters worse, the Jarls are known to be treacherous, with many falling under the sway of Aslan or Theatis. Jarls can be played off of each other, and jarldoms are merged into more powerful ones or split into smaller ones when family members feud over power. The nation is a complete mess. Every Jarl keeps his own laws. While slavery is illegal across the nation, numerous Jarls just changed the name to bondsmen and kept on with the practice. The only thing going for it, and the only reason it hasn't been conquered, is that the land is minerally poor, but fiercely defended. Ostlanders raid it with regularity. Phaeacian slavers will grab whoever they can with impunity. But an actual invasion of the nation would unify the Jarls, and the years of constant feuding and civil wars have turned Sildurfjorders into fearsome and veteran warriors. The fact they don't have a single target for their aggression is the only thing that keeps them from living up to their potential. The northern reaches also contain the fallen kingdom of Falun, the homeland of the gnomes. The Falun gnomes were the most technologically advanced of all the races before their conquest, first by the Nithians and later by the humanoid hordes, specifically kobolds. Artifacts of gnomish design can still be found there, ranging from common household items like musical instruments or fire starters, all the way up to working miniature printing presses and pocket watches. The underground nation is overrun with kobolds, and is mostly covered with flowstone that has closed off many of the gnomish buildings. The kobolds that populate the region now view themselves as the rightful conquerors and see humans as envious and cowardly. The kobolds have gained some degree of knowledge about the captured gnomish devices, and a few have begun making crude imitations of the weapons. The gnomes, of course, would love to have their homeland back, and the merciless genocide of hundreds of thousands of kobolds living there now is a sacrifice the gnomes would be more than willing to make. The humans of Veslin and Oslan view the kobolds as a menace, but the difficulty of even reaching the mountains of Faelun in force means full-blown confrontation is highly unlikely. The northern reaches have powerful divine magics that are unknown outside the borders of the region. The key theme of northern magic is what price power. None of the northern magics come without a cost. When the Nithians first invaded and began exterminating anyone who possessed magical powers, the Aesir, the northern immortals, gave knowledge of divine power to a group called the Volva, or the Wise Women. They retreated into the mountains and wildernesses of the reaches, safe from the Nithian patrols. They protected the secrets of the runes and the sacred ways of the Godi from those that would exploit or destroy it. They kept the history of the early Ostlanders, as well as religious rituals and the very culture of the original Northmen. They were given the secrets of things best left unknown by the immortals, in case the region that was ever threatened again by outsiders. Though few in number today, they are greatly respected and have the ear of many a jarl and even both kings, though the secrets they hold are not ones people want to hear often. Runic magic is unique to the Reaches. The knowledge of how to create them is known only to wise women and certain Godar, and for good reason. The act of instilling a rune on a recipient is often fatal to the bearer of the rune, as mortals were not meant to handle the power of the immortals. Even for those that survive, their health is permanently damaged and their constitution is weakened. Each rune has a unique set of powers devoted to it, anything from increased strength, luck, protection, knowledge, or skills. The list is exhaustive, and gaining all the runes is impossible. Even getting the rune you want to manifest is difficult. It all depends on the faith of the Godi creating it and the will of the immortals granting the power. The knowledge of the runes is kept closely guarded. The wizards of Glantri or Alphesia would pay us any amount of gold or magic to know their secrets. Because of this, those with the knowledge or those possessing a rune will defend that secret to the death. The runes fade after the death of the bearer, meaning killing a rune bearer is pointless, and capturing someone worthy of earning a rune typically results in a battle to the death. The northern reaches are a constant source for adventure, and anyone looking to carve out a name for themselves. While Oslan is largely settled, Veslin and Sildurfjord have large areas of untamed wilderness filled with all sorts of monsters. Sildurfjord in particular has constant need for anybody capable of wielding a sword with all their constant internal conflict. Oslan raids their neighbors with impunity, and are currently trying to colonize contested areas on the Isle of Dawn, in direct conflict with Alphesia. If you can swing a sword, someone in the northern reaches has a job for you. Though wizards are distrusted across the reaches, the Jarls of Sildurfjord will take any help they can get with their constant struggles. Vestland is becoming more open, and Oslan needs wizards in their struggles against the Alphasians. For players coming from outside the reaches, they have numerous opportunities for both adventure and advancement. Northerners are suspicious at first of outsiders, but they warm quickly to those that prove themselves. Anyone that is shown to be capable will have a place in the courts of the king and the jarls. The gnomes are amassing a fortune to hire mercenaries to retake Falun, and are more than ready to bring the horrors of Verdun to the humanoid hordes to reclaim what was theirs. Anyone willing to kill trolls or giants will find a warm welcome in the feast halls, no matter the country. If you can kill the enemies of the Northlanders, you will always find a warm fire to greet you. So why play a Northlander? They're fragmented, they're warlike, they're not exactly known for their diplomatic nature. However, they are really good at stabbing people, a skill that they have learned to market. Their sailing skills are second only to the Ierendi, and their love of glory and battle means you are never going to have to worry about leaving you behind to save their own skins. Plus, you're playing a bloody Viking, hefting hefty axes, wielding ancient magics, seeking a glorious death in battle to make your ancestors proud, is a classic character type, mainly because it's a blast to play. Next remaster will be the 5 Shires, or why Mystara and Halflings make every other settings version look like children. Until then, remember, Jorndishborn der Ritter Gittergu, Jorndesh de Borndesh de Bork Bork Bork. Mystara has always had the strength of great writers behind it. It's one of the recognized elements for its long life and popularity. So, the author of the 5 Shires might surprise you, as he's better known for writing another, lesser setting. When you look over the list of authors, the one that sticks out as an oddity is Ed Greenwood. Yes, the Forgotten Realms guy. He wrote the book on Mystara Halflings, and say what you will about his writing habits, he does write a good source book. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're going to see if Mystara has gotten the short end of the stick. Published in 1988, 5 Shires was one of Greenwood's first solo projects, his only other one prior to being Waterdeep in the North. Cover is Caldwell, that goes without saying. Greenwood wanted to make the Halflings unique in his book, so the first thing he did was give them a name change. They were now called the Hin in their own language. Halfling was a name given to them by outsiders. He actually carried this bit of lore over to the Forgotten Realms, and which I don't count that as borging it like they did with so many of our creatures and features, because Ed just used the name in both worlds. He turned away from the Hobbit clones that Halflings were largely known for. The Hin weren't a pastoral type. They were survivors with a bloody past and a take-no-prisoners attitude. The origins of the Hin are left unexplained. They just showed up in the Shires, coming from a distant land by ship, and settled down in 1300 BC. Unlike the dwarves or the elves, there are no various types of Hin. They're all just Hin. All Halflings are Hin. There's no variations. This is actually important to their story, as they are a single unified people no matter where you find them. They keep to their ancient customs, and they take them wherever they settle down. The Hin on arrival made friends with a nearby elf tribe that the Hin called the Masters, or the Gentlefolk, because of their harmony with nature. The two races were close for centuries, until the pacifistic Gentlefolk suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Hin never found out what happened to their friends, but the Elves were cursed to live without a self-preservation instinct, and were rapidly becoming extinct due to attacks by various humanoids. So they ended up in the Hollow World. With the Elves gone, the Hin were conquered for the first time by an Orc warlord known as Othrong. He invaded the Hin lands with a massive army, enslaved the entire race for over 3 decades. His son Rorg took the throne after Othrong's death from overindulgence, and he was an even crueler warlord. Finally, after decades of slavery, the Hin rose up and killed the tyrant before driving the Orcs out. Then they created the first of their homelands, Hindon. It would only last for 26 years. Hindon was prosperous but poorly defended. In the end, the Orc king Gower sacked the Hindon capital, burning it to the ground. Then a faction of orcs, humans, and dwarves fought over the remains of the nation to see who would rule the small folk. After years of constant fighting, the dwarf Lochtal Ironshield was the last warlord standing. He was deposed 20 years later after fighting a difficult humanoid incursion, and after the campaign was over, the Hin rose up and the dwarf found out he didn't have enough troops to hold the land. So he took his remaining forces north, deciding not to march against the Hin when they had numbers and were fully equipped. He gave up the throne and returned to Rockhome. The Hin created a new kingdom on the remains of the old Hindon. Sheridan was founded in 912 BC and lasts over 100 years. The Hin again prospered, though the loosely organized government caused strife as the various families bickered and argued over control of the government. Eventually, Hin turned on Hin because of the fragmented nature of Sheridan. During this time, numerous Hin fled the nation to new lands, where their descendants still reside. Various families became extinct in the Civil War as the clans fought for control over the nation. Smaller families merged into larger clans for protection, and larger clans openly fought on the streets. Only a harsh winter ended the clan strife, though the damage was already done. Even more Hin fled their homeland, leaving it in a weakened state, leading to the third conquest of the Hin homeland, this time by the Orc warlord Thrail. He proved to be an especially cruel yet effective ruler. He created a stable government for the Orcs, while working the Hin to death to provide for their overlords. Under him, the Orcs thrived, creating the greatest kingdom the Orcs have ever had. Thrail ruled for 20 years before disease took him, causing the orcs to fight amongst each other until a new ruler was chosen. This time around it was General Goch, considered needlessly sadistic even by orcs. He expanded the Orc Kingdom's territory, all the while using the hens as slaves, fodder, and even food. He was already old when he assumed the throne, and while he was popular, he developed a severe allergy to the poison his successor was feeding him. Ferg Or realized the orcs were depopulating the hen, and without them the orcs would be without slaves. He forced the hen into a breeding program to restore their numbers. While a tyrant, the hen managed to flourish under him because of his protective ways, though that was for his own selfish reasons. Ferg Or ruled for a full 20 years before he was accidentally killed when a rival's warband mistook their king for an archery target. Before a new orc king could be named, the hen decided they'd had enough. For years under Ferg Or, the hen had been hiding away what they could, especially their children. They prepared their revolution in secret, and in the process of building up their numbers and their arms, they became very good at not being seen. With the death of the Orc King, the Orc strife began in 747 BC. Hen began a brutal guerrilla war against the Orcs, who were still fighting with each other to determine the new king. The Orcs never realized that the Orc strife had even begun. Any dead Orcs were assumed to be slain by other Orcs. Hen employed hit-and-run tactics against the Orc warbands, until the humanoids numbered barely a few hundred. Then human and Gnoll warbands invaded, eager to conquer the Orcs and take the land for themselves. It was then the High Heroes emerged, Nobnar, Brenderhorn, and Cobberham's Shadowglint. These hen helped drive off the Orcs, and when they were replaced by human and Gnoll invaders, they kept up the hit-and-run tactics until the invaders had expended their strength and were forced to retreat. The hen were free once again. The hen gathered once more to create a new government. They didn't trust a single leader to rule over them. That had caused the clan strife. A government by the various clans was also rejected, because those hen would be loyal first to their own kin and then to the nation. A compromise was reached, where the nation was divided up into shires, each one represented by a sheriff, and these sheriffs would make decisions for the nation as a whole, while the clan leaders would handle local issues. A hen named Gunzith served as the first and last lone sheriff of the hen. He organized the government and established the shires. On his deathbed, he dissolved the nation of Sheridan, and the 5 shires were born in 572 BC. The Shires since then have faced numerous attempts at conquest, repelling all invaders one after another. They did attempt their own hand at colonization by sending settlers to the Ierendi Islands in 575 AC, but that colony only lasted barely more than a decade before the Phaeacian Empire conquered it and sent the hen there back to the Shires. The hen gave up their claim on the islands, knowing that the Empire was more than a match for their small army. Since then, they've kept to themselves, and they have prospered. They've made friends with all their surrounding nations, with the exception of the Black Eagle Baron and Karameikos, who views them as future vassals. They also have problems with the Wizards of Glantri, who sneak across the Shire's border with Darokin to attempt to kidnap Hen to take them back for experimentation. For this reason, Glantrians, even non-magic-using ones, can always expect a chilly reception in the Shires. One feature that makes the hen so feared in combat is the Ylaruam, which is an overwhelming desire to go adventuring during the late teen years. Older hen are known for being staunch traditionalists who don't like anything that would disrupt the status quo. But all hen have undergone the Ylaruam, which means almost every adult hen has adventurer levels. One of the dangers of trying to cause trouble in the Shires is that even the farmers are skilled at arms. Bandits that think of them as children because of their size will find that to be a fatal underestimation, as the hen are often better at fighting than they are. Hen are typically fighters, though rogues and clerical hen aren't unheard of. Hen wizards aren't impossible, but they're so rare as to be considered legendary. Hen might lose their adventuring streak as they mature, but they don't lose the lessons or the treasures they earned during their Ylaruam. The hen are fiercely protective of the Shires. They've bled for their homeland too many times, and they have sworn to never lose it again. The land seems to reciprocate their dedication to it, with a special ability called Denial. This ability manifests in all adult hen in the Shires, allowing them a chance to disrupt hostile magic, though at the expense of some of their health. It's not a sure thing, and success is largely determined on the connection of the hen attempting the denial and their attachment to the target of the spell. Nobody knows the source of the power. Many believe it's tied to the sacred relic of the hen, the Black Flame Crucible, but there's no solid evidence of this. It only works in the Shires. A hen that has used the power many times in the past will lose it if he steps outside the nation, but immediately regain it on his return. Likewise, a hen from another land will gain the ability if they visit the Shires, even if they've never set foot in the land before. Glantrians would love to know how the ability works, and have dissected numerous hen to discover the secret, but to no avail. Which is the reason why when a Glantrian visits a town in the Shires, all hands go to weapons. The hen have a specific type of cleric known as a master, named after their long-disappeared allies. Masters are sworn to protect the Shires at all costs, and are known as some of the wisest hen in the land. Their powers normally don't work outside the Shires, but they can get permission from the churches of the High Heroes to adventure abroad, which removes the restriction. Their spells and abilities are there to protect hen no matter where they are, making Masters incredibly perceptive and often like a parent to other adventurers. One aspect of hen culture that surprises outsiders is their love of the ocean. They have a long tradition of sailing, as they came to the Shire by ships hundreds of years ago. Many hen during their Ylaruam will join a sailing vessel and see the world, though more will hoist the black flag and take up a life of piracy. Hen pirates are a common sight in the shadier ports. While other nations protest to how the Shires tend to shelter their pirates, the hen consider the pirates part of their navy unofficially. As long as the pirates don't attack ships of the Shires or raise too much of a body count, the Shires look the other way, mainly because hen piracy is a major source of income for the Shires themselves. Of the 5 Shires inside the nation, High Shire is considered the most dangerous by far. Home to the mouth of the Cruth River, the Darkwood Forest, and bordering the Cruth Mountains to the north, it is home to all sorts of monsters and humanoids. The area features numerous mining communities. Many of the mines laid were done by dwarves during the reign of King Lochtal. These are the same mines that the orcs worked the hen ancestors to death in, but they're rich in minerals and are badly needed by the nation. Old rivalries run deep in High Shire. Orcs are killed on sight, and it's not safe for dwarves to be found alone. East Shire is the best known of the Shires by outsiders, due to the fact that most caravans arrive from Karameikos into the town of Werskalot. The Shire is considered welcoming, but the hen also try to keep any suspicious types from traveling further into the nation. It's heavily patrolled because of the proximity of the Black Eagle Barony, and any tall folk traveling alone or heavily armed are considered suspect. There are a good number of inns and taverns designed with tall folk in mind. Visitors can tell how welcome they will be received in the Shires by the size of the buildings they encounter when arriving. If there are no buildings larger than hen size, their stay had best be brief. Seashire is the wealthiest and most populous of all the Shires, home to the capital of Shireton. The major docks of the hen are located in Seashire, and the farmers bring down their harvest to sell to the merchants of Minrothad and Darokin that frequent the ports there. Pirates are known to frequent the area, but will never target ships heading into port, as pirates are terrible for business. The area is known as a popular place for retired adventurers, both hen and otherwise, which makes raising trouble even more dangerous, as these retired adventurers are very powerful and really don't like being disturbed. Heartshire is considered the oldest of Shires, though that claim is contested by the other Shires for bragging rights. It's home to many of the mines the hens were forced to dig under the dwarven and orcish occupations, though those mines are long played out. This is the most peaceful and rural of the Shires. Tallfolk will discover that buildings their size are almost non-existent here. Few monsters travel south to the cities of the Shire, as the towns are built away from the mountains. Older hen love the quiet and peaceful farm life here, while younger hen hitting their Ylaruam can't wait to get away from the boring rural life fast enough. South Shire is another Shire known for its tranquility and safety. It was once covered by thick forests, but those were cleared away during the various occupations. Now the land has been converted to rolling farmland, and the hen are mostly farmers or similar. The Shire does have a thriving shipbuilding industry in its ports, and the ports are known for occasional pirate visits. Many of the smaller towns produce unique goods crafted by older hen looking to create novelty items as a hobby. Most of these items are shipped to ports or larger cities. They're rarely found in the smaller markets. Like Heartshire, hen on Ylaruam are rarely found here. Patrolling these lands are several groups. First and foremost are the Krondar. They serve as city watch and investigators for the Shires. They number normally around 60, as they are hand-appointed by the sheriffs to keep the peace. While typically hen, certain tall folk who have served the Shires well have been given the honor of being named a Krondar. All the clans have a militia, which can be called up at a moment's notice. Each militia is rarely more than 50 hen. They don't like large formations, preferring hit-and-run tactics where they can. The fact that fully 60% of the nation has adventuring levels makes the hen militia much more dangerous than other nations. Again, kept small in number in accordance with typical hen tactics. Fangs rarely number more than 60, but are a standing force rather than a part-time militia. Strikers are the offensive aspect of the hen military, comprised entirely of high-level adventurers. Strikers will go abroad to go after threats in the Shire, which has caused numerous past diplomatic incidents. Hen are often of two minds. They're very polite to strangers, especially non-hen. They will make small talk, occasionally they'll talk shop, and they are pleasant conversationalists. However, they are distrustful to outsiders they don't know. Being invaded by foreigners who tower over you 5 different times causes a certain amount of distrust among the hen. Winning a hen over to your side is easy, just prove yourself useful. While not as fanatical about hard work as the dwarves are, hen appreciate people who pull their own weight. They don't have the glaring distrust the dwarves are famous for. Numerous powerful adventurers have decided to settle down in the calm and tranquil Shires, and after proving they mean no harm, will be accepted as part of the clan. Older adventurers have an easier time winning over the Hen than young and fresh adventurers. As the Hen were once adventurers themselves, they love to swap stories about their adventuring days with newcomers that will listen. Interracial marriage between a Hen and a tall folk, while rare, isn't unheard of, though if the couple wants to have children, they're going to need more than a little bit of help from a wizard or a cleric. Potions of growth are highly suggested. The Shires have few enemies and many friends. Their most apparent enemy is Baron Ludwig von Hendrix, who likes to raid across the border to steal from the Hen. He keeps his involvement hidden, never personally getting involved. Though the Hen suspect his involvement, they can't prove it to the Grand Duke. The Hen are planning to either assassinate von Hendrix or somehow lure Grand Duke Stefan into the Black Eagle barony so he can see his cousin's crimes for himself. Glantri is the other major pain in the side for the Five Shires, as the wizards want to learn the secrets of the Hen, especially their denial ability. While the Shires aren't connected physically to Glantri, the wizards don't let that stop them from raiding Hen villages for test subjects. The principalities keep a degree of plausible deniability from the offending wizards, but the Shires are getting tired of the attacks. Hen strikers have ventured into Glantri to enact some measure of revenge, and have become very good at killing wizards in the meantime. The situation is tense, and there's no end in sight as long as Glantrians justify to themselves the need to kidnap test subjects. While the interior of the nation might be considered safe by most standards, the northern fringes of the Shire are anything but. Humanoids of all sorts reside in the north, along with various flying monsters like griffins and dragons. Vermin such as sturges or giant insects are a constant menace, though their population is kept down by constant patrols by the Krondar. Intelligent creatures like lycanthropes are uncommon but not unheard of. There is a large fey presence found in the rolling hills and forests throughout the Shires, as the high heroes are on friendly terms with the She Court. Creatures endemic to the Shires include the Seergar, winged lions with a taste for hen meat. There's night gleet, which resemble winged eels, and rock fangs, resembling giant blubbery masses with a stinger tail. The Hen suspect many of these creatures were created by Glantrians and deposited in the Shires to hunt the halflings, but that's just speculation. The Shires represent a safe haven to both recover and relax, as well as one of the most dangerous regions in the known world. If the players are looking to go on a hex crawl, the Kruth Mountains in Highshire will throw deadly creatures at them like they were candy. There's lost mines, ancient fortresses abandoned by the dwarves centuries ago, and of course, always Nithian cities. The adventurers will either be looking for lost treasures or tasked with finding some fell creature. If they need rest there's numerous high-quality inns or taverns in the Shires, along with several shops with more exotic items. They don't mind their magic items possibly being stolen. The pirates of the Shires often unload their cargoes for resale along the coastal cities. So why play a Hen of the Shires? They're largely known for being peaceful, introverted, and pastoral. Of course, that's just the older ones. The younger ones are looking for adventure. Doesn't matter if they're seeking their thrills on the decks of a pirate ship, crawling through a dungeon, or hunting monsters for sport. As long as it's fun, they are there. Even the older Hen are veterans of numerous campaigns. While they don't like to talk about the thrill of their younger days often, they don't forget its lessons. Many a legend has been forged by a Ylaruam. If the stories are true, the immortal Nobnar completed his entire quest for immortality as a teenager. It's high standards to live up to. Next up for the remasters is the Minrothad Guilds, the land that shows that having a large and diverse population of all the various fantasy races doesn't matter if everyone's a humorous workaholic. This was the nation that introduced us to the idea of money magic that sounded great in concept, but was a nightmare to keep track of. Considered by some to be the second elven homeland, get ready for high seas adventures, corporate shenanigans, and some of the most uptight elves you will ever meet. But until then, remember, short people got no reason to live. Remember when I said that the only diversity that counted was diversity of thought? Well, apparently the Minrothad Guilds didn't get that lesson. It has by far the most amount of different races of significant populations of any nation. It is home to 2 clans of elves, as well as large numbers of dwarves, hens, and human. And all of them have given up their racial identity to follow the Minrothad creed that greed is good. The varied races put aside their cultural differences to become a single nation, devoted to expanding its market share at the expense of its soul. I'm Mr. Welch, and we're taking a trip to where he who makes the gold makes the rules, Minrothad. Minrothad has been described as the second elven homeland, as they do have a clan that originated from their shores in the Water Elves. To stop a common misconception, Water Elves are only found on the surface of the water. They can't breathe water. They're the same as other surface elves, although far more fond of ships and sailing than the rest of their kin. The undersea elves are the aquatic elves, who live in the appropriately named undersea kingdom of Ierendi and don't get along with the nation of Minrothad. To add in more elf goodness, there's a clan of sylvan elves on Minrothad known as the Wood Elves, who migrated to the nation shortly after the islands were formed. Geographically, the nation is comprised of 7 volcanic islands, with only 5 of the islands having a significant population. Fire Island and Blackrock Island have large active volcanoes, making settling there a risky proposition. Throw in constant smoke and ash that are common around the islands, and even getting to them is quite dangerous. There are some that claim the islands. Those are mostly pirates and mystics there for their own reason. Their presence is no secret, but few are willing to risk the hazards of the islands to approach them. The business of Minrothad is business, and the nation takes its industry deadly seriously. It's run by its guild, and they keep a tight rein on anyone who dares break the monopolies. If you want to sell leather goods, you had better be a member of Guild Quickhand. Minrothad enforces the monopolies by law, and they rival Glantri in the cruelty of their punishments. Most Minrothad sentences are carried out with an axe, but as long as you have body parts left, you are free to ply your wares. In addition to the guild system, Minrothad has a strictly enforced caste system. Castes are determined by the quality of your work. If you aren't good at your job, you will never rise in your caste. Your caste also determines your pay and level of employment. The better you are at work, the more money and benefits you will be granted. There are 6 caste levels, though most will never raise above the 2nd rank, and they just will aspire to rise to the 3rd rank. The one exception is the merchant princes, wizards who use their magics to protect the convoys and shipments. They are the 5th rank in the castes, but that is the only rank they will ever know. Most Minrothadans associate their guild before any other ties, including family. They advertise their guild with accessories on their clothing, with pins being the most common. Their pin will show their guild, as well as their caste level, reflected by the metal that it is made out of. While race is still a factor in people's lives, it is a distant second to loyalty to the guilds. Some nepotism happens in the guilds, but if a child can't handle the workload imposed on them, they will more than likely be disowned by their family. If someone is a hard worker and useful to the guild, they will be protected and rewarded. If someone produces poor quality goods, or worse, makes the guilds look bad, they will be used as a fall guy the next time the guilds need to blame someone for a problem. Minrothadans are notoriously insular. Either you belong to a guild or you aren't worth their time. The guild wants your gold, they don't care about your company. This gives the islanders a well-deserved reputation of being cold and very matter-of-fact. Guild merchants rarely bargain with outsiders. They charge a flat fee to the people they don't know. If you're a member of the guild, then you get prearranged sale prices when the merchant sees your pin. The guilds work out their differences in conference room, where employee discounts and first chance offers are worked out behind the scenes. If you aren't from Minrothad, it doesn't matter who you aren't catching a break. Typical benefits from being in the guild include a 40% discount on purchases in the islands, though prices are marked up in advance, so guild members are actually just paying normal retail. Guild members are offered credit for some purchases, something that is unavailable to outsiders. Members in good standing pay little to no interest at all. Guild members are offered items for sale before the general public, so things like food are often second rate when it hits the market. Bankers reduce Minrothad's almost usurious exchange rates to next to nothing for guild members, a benefit for sailors that is rarely talked about. And lastly, thanks to an exchange of services, any guild member willing to perform some work for another guild can earn free passage upon their outgoing ships. There are 2 types of guilds in Minrothad, family guilds and political guilds. Family guilds, as the name suggests, were founded by a specific family and are usually associated with one race or another. Elsen is made up of mostly water elves, and as you can expect, handle most of the ship-related businesses. If you want to fish, work on a ship, or construct ships, you will need to be part of Guild Elsen. Verdier is run by wood elves and deal with everything involving wood or cloth goods. All carpenters, tailors, and bowyers are going to be working for Guild Verdier. By special arrangement, they share the role of farmers with Guild Quickhand. Hammer is the Dwarven Guild, and of course deals with all things metal and stone. Every miner, mason, and smith is a member of Guild Hammer. Because of the vital nature of these jobs, as well as the high quality the dwarves produce, Hammer is one of the more influential guilds. Quickhand is run by Hen, though its members do include a significant number of humans and other demi-humans. The guild is in charge of leatherworking, fuel-making, and pottery. Quickhand doesn't make many high-value items, though they do make a large number of essential products like lamp oil, meaning unlike the other guilds, they profit entirely on volume. Lastly, Corsair is the human-dominated guild, focusing on luxury items. They deal in spices, liquors, and alchemy components, and even rarely deal in magic items if they can be found outside the nation cheaply. Guild Corsair items are not cheap, but they are always in demand. The political guilds are required for Minrothad to function. They were created because of the demand for the positions they fill, and their members owe allegiance to Minrothad first before anyone else. The Merchant Sailors Guild trains sailors for Minrothad's vast merchant fleet. They're trained by Guild Elsen for years, and they're apprenticed back to their own guild before assuming normal duties. Every Minrothad ship is crewed by dozens of these sailors. The Mercenary Guilds are one of 3 military units paid to protect the islands and the merchant fleet. They're a small force compared to other nations, but their job is to stop the enemy from reaching Minrothad's shores, so a heavy focus is placed on Marines. The Thieves Guild is actually the spy agency of Minrothad, as they pose as local thieves to give themselves cover. A thief caught snooping around the docks in another country is likely to get a less lethal sentence than a spy. The Tutorial Guild consists of wizards hired by Minrothad to protect their shipping, and then their country in that order. The feared merchant princes are trained here, and the guild likes to put at least one wizard on every merchant ship if possible. The last guild is the Ruling Guild, and it has always been Clan Meditor. Once a ceremonial position, Orin Meditor has restored it to a position of power. Usually the guildmaster settles disputes between the other guilds. Now Orin plays them off each other. He has opened up Minrothad to foreign markets and used the prosperity that ensued to further his own personal goal of controlling the entire nation. If Minrothad had an alignment, it would be opportunistically neutral. They will do business with anyone, even their arch-rival Darokin, though they have to be pretty desperate for that to happen. There is little that Minrothad doesn't sell. Even items it forbids, like slaves, can be found if the price is high enough. They will not hesitate to take advantage of a business partner if they can make a profit without burning the relationship. They are fiercely protective of their markets. For example, the aquatic race known as the Kana are commonly found selling their goods across the markets of the known world. Except in Minrothad, who hunts them with an almost genocidal passion. Nobody does business in Minrothad waters unless you're a member of the guilds. The guilds operate all sorts of illicit activities abroad, anything to increase the demand for their products. They have been in an economic cold war with Darokin for decades now, both striving to corner the market wherever their convoys and caravans can reach. Minrothad has shipping that stretches from Alphesia all the way to the Savage Coast, though due to the Red Curse, most ships avoid the Savage Baronies for anything but the briefest of visits. The guilds are not above piracy. They have a large number of privateers working for them to delay or sink rivals. This practice is no secret to other nations, and Minrothad does offer some degree of protection if privateers surrender without a fight. Of course, nations such as Thyatis doesn't care what people call themselves if they're being raided, and the punishments there are frequently quite abrupt. Economically, Minrothad's biggest weakness is the demand for maximum profit immediately. They have a tendency to go for short-term investments rather than brokering long-term deals. Captains want to make as much money as fast as they can, ignoring more profitable but longer routes. Darokin often takes advantage of this by backloading deals so that the initial cost is small, but in the end the profit is larger. The guilds also aren't adverse to sabotage, using the Thieves Guild and local agents to provide a degree of separation between Minrothad and the arsonists. This tactic isn't as effective as it used to be, and tools such as magic or hiring increased security for sensitive cargoes can make the effort more trouble than it's worth. Plus, when a Darokin warehouse burns down during a bidding war with Minrothad, the diplomatic corps automatically knows who's probably responsible. So when a Minrothad ship the next day is confiscated for contraband, it's all part of the business. Minrothad has only opened their markets to outsiders 50 years ago, but have quickly taken over half the world market. They do make high-quality goods, despite their reputation for ruthlessness. Their fleets mean they get their goods to market faster than anyone else, especially if the merchant princes are using their magic to ensure safe arrival of even perishable items. The guilds aren't interested in helping stabilize foreign economies, they just want to sell their goods for a high markup, and buy local goods at a discount. They don't invest in their customers, and they don't offer credit either. It's profitable, but the guilds are starting to notice that nations are using Darokin's suggestions to normalize markets globally. Whether Minrothad can catch up with Darokin's economic tricks remains to be seen. Minrothad's biggest targets are the newly emerging markets of the Turtle Clan of Atruaghin, as well as Sind and the nations of the Savage Coast. Their nautical power gives them an advantage over Darokin, though they can't transport as many goods as Darokin's caravans. Minrothad's usual trade strategy is to identify needed trade goods, then send an armada of merchant ships to both flood the local market, as well as buy up any in-demand trade items before Darokin can arrive. This was a viable tactic in the past, though the effectiveness of it has started to fade. The Turtle Clan, for example, has caught on to Minrothad's methods, and will only offer a portion of the trade goods the guilds are looking for. This keeps other trading partners happy, but also lets the Turtle Clan control market prices locally. The more savvy Minrothad merchants are starting to realize the clan is becoming an economic power on its own. The one commodity that Minrothad will pay just about any amount of gold for is anything firearms related from the Savage Coast. The highest status symbol possible for a merchant prince is an engraved brace of pistols. Since smoke powder is only found in the Savage Baronies, ground zero for the Red Curse, acquiring the items is quite risky. Guns are also heavily restricted by the group known as the Inheritors, who try to keep them out of the hands of outsiders. Guild members caught with firearms can expect no mercy from these self-appointed guardians. Captains in the know head to the county of Cimarron, where guns have replaced the bow as the preferred ranged weapon. Because Inheritors aren't welcome in Cimarron, the merchant princes are free to buy as many guns as they can afford. which unfortunately isn't much. Cimarron knows it has a valuable commodity and charges accordingly. Worse is the cost of the powder, where a single cannon shot will set you back hundreds of gold pieces. Since the gunslinger has to return to Cimarron for reloads, the gunsmiths can name their own price. Still, a ship of the line armed with cannons is a match for even the dreaded fireships of Ierendi, though the cost to reload all the cannons would bankrupt any captain. One of Minrothad's greatest assets is their use of merchant princes, or wizards trained by the Tutorial Guild and devoted to protecting the merchant ships en route to port. These wizards use typical arcane spells to defend their ships, but also have spells created specifically for protecting maritime trade. Spells typically include things like weather control, which is normally reserved for druids, as well as spells designed to reduce the labor required on voyages. As you can imagine, the second set of spells make merchant princes quite popular among the regular seamen. Minrothad's merchant princes serve as a counter to Darokin's merchant wizards, though they won't admit it. Many of them share the same spells. Espionage against the two nations' merchant wizards is high, with spells designed for protecting shipments a priority target for theft. While the stereotypical Minrothadan is a humorous workaholic who puts their job above all else, the nation does have multiple holidays to let its population cut loose for a day before going back to the drudgery that is their lives. There are 4 major religions in Minrothad, each corresponding with a specific immortal. All the religions preach the importance of a strong work ethic, but have mandatory holy days that give their followers days off. Minrothad has its own calendar, consisting of 11 months of 30 days each, with a special holy week in winter for a total of 336 days. The guilds allow for several holidays in the calendar, with every holiday being a cause for celebration. Leaving out the 2 volcanic islands, foreigners are welcome for business on the 5 major islands. Okay, welcome is a subjective term. They will be tolerated on the 5 major islands. Trader's Island is the largest island, home to the capital of Minrothad. It is normally surrounded by fog, making getting into the harbor dangerous for unfamiliar pilots. The island does provide trained pilots that can guide a foreign ship in, for a fee. The island has 2 major cities. Apart from the capital, there's also Harbor Town. The capital of Minrothad is dominated by Guild Meditor, while Harbor Town is run by Guild Courser. Harbor Town is the more working-class city, while Minrothad is where the merchants go for large-scale deals. There is a rivalry between the two, though it's pretty one-sided as the people of Harbor Town are considered beneath the notice of the citizens of Minrothad. Open Isle is the home to most of the Hin, and produces a large amount of the nation's food. Anyone doing business on the island will head to Malfton to purchase goods. Hin going through their Ylaruam stage can be found waiting on the docks looking for ships to take them on adventures, and many of these younger Hin have even started building the small town of Prospect Hill. Outsiders are not welcome to settle on Open Isle. Even visitors from the other islands will find a cold shoulder among the population. Open Islanders are friendly enough to each other, but if they don't know you, they can't be bothered. Alf Isle is home to the Wood Elves, and is the second largest island. It is heavily wooded, as the elves maintain the forest as their primary source of income. If you aren't a wood elf, you aren't welcome on the island, except for the town of Seaholm. That city is known for being the most elegant in the entire nation, surpassing even the structures of the capital. Every building is a work of art, even the large fortress that dominates the harbor. Verdun is the smaller of the island's 2 towns, and is populated by wood elves. Here, every building is formed entirely from wood, and while the city isn't as well defended as Seaholm, it also has little in value for pirates to steal. Teak logs might be worth their weight in gold, but you aren't loading it onto a longboat during a raid. North Island is the smallest of the 5 core islands and serves more of a defensive position as well as providing emergency relief for ships in distress. The island has a single major town, Gapton, and its primary function is to provide supplies to ships in need as well as serving as a sanctuary from the storms with numerous natural harbors. The island doesn't produce any trade goods. Instead, it's populated mainly by marines and ship crews there to police the surrounding areas and help ships in danger of foundering. Fortress Island, as you can expect, is home to most of the dwarves in Minrothad. It is the remnant of the volcano Red Tongue, which has been erupting constantly for decades now. The surface of the island is little more than volcanic rock. Very little grows on the island's surface. Here the dwarves churn out their products in vast numbers, combining dwarven artifice with the Minrothadan single-mindedness. The island gets its name from the city of Stronghold, which is possibly the most heavily defended place on the planet. The dwarves created a gauntlet of defenses to reach their port, way more than needed to defend the city against any known threat. Even their countrymen wonder who exactly the dwarves of Fortress Island are planning to defend themselves against. Minrothad has no allies, only trading partners. They keep up a firm policy of staunch neutrality, refusing to take sides in any conflict. They will gladly sell weapons and supplies to both sides in a war, and have been suspected of trying to increase hostilities between rival nations. War is good for business after all. Their list of enemies is short but impressive. First and foremost, of course, is Darokin. The two nations have a long history of competition, and any major trade negotiation between other nations will involve both. The rising merchant power of Vestland is a concern to Minrothad, as Vestlanders are expert sailors, command powerful magics, and are more importantly ferocious in combat. Many a privateer has discovered that while Vestland has tried to leave its history of raiding behind, its people still pride themselves on their combat prowess. Minrothad also has a testy history with Thyatus, as Minrothad tries to claim remote islands when they think Thyatus is weak. The merchants walk a fine line, as many times Thyatus can be bought off, but other times they prefer to get their point across with their far more numerous legions. So why play someone from the Minrothad Guilds? They're known for being humorous workaholics who have a streak of ruthless pragmatism. But they're driven in their goals, possess unusual magics, and can gain access to some of the most exotic materials on the market. For nautical campaigns, Minrothadans thrive on the open ocean, and their ships can be found everywhere there is a port. If you want rare equipment from distant parts of Mystara, few can match the Minrothad Guilds for their selection. This concludes the remaster of the Minrothad Guilds. It is one of the most unique nations in Mystara, but doesn't get the same love as Karameikos or Glantri. Probably because a good chunk of their book is crunch. Next in line is the Orcs of Thar, which is a dividing point among Mystara players. Do you prefer the silly bumbling humanoids, or do you want a serious and competent threat? But until then, if money can't buy happiness, I guess I'll have to rent it. If you had to ask me what the hardest sell is for Mystara, I would tell you the silly phase. TSR got goofy with a ton of lighthearted adventures and supplements designed to make you laugh, give you something to throw at the kiddos, and of course take the piss out of Gary Gygax out of spite. Looking at you, Castle Greyhawk. Mystara was no exception. In fact, we got products that fell victim to the silly phase more than any other setting save maybe Spelljammer. When you had the immortal Jim Holloway as a staff artist, it was difficult not to get silly. His paranoia art is one of the reasons why the game is such a classic. But when you've got one incredibly Silly Nation book in a line of not Silly Nation books, it can put some people off. That's the case of the Orcs of Thar. But is it too silly? Can it be salvaged for a serious campaign? I'm Mr. Welch, welcome to Mystara, and let's not go to the Broken Lands. It is a silly place. The Broken Lands are one of the only books in the Gazetteer line not named after the nation it represents, with only the Shadow Elves also copying the naming pattern. Instead, it talks about the big bad Bone Daddy who rules over the Broken Lands, the Orc King Thar. He's one of the biggest, nastiest, and meanest villains in all of the known world, commanding legions of humanoids in his dreams of world conquest. All that stands in his way is the fact that most of his troops hate each other and are more than happy to fight amongst each other rather than the humans at their borders. That's why he has to play the nasty drill sergeant far too often. Might as well jump straight into the silly parts of the Broken Lands. There is a huge chunk of this book that stands out from the other nations just from the names alone. You've got humanoid regions called Bugburbia, Hobgobland, Trollhättan, and Nolistan. There are regions for the orcs, kobolds, ogres, and goblins that fortunately get less humorous names. If you want to keep these and have a reason for the silliness, best reason I've heard for the names is that a Thyacian cartographer was charting the area and just gave them silly names because he was lazy and the land was so hostile that nobody would be visiting it anyways. There is a bit of precedence with that, with Haldemar complaining about the original map of Brune and how incorrect it was. Same principle, different cartographer. Or maybe it's the same cartographer. The actual names for the regions are much less silly, but the common tongue stuck with the original names. The Broken Lands hammer home the fact that humanoids and humans and demi-human races don't get along at all. Humanoids were created specifically by immortals using evil souls that were reincarnated into the beastmen, before they evolved into their current forms. The rules as written cut the charisma of humanoids in half when dealing with humans and demi-humans, and vice versa. Humanoids are naturally evil because that's how they were designed. Back when they were just the beastmen, they were some of the most awful sentient creatures in their past lives. After multiple reincarnations, a humanoid might be able to change its ways, but that's still a very rare occasion. It's not like they have a reason to change. They were promised by their immortals that they would conquer the known world. All they have to do is enslave or kill all the other races. You get rewarded by your religion for your brutality and treachery, and then evil sounds good. I'm not saying humanoids are mindless creatures without freedom of choice. I'm just saying their version of mercy is lifelong enslavement over death. They have a different set of values, with a mindset that can be alien to non-humanoids. Remember that when the paladin him-haws over the fate of the goblin children, and then have them shank him with their art project knives, just like their dad taught them. The history of the Broken Lands is both scattered and brief. It has a lot of groups that were driven into the area after one quest or another, and settling down because it was the safest location they could find. Starting in 2000 BC, the beastmen evolved into the recognizable humanoid forms that we have today. The first great orc warlord is King Lork, who conquers Norworld, a good chunk of the northern reaches, and some other places. After him arises Aquila Khan, a hobgoblin near future Ethengar. They are both on a quest to find a magical artifact called the Blue Knife, and both ravage across the continent trying to find this sacred weapon. King Lork finds the Broken Lands and settles it, but dies before his quest is finished. Lacking a strong leader, the horde quickly fragments. Aquila Khan is betrayed by Ethengar, who he allied with, and is forced to retreat from Ethengar into the Broken Lands. Other races soon follow. Trolls arrive from Vestland after having gotten completely lost on the way home. Ogres from Sin join the others in the Broken Lands, leaving their homeland because of a terrible drought. The orc tribe called the Wogar arrive from the ruins of the Blackmoor region, following the prophecies of their great shaman. They settle to the south of the Broken Lands near the Atruaghin and begin mimicking their ways. Gnolls appear after the destruction of Nithia. Goblins and kobolds are driven from Rockhome after the Battle of Sardal Pass and grab what's left. The hordes unite under Chief Sitting Drool. See, there it gets silly again. Assume this is a nickname given to him by Darokin to belittle him. Anyways, Sitting Drool besieges Cornglain 3 times before finally sacking it, but on the way home he gets captured. The orcs pay for his release with a huge fortune, but on his way home he's killed by adventurers. Again, the horde breaks up. Thar reunites the humanoids in 975, but he's smart enough to realize that without discipline the horde is doomed to defeat again. So for the last 25 years he's been whipping them into shape. When he decides they are ready to be an army, then he unleashes the legion against Darokin, not a minute sooner. Just about every humanoid of any significant number is found in the Broken Lands, with 3 tribes of orcs alone. The orcs of Mystara assimilate the tactics of their foes. The more powerful the foe, the more they get copied. Orcs will often dress up as their enemies, complete with face paint to try to match the skin tone of their opponent. Red orcs copy the style of the Atruaghin Clans, relying on stealth and maneuverability rather than brute strength. They're notorious for using war paint to try to make themselves look more intimidating. Yellow Orc Land is the home to the Yellow Orcs, naturally. These are the descendant of Aquila Khan's original horde. They copy the Ethengar, so wolf riders abound in their forces. Instead of war paint, they get their skin tone through a heavy diet of swamp plants, which abound in their area, but does leave them looking jaundiced. They're one of the more active tribes, with constant raids into Ethengar to maintain their warlike nature. Black Orcs are the largest of the orc tribes and the most powerful of all the humanoid tribes in general. They call themselves Orcus Rex because of their standing as the most important tribe in the Broken Lands, but others call them the Black Orcs because of their uniforms. They are, without a doubt, the most disciplined of the humanoid tribes, having been drilled to perfection by Thar himself. They are the most important clan in the Broken Lands, something that they're proud of. Mystara and kobolds are mammalian, not draconic. They even have the scientific name of Canis Minor, and yes, all the races have scientific names. Kobolds are known for being nervous little creatures, only brave in numbers and highly susceptible to rabies. There's not much information given on them outside the fact that they're dangerous in large numbers and they breed quickly. If you want to make them stand out, make them the mad scientist of Mystara. Nothing arcane, nothing complicated, but more like Wile E. Coyote and Acme products. Most of their strange gear was stolen from the gnomes, with cheap knockoffs recreated by the kobolds. Things like glider suits, small-scale siege engines, or explosives. Mystaran bugbears aren't the sneaky, stealthy goblin types in other settings. Instead, more than any other humanoid tribe, they believe in might makes right. They believe their larger size makes them superior to other humanoids, and they suffer from constant leadership changes, as when a leader appears weak, he is immediately challenged by multiple contenders. Eventually he gets worn down by the non-stop challengers and a new chief will emerge, only for the cycle to repeat almost immediately. As you can imagine, this does not make them Thar's favorite troops. Mystaran goblins are not the cute, big-eyed comic relief that have taken over the other settings. These goblins are short, squat, deformed, and usually plotting your murder. Goblins are what you get when the humanoids interbreed too often. They are often a mix of different racial features, anything from being over-muscled like an ogre but still only being 3 feet tall, having the face of a kobold, or having a shaggy coat like a gnoll. They are quite numerous, only outnumbered by the kobolds. They aren't cute with big eyes, they more resemble the goblins from Labyrinth, only with multiple convictions for felony assault and a dire need for an STD test. Gnolls in the Broken Lands were driven out of Karameikos, but keep their Nithian trappings. Mystara gnolls were a magical creation designed to follow the Nithians' instructions and being their elite shock troops. The problem was, without Nithians giving them orders, the gnolls started to lash out at anyone they saw. Without strong leadership, gnolls have a tendency for madness. Thar's Legion does help them with their madness somewhat, but they still have to be kept under watch. It doesn't help that the patron immortal of gnolls is also the patron of insanity. Ogres in the Broken Land are actually much more intelligent and behaved than the typical ogre you find in the wild. It doesn't hurt that they were originally raised in Sin to serve as elite troops for the Pasha, and some of that training was passed down to their ancestors. They aren't going to be learning magical spells anytime soon, or writing poems, but they can at least follow orders and come up with coherent plans. Hobgoblins in Mystara are probably the closest to what they are normally in 5th edition. They believe themselves better than goblins, and they are a lot better organized and well-led. However, they also believe in racial superiority, and they will cut down anybody that stands up to them because, of course, hobgoblins believe themselves superior to all other races. Lastly, the trolls of the Broken Lands are pretty much the trolls you find in every D&D setting. Big, green, hungry, stupid, hard to kill. To get their cooperation, all you have to do is beat them into submission, a difficult task because of their regeneration abilities. They're quite dumb, which is both a plus and a minus for Thar. He can trick them into performing dangerous tasks, but any commands more complicated than immediate violence confuses them. The Legion is the best chance the humanoids have at threatening the other nations with any real menace. Thar has a large number of troops, tens of thousands, but compared to the highly organized forces of Darokin, Glantri, or Ethengar, they're little more than an unruly mob. An army with no discipline has little chance on the battlefield no matter how many they have. So Thar decided to copy the most powerful military in the continent, the Empire of Theatis. He is trying to get the normally chaotic humanoids to march in formation, follow a battle plan, and coordinate with their individual talents. Whether this plan is a fool's errand remains to be seen. Browbeating goblins to stand in a line while much larger orcs are charging at them is easy. Getting them to stand in a line when they are about to be trampled by a charge of Karameikos heavy cavalry is another thing entirely. Throw in the fact that many of the tribes absolutely hate each other and will not hesitate to turn on one another if left unsupervised, and it's no wonder Thar has been trying to get his legion together for 25 years now. The Orcs of Thar introduced us to the concept of the world below. This is the geological unstable area of Mystara where you're going to find the subterranean races, though it's not going to have vast trade routes or dozens of cities waiting to be explored. There's 2 cities in the world below of any considerable size, with a few minor ones in areas that are stable enough to live in without fear of earthquakes, poison gas eruptions, or a lava flow interrupting your morning coffee. When you think of the world below, imagine it as the Underdark, only with rabies. Above ground, the Broken Lands are the textbook definition of inhospitable. The surface is arid, with little vegetation outside of marsh plants. Water is only available where the Vesuvian and Streel rivers run through the land, through canyons that offer little in the way of access. The ground is also notoriously unstable, with sinkholes, geysers, and quicksand common hazards, making overland travel treacherous. Temperatures spike at well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in most of the region in every season except winter. All in all, you really don't want to be above ground in the Broken Lands. Below ground is where the vast majority of the humanoids live. The water that seeps from the marshes and rivers above are filtered through rock, which makes it safer to drink than surface water. Large mushroom forests feed the teeming populations, though the humanoids prefer hunting creatures for meat. Finding a new stable cavern in the world below is a great discovery, one that brings warriors from most of the tribes to claim the new cavern for their own. The tougher tribes tend to have spacious areas to call home, while the weaker races like kobolds and goblins live in cramped dwellings as the best caverns have long been claimed by the orcs or bugbears. When a cavern is destroyed by a collapse or poisoned by an eruption of toxic fumes, the entire tribe has to leave their home and try to find a new camp. This has led to numerous wars in the past. The 2 largest settlements in the world below is the City of Stars, home to the Shadow Elves, and Oinkmar. The City of Stars is covered in depth with the Shadow Elves book. Oinkmar is currently occupied by humanoids. It's a legend in the Broken Lands, a city magically floating on a lake of lava, occupied and run by orcs, but lost to time and never seen by anyone living. The legend is true. The city does float on a lake of lava, but the lake also has several waterfalls that constantly pour into it. The waterfalls evaporate before they hit the lake, so it creates a massive wall of steam that obscures the view of the city. The humanoids inside the city believe they built it, but like much of their history, the facts are lost to time. Oinkmar was originally Angmar, built by the Shadow Elves as they fled the Glantrian Cataclysm. They built the underground city in 1352 BC. A small group of them started worshipping Azanthiotl because he promised them vengeance on the hated humans. However, the number of cultists were small and he wanted more followers. So he flooded the cavern with poison gas and drove the few survivors out of the city. A century later, he used his power to open up a shaft to a higher section of the world below and drove the city upwards on a pillar of lava where it was discovered by orcs. They found a common elven sacrificial dagger, but believed this to be the mythical blue dagger. Then the orcs were discovered by Nithians, who started trading with them and also interfering with Azanthiotl's plans. So he dropped the city back into the lake of lava and conveniently killed off all but his followers. Oinkmar has completely forgotten its elven origins. It's an organized city, but dominated by the worship of Azanthiotl. The humanoids don't even know that other immortals even exist. They get around on flying lizards and magic, allowing them to leave their city and raid unsuspecting victims. The city is run similar to the Atzlan or Tiger Clan. Prisoners are used as slaves or more commonly sacrificed on the Great Pyramid. The Oinkmarians consider themselves superior to their humanoid cousins, as they are illiterate and have a stable economy. They speak an archaic form of Elven, and all their coinage was originally minted by the Elves centuries ago. But the Orcs believe their ancestors were the ones responsible for the entire city. Even suggesting the Elves created Oinkmar is enough to get you on the sacrificial altar. The priesthood will not brook even the slightest challenge to their version of events. Few humanoids venture below the safer caverns in the world below. Hundreds of miles beneath them is the Hollow World, but that place is unknown to the humanoids. The biggest threats in the world below that isn't naturally occurring are the numerous monsters that inhabit the deepest caverns. There are rumors of a city of Deep Glorants, who no one has ever seen and lived. How the rumors got out about the Deep Glorant city, if no one has ever come back alive, remains unexplained. The world below is also the hunting ground of the Ostigos, earthquake beetles, and nightshades. Needless to say, venturing into the deeper part of the world below is best avoided. Again, Mystaran humanoids tend to be evil by default. They are the reincarnated souls of the worst after all. But they do have a free will of sorts. Their cultures have evolved into a survival of the fittest with varying degrees of organization. Kobolds organize themselves into a sort of republic, though the High Doge takes the definition of republic to mean he gets to decide which votes get counted. Orcs value strength and success. An orc chief that keeps losing battles will find himself assassinated no matter how big he is. Some humanoids have broken away from their kin and developed different views on life, like the Gnolls of Gricalia or the Orcs of Alfheim. But these are the outliers. Most humanoids are the definition of evil. It also doesn't hurt that the patron immortals of humanoids reward these traits, and questing for immortality means you're going to be undertaking some seriously unwholesome quests. The Orcs of Thar bring up the possibility of half-orcs, which goes against the lore of other books, but Angus McClintock is definitely part orc regardless of the continuity problems. However, his rules are that of a standard human mage. So here's a workaround to smooth out that problem. 95% of the time, humanoid and human or demi-human offspring are unfeasible. 4% of the time, the child will be born with severe defects both mentally and physically, and probably won't live to see adulthood. The remaining 1% follow the mixed race rules, with the same-sex parent dictating the race of the child. So Angus McClintock appears to be an orc, despite his human heritage. The half-orc is treated exactly as the apparent race and can breed normally within that species. However, crossbreeding again results in rolling on the humanoid compatibility chart. In the end, Thar's legions might be too much trouble than it's worth. His army as it stands is 20,000 strong. While that might be enough to overwhelm the border garrisons in Darokin, it's not enough to get very far into the nation before Darokin can mount a full defense. Thar's ultimate goal is the sack of Rockhome, which he isn't going to do with that many troops. Rockhome's borders are bottlenecks, and their fortresses are designed to break armies against them. Thar is being pressured by numerous outside sources to keep building his army, and he's afraid of what happens when he fails. But the threats of the various power players behind Thar are worse than just dying on the battlefield. Orcs of Thar does offer you the chance to play humanoids, but why would you? They tend to be brutish, ill-tempered, and uneducated. But it still would be fun to play a campaign of them on a lark. The Beckme rules invoke the negative experience, so you have to earn about 32,000 experience points to play a troll, before you have all the troll abilities and hit points, meaning a first-level troll is the equivalent of a 7th-level kobold. 5th edition has several rules for various races, though you have to take into account that 5th edition does not do large playable races at all, so there's no ogres and no trolls. Mystara gnolls and kobolds are radically different from the Forgotten Realms versions. Also, Faerun goblins don't have to visit the late-night clinic for a shot as often as the Mystaran goblins. That concludes the Orcs of Thar remaster. If you want to play it silly as written, that's well within your rights, of course. If you want to play it serious with the humanoids posing an actual threat, that's how I presented this region in the remaster. It's your game, your rules. Next book to be remastered is The Republic of Darokin, as I'm in the final stretch for the Gazetteers, and then I only have to do 30 more remasters of modules and crucibles. Is Darokin the merry Zootopia as it's been described? Well, stay tuned. But until then, remember, monsters we are, lest monsters we become. Welcome to Mystara for a new remaster, where today we look at the land of coin, the Republic of Darokin. The nation is a bit of an anomaly. Some people love it for the great detail in the description, others find it boring and without tension. Its form of government is also up for debate, because it is the fantasy equivalent of the Austrian economics school's ideal economy. Inside the nation, you will find lots of diplomats, guilds, and money. But while the nation runs on commerce, its people are also known for their altruism and generosity. So can a pure capitalistic society exist with a focus on public charity? Go argue that in your philosophy class. This is a D&D channel. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's make lots of money. Darokin stands out among the nations of the known world, as well as most of the other D&D settings, in that it's a republic with voting rights based on your total amount of assets. It's not one person, one vote automatically. The greater your assets, the higher office you're allowed to run for. People that don't own at least 15,000 gold pieces worth of property don't get a vote. Fortunately for them, Darokin is an incredibly wealthy nation, famous for its upward mobility. This causes the richest to show quite a bit of charity because they aren't interested in government, and their own wealth doesn't matter as much then. And the people on the lower tiers of the economic scale benefit from the wealthy by increasing their social standing and buying the goods and services provided for them. Fortunately for Darokin, wealth is not a zero-sum game. Darokin was originally a monarchy, going back to 21 AC with King Ansel, who was consolidating the enormous territory that Darokin would become famous for. During the reign of their kings, they had to contend with multiple orc invasions, a large host of Ylaruam refugees fleeing the invasions of their lands, and a brief and one-sided war with Alfheim. Darokin was saved numerous times from disaster during this period by the Elves of Alfheim, whose dislike of humans were superseded by their hatred of the orcs. The humans did grow suspicious of the elves and started the Elf War, the on-again, off-again border skirmish with Alfheim that the elves never really took seriously. Darokin's current government was largely created because of its weak line of succession. After only 3 kings, the nation found itself without an heir due to the death of young King Aiden. Without a national leader, the orc tribes invaded and inflicted heavy damage on the country. Later kings would often prove to be ineffectual, or worse, corrupt, with the kings Mithras IV and Mithras V starting the Elf War in a misguided attempt to blame Alfheim for their nation's current problems. Every time a new leader was needed, the crown tended to fall to the wealthiest man in Darokin, and the new king always seemed to be highly competent. Eventually, the people of Darokin began to associate wealth with wisdom. The kings gradually faded from relevance, as did all the nobility as the people looked more towards the merchants, farmers, and manufacturers for services. The sheer size of the nation, coupled with its natural resources and rich farmland, made its population too spread out for the various local nobility to maintain the infrastructure easily. Instead, people would pay the more successful merchants or farmers in an area to manage the building of a road or construction of a building. These people were already used to dealing with hiring workers and negotiating deals, so it seemed logical that they would get a wall built or a road laid better than some distant noble. The transfer of power away from the nobility and more towards the private sector for goods and services meant the last kings were merely figureheads. When King Santhrall II died in 723 AC, the nation decided the time of kings was over. For over 200 years after the fall of the Darokin nobility, the nation became more of a confederacy of landowners and merchants. They protected their lands as well as the nobility did. They hired guards to protect the villages and maintained the roads that kept the caravans going. Eventually, the great houses began to rise, the most successful of the merchant families. As the merchants were savvy businessmen, they could actually negotiate deals to provide the surrounding towns and farms with more services for less than what the nobility were taxing the peasants to provide. Finally, in 927 AC, the merchant houses met in Darokin City and performed the Great Merger, where all the merchant houses officially created the Republic of Darokin. The nation is famous for its diplomatic corps. It is joked that Darokin has more diplomats than soldiers. The reason for this is partially the enormous size of the nation, but also its diverse population. Darokin borders Karameikos, Ylaruam, Rockhome, Atruaghin, Glantri, Ethengar, Sind, the 5 Shires, the Broken Lands, and completely encircles Alfheim. With that many neighbors, the nation is almost impossible to defend militarily. Darokin has to keep peace not just with its neighbors, but also to keep its neighbors at peace with each other. It has an official policy of friendship towards all bordering lands, with the exception of the Broken Lands, obviously. Every nation in the known world has an embassy in Darokin City, though in the case of nations like Osland, this is just a formality. The only nation that they are not on friendly terms with is Minrothad, who is their biggest rival economically. It's not to say that Darokin has a weak military, far from it. They actually possess one of the largest forces in the known world. But the troop quality is regarded to be lacking compared to the highly trained formations of the Phaeacian or the highly mobile Ethengarian cavalry. Their tactics consist of firing volleys of arrows behind rows of pikes, then switching to rapiers and bucklers if pressed. While their forces are numerous, with 5 full armies consisting of 30 legions between them, this is hardly enough to defend a nation of that size. The sheer mass of the nation stretches its troops thin, leaving large areas unguarded. Typical threats include humanoid raiders from the Broken Lands, and then orcs from the Cruth Mountain to the south, Ylaruam bandits, Tiger Clan braves from the Atruaghin Clans, Ethengarian raiders, and various brigands in the wilder parts of the nation. This means diplomats are a core part of the nation, allowing them to coordinate efforts with other governments to guard their corresponding regions of Darokin's borders. In exchange for the right to maintain tolls, it will build roads into its neighbors and help establish an infrastructure for the poorer nations, or ones that can't be bothered to provide these services. Glantri could easily use its magic to build roads through the mountains to Darokin's markets, but the wizards can't be bothered with that. That means almost all roads into Glantri are built by Darokin labor and paid for by Glantrian nobles. Karameikos also doesn't have the manpower to guard their roads, so again, Darokin builds the roads along the trade route so Karameikos can redirect funds to guard Darokin's caravans. One major industry Darokin uses to influence other nations is their financial markets. See the video on Darokin economic reforms for the full breakdown on this. In short, Darokin knows if you owe someone money, they have power over you. So Darokin keeps interest rates low for international loans, undercutting domestic banks in other nations. When a powerful Thaetian senator wants to build a villa, it's cheaper to get the money from Darokin than a local moneylender. And when Thyatis is deciding on legislation that would affect Darokin's bottom line, that senator will be reminded who made it possible for their new pool. The trick is to loan enough money to make nations dependent on it, but not so much that the nation is tempted to just keep the gold and dare Darokin to take it back. Its economic strength comes from its vast natural resources. The farmlands are the richest found outside the 5 Shires and are far more expansive. Mineral wealth is found close to the surface in its mountains, and while not as profitable as Rockhome's mines, it means the forges and artificers have a constant flow of low-cost raw materials to work with. Darokin's goods aren't particularly elaborate or unique, but instead they're produced in such a manner that they're cheaper and more abundant in other lands. A farmer in Threshold can outfit his entire house with Darokin-made furniture at a fraction of the cost compared to building it himself or paying for a local to do it for him. The merchants of Darokin will keep track of settlements and their growth. As the various settlements expand and their needs change, Darokin will be there with those items as soon as the settlement needs them. They will visit new homesteads with farming implements shortly after being founded. Then they will move on to items needed for a blacksmith or a cooper, and eventually start supplying the now flourishing farm with comfort items like books or glass for windows. Merchants traveling from settlement to settlement will make note of what they need in the immediate future, and relay this information to their merchant house for the next caravan passing through the area. Darokin's governmental election process is based entirely on the candidate's wealth. Candidates have to be worth a certain amount to run for different levels of government, based on the assumption that the more successful people are in business, the more successful they will be in government. So if you want to run for mayor, you need to have a net worth of at least 25,000 gold pieces, while to run for chancellor, you need over 3 million in personal wealth. The nation is divided up into 37 different regions, plus the borderlands, which have little in the way of formal government. To have a vote in elections, you need a net worth of 15,000 gold pieces, but you get to vote for all candidates up to chancellor. The government can also appoint citizens to any number of positions regardless of wealth, especially when a specialist is needed for a task. This is the primary method of selecting leaders for the military. The National Council is represented by 37 different councillors elected by their various regions, and 6 of those will be appointed to be on the Inner Council. This Inner Council suggests new laws and are in charge of running the day-to-day operations of the nation, with the Outer Council voting on proposals and serving as advisors. The Inner Council will also nominate candidates for Chancellor when the position comes available, at which point a nationwide election will be called. Any member of the Inner Council can nominate any number of candidates for the Chancellery, though the typical number of candidates is around 4. The Chancellor serves for life or retirement, though only one Chancellor has ever stepped down due to poor health. The borderlands are a section of non-contiguous land on the outskirts of the nation, typically in the southern border on the Cruth Mountains and the northwestern border on the Amsarak Mountains and the Broken Lands. The laws are different here, with individual domains being placed in the hands of a magistrate for the purpose of stabilizing the region for absorption into the Heartland. Magistrates are appointed by the Inner Council and answer directly to them, with powers similar to a baron of other lands. Once an area is considered pacified, it will be added to the nearest region, and the magistrate's contract will be bought out for their service to Darokin. These payments are known to be quite substantial. If a magistrate cannot pacify a region, they can be fired, replaced, or in dire situations, the region can be placed under the direct control of the council, though that scenario has never happened. One of the most famous aspects of the Darokinian government is that of the diplomatic corps. Created at the same time as the Great Merger, diplomats are tasked with keeping borders open, trade flowing, and conflicts mediated before they can spread. Only about 50 diplomats are trained a year out of thousands of applicants. They are instructed on all manner of negotiations, languages, and international customs, as well as keeping the Inner Council informed on ongoing conflicts in the courts of other nations. Diplomats rarely serve as spies, but they are known to hire them when necessary. They will also contract out adventurers, mercenary groups, and similar organizations when needed to defend Darokin. They are just as much of a symbol of Darokin's foreign might as the merchants are. As far as internal conflict goes, Darokin is mostly unified compared to its neighbors. Most of the problems inside the nation is more the competition between the guild houses compared to one group or another trying to take control of the government. Even then, the various guild houses are loath to truly use underhanded tactics against each other, as the houses still have to do business with each other on a regular basis. Dirty tricks will be more in the form of insider trading, predatory pricing, or industrial espionage instead of arson, sabotage, or murder. Punishments for nonviolent crimes are typically a fine, so the worst that happens when a guild resorts to dirty pool is they lose money on the deal. While the houses are rivals to each other, they're still loyal to Darokin first. If one house is slighted by a foreign power or company, then all the guild houses will react as one. Getting blacklisted by the Darokin Merchants Guild is not a punishment to be taken lightly, and foreign governments will quickly act to remove the bad actor to get back on their good side. There are 9 merchant houses that control the majority of Darokin's commerce. While they were once controlled by actual families, they've long since branched out with the acquisition of other companies or starting new branches. With Darokin's diverse population coming from its neighbors over the centuries, it has evolved into a true meritocracy. Anyone can be found working in any of the merchant houses, though demi-humans in Darokin are rare because they tend to stay in their respective nations, as all of them border Darokin. When a demi-human does apply to work for a merchant house, their unique talents or skills tend to draw a higher pay rate than a human employee of similar experience. Al-Azrad is based out of Salonika, near the border of Ylaruam. Founded by a merchant of some renown that immigrated from the Emirates during the Thaetian conquest centuries ago, it is still run by one of his direct descendants. It does more business with Ylaruam and the eastern nations than the other houses because of its location. While it does little actual sales inside of Darokin, it prefers to purchase goods from other houses for export into Ylaruam and beyond. Corin is based out of the northeastern city of Corringlain, originally Corin's Glen. They are one of the more powerful houses politically, having held the chancellorship numerous times in the past. They deal mainly with domestic goods, preferring to sell their goods inside of Darokin's borders rather than abroad. Many of their goods are purchased by other houses for the express purpose of exporting them later. Frannic is one of the newest of the houses, being established only 63 years ago. Based out of Darokin City, it rose from being a minor house to prominence by branching out across every possible market. There isn't much that Frannic won't sell, and the house's goods can be found in markets in all bordering nations. No matter the demand for commodities, Frannic will always have in-demand product. Halonica is the largest house in eastern Darokin, also based in Salonika. They personify how Darokin's merchant houses do business. Instead of getting involved in a trade war with House Al-Azrad, they negotiated a deal where both houses would specialize in certain areas and goods, relying on each other outside of the agreement. Both houses have prospered greatly from both the specialization and the cooperation. Linton is based in Athenos, and is a strange contradiction to the other houses. First, its primary focus is on nautical trade. Second, it's a rather wealthy house, the second richest in the nation, but it's one of the least politically active. Linton has a huge amount of political power if it so chooses, but all the other houses know that, so they don't try and force policies on Linton that they don't like. Their sailing ships are dwarfed by those of Minrothad, but Linton has agreement with nearby nations to grant them safe passage, even in Minrothad. Monty is the most powerful house in Darokin, and has been for centuries. With just a few exceptions, the Chancellor has always been a member of House Monty, including the current one. Much of Darokin's economic strength can be directly attributed to the reforms made by Monty House in the centuries past. Monty introduced profit sharing, allowed non-humans to become full members of its house, and first adopted diplomats as arbitrators. All of these are now standard practice in Darokin and have contributed to the economic domination of the mainland. Penny Down is the retail giant of Darokin. While other houses prefer caravans to transport their goods, Penny Down did the opposite and makes sure that every town has a general store that stocks their products almost exclusively. They're based in Darokin City, but maintain over 100 stores with twice that many in traveling salesmen across the nation. They are quite a powerful house, but none of the other houses maintain such a large retail presence, making their economic strength largely unchallenged. Tony is the smallest of the houses, based out of Akaros on Lake Amsarak. Here they move goods across the lake to the rich farmlands in far east Darokin, and ship goods to Glantri, Sind, and the Bear Clan of Atruaghin. They're known for their patience. They were a minor house for the longest before their long-term business plans came to fruition. Tony has bet a large sum of money on the expansion of the Atruaghin Plateau, and that bet is starting to pay off with dividends. Umbarth is located in Akasoli, but has a strong presence in Darokin City as well. They primarily trade with Glantri and Ethengar. Being the most spread out of the houses, they have caravans headed to most other nations bordering Darokin as well. They do have a tremendous amount of trade with Alfheim. Appropriately, they also have the largest number of elves in their house compared to the others, and the current leader of Umbarth House has a noticeable elven lineage. As you can tell, Darokin's strength is its economy. It has miles and miles of farmland. It produces more goods in its factories than most other nations combined. Almost every conceivable service is available for a reasonable rate. But the true strength of the nation's commerce is its logistical chain, of which no other country can even come close to in scale. Transportation of the goods is paramount. There is always work available as a bodyguard for the smaller merchants going from town to town, known as travelers, all the way up to the largest caravans. Merchants known as dealers buy up local goods and transport them to other cities and towns to sell directly to the shopkeepers there. It brings in a lot of money, but they all have the highest expenditures because of the added security and transportation costs, cutting into their profit. The most profitable trade is the import and export of trade goods involving foreign lands. While the amount of trade with other nations is on par with the domestic trade, the amount of money brought in is several times greater. Enormous caravans with dozens of wagons are assembled, with up to 100 guards, drovers, and merchants, bringing Darokin goods to distant markets. It is such a part of Darokin's culture that the arrival of a caravan in a small town is a minor holiday. Every caravan is unique, from the wagons used to the presentations once they've arrived in the market. Darokin's philosophy is one of self-improvement. The nation is ingrained to the idea that it is the land of opportunity, and the people who are poor on purpose, through either laziness or choice. That's not to say they're callous. If someone loses everything through an act of the immortals or an other unavoidable accident, their neighbors will spare no expense helping the unfortunate. As Darokin is one of the most diverse nations in terms of religion, magical healing can be easily acquired if necessary. But the nation has more jobs than it has population. Finding a job is easy for anyone who wants to look. Preferences given to natives of Darokin rather than foreigners for jobs, so it's actually hard to remain unemployed. Despite their great wealth, Darokinians believe garish displays of it are tacky. Excessive jewelry or gold-plated carriages are the height of bad taste. Simple, elaborate jewelry are preferred even by the elite of Darokin society. Noticeable quality is how they display their wealth, rather than displays of precious metals or magical items. The most common way the rich of Darokin reflect their status is through their entourage. The more assistants someone has, the greater their status in society. This includes things like 2 drivers for every carriage, bringing personal cooks along when they travel, or tailors and cobblers in case of wardrobe malfunctions. Despite the relatively safety of the majority of the nation, there are numerous problems in Darokin that are considered dangerous to be in the proximity of. There are numerous orc strongholds found in the border areas of Darokin, including Dast on the border with Ethengar, Gruck on the Broken Lands, and Zorg near Rockhome. Darokin has offered large rewards for the destruction of these strongholds, but as the orcs number in the thousands, the tasks have remained unfilled. For sheer terror, there is Ithildown Island, the largest island in Lake Amsarag. Once home to the powerful Ithil house, one night their castle warped and twisted if it was made out of wax. The screams of the Ithil family could be heard for miles, and in the morning there was nothing left of House Ithil except for their castle. It's considered a cursed place, and even viewing it by passing ships is considered unlucky. It is not unoccupied, but what lives there is unknown, as everyone who has entered has never returned. The threats to Darokin outside the nation are numerous, though concentrated on the western border. The Broken Lands are the obvious threat, with Darokin heavily fortifying their border against the numerous incursions that Thar's legion sends out. To the southwest, the Tiger clan of Atruaghin have raided nearby towns looking for captives and plunder for their bloodthirsty religion. While nowhere near as common as humanoid raids, the battles between the Tiger clan and the troops stationed nearby are renowned for their savagery. In the nation of Hul, the Master is raising an army to conquer Darokin and its vast wealth, an act of aggression that would set off a war involving most of the known world. So why do you want to play a Darokinian? They tend to lack an adventuring spirit. They're considered soft by their neighbors. They're more interested in exchange rates and stock dividends than fighting evil or dungeon crawling. But, despite all their stereotypes, they are largely an altruistic people. They want to help the less fortunate, even if doing so goes against the bottom line. They prefer peace to conflict, but they also know that some threats can't be bargained with. Plus, you can always trust one to pick up the tab at the local tavern. Next up on the list of remasters is Ethengar, land of the obvious Mongols, full of horses, warriors, magic, animal spirits, warlords, treachery, new classes, new versions of old classes, and more politics than most soap operas, plus a Khan that is in sore need of an actual enemy. It's one of the better written Gazetteers, but for some reason never caught on like the other more popular ones. But if you want to ride a horse and stab people, it's the nation for you. But until then, remember, money can't buy happiness, but it can rent a jet ski, and you never see sad people on a jet ski. Welcome back to Mystara for the next in my series of remasters, looking this time at the Ethengar Khanate. The Gazetteer is known for its quality writing, but a storyline that goes nowhere in the original meta due to a lack of target for a conquest. It's a bit sad considering it works up the legend of the Golden Khan, who of course is a stand-in for Bob Genghis Khan, the same guy that savaged China, Korea, Afghanistan, and Oshman's sporting goods. Despite their eventual fate, the nation was given far more detail and background than a lot of other fantasy nations. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we aren't just horsing around. The Golden Khan of Ethengar was the 12th Gazetteer in the line, written by the legendary Jim Bambra of TSR UK fame. It's the standard 96-page format, split between the 32-page Player's Guide and the 64-page DM's Guide. with the standard huge map that comes with all the world books. It introduced a lot of new concepts to Mystara, but sadly, like too many good ideas that were spawned in the Gazetteers, they were never mentioned again. Everything from new classes and class variants, the introduction of the nature spirits in the spirit world, and expanded mass combat rules that were welcomed by the Vaults of Pandius and gamers everywhere. The Mongols are, of course, one of the most iconic warriors in the Middle Ages, though most people just know of them from listening to The Who. Not the British ones, the Mongolian ones. The ones that combine throat singing with heavy metal music. Which raises the question, how come nobody thought of this before? Now that you listen to it, you realize that this is one of those combinations that merge so well together you can't have one without the other. Like Tarantino movies with bare feet, Marvel movies and space lasers, Pale People and Tim Burton movies, and James Harden choking in the NBA playoffs like clockwork. But not many people know much more than that about the Mongolians, even if their most famous band is constantly confused with the British one. Sure, Odbayar Gantamur isn't as wild and random as Keith Moon, but in his defense, he's probably also going to live a lot longer as well. Ethengar is a large flat steppes north of central Darokin, filled with lots of grasslands, with the exception of a large unnatural desert in the eastern section. The nation stands out compared to other countries as it has no permanent settlements. Instead, the various tribes prefer to make temporary cities wherever they camp for a season. The leader of Ethengar, Moglai Khan, maintains his capital at the court of the Golden Khan, which is the largest of the mobile camps, where he issues edicts to the other tribes from his throne. Even the capital of Ethengar is mobile, with 4 different campgrounds that it migrates to each season. Ethengar's culture is dominated by the horse. Every able-bodied Ethengarian is given a foal as soon as they're able to ride. To not have a horse in Ethengar is considered a great shame, and while the animal isn't sacred, it is an important commodity to the tribal nomads that wander the Sea of Grass. The more horses an Ethengarian owns increases their social status, and the most common reward from a tribe member's Khan for a service well done is to be rewarded with more horses. It's to the point where kidnapping another member of a tribe might get you a beating as punishment, but stealing a horse gets you executed. To say Ethengar makes its neighbors nervous is stating it lightly. The nation hates Glantri to the west, but can't properly invade thanks to a bottleneck valley between the two nations. They have invaded their northern neighbors in the Helden freeholds repeatedly, but the land is too spread out and vast to be conquered easily. To the east they border Rockhome and Vestland. Ethengar is friends with the mountain-dwelling dwarves, though they do have a strained relationship with Vestland. In either case, the terrain of the nations is hostile to cavalry. Darokin shares a small border with Ethengar, but maintains a steady trade that the Ethengar value enough to make the merchant nation an erstwhile ally. The history of Ethengar starts with the same way all great romances start, with the end of the world. Specifically, the explosion of Blackmoor and the Great Rain of Fire. Before Blackmoor, the land that would become Ethengar was located near the northern polar region, and after Blackmoor, the planet had shifted on its axis, which put Ethengar in a warmer climate and allowed the snows to melt and the grass to grow. A side effect of this explosion was felt across the plains, and part of the ethereal plane was blown free and partially welded itself to Mystara itself, creating the spirit world. More on that later. The Ethengarian precursors were nomads that lived on the edge of Blackmoor's influence, and were spared most of the devastation from its destruction. They settled in the steppes, becoming one of the first peoples to inhabit the known world. These people of the steppes frolicked and cavorted for nearly 3 centuries, roaming the grasslands, establishing small cities, and enjoying themselves greatly. But then, jealous of their equine-based happiness, those pig-faced assassins of joy, the Orcs, invaded from 2 directions and enslaved the Ethengarians. King Lork came from the north with a massive horde of humanoids. Akila Khan arrived from the south with a smaller, but no less deadly army. Eventually, the humanoids would clash with each other, and Akila Khan switched sides and allied with the enslaved humans. At the Battle of Chongor, the humans and forces of Akila Khan routed King Lork and drove him into the Broken Lands. Then the humans and orcs lived happily ever after. Just kidding. As soon as the battle was over, Akila Khan's forces began to re-enslave humans without mercy. One man named Baka escaped with a small band of warriors on horseback and started a hit-and-run campaign to fight back against their former allies. In a heads-up fight, the orcs were too many, but against isolated groups or stragglers, the human rebels were highly successful. Soon the small band of warriors grew into a large band of warriors as Baka freed more slaves and defeated larger bands of humanoids. Finally, the 2 armies were an even match, and Baka arranged a meeting to negotiate an even sharing of the land, which Akila Khan agreed to attend. Only for Baka's entire army to arrive in force, driving out the humanoids and teaching Akila Khan 2 lessons. First, never get involved in a land war in Ethengar, and second, payback's a bitch. Baka ruled as the first Golden Khan, establishing the Ethengarian way of life. As cities could be conquered, enemies can't conquer what they can't catch. The tribes embraced the wisdom of the spirit shamans, who encouraged them to wander the steppes following the herds. Tribal conflict was encouraged in small amounts, which allowed petty conflicts to resolve themselves before they turned into large conflicts. This backfired when the group of Khans, jealous of Baka's power, poisoned him and tried to grab the throne for themselves. This in turn caused a civil war which fragmented the Ethengarian people for years as hundreds of tribes emerged from the chaos. During Baka's campaign against the humanoids, a great catastrophe occurred which changed the shape of the nation. Over in Glantri, Elves found a Blackmoor device that possessed a lot of blinking lights and round candy-like buttons. Naturally, they had to push all the buttons to see what happened. A huge explosion is what happened. Part of the device landed in Ethengar, and the emanations that came from it poisoned the land, turned the fertile soil into blackened sand, and caused a giant mountain to erupt from the ground, giving Ethengar its one and only mountain. Thus the land of the Black Sand was born. This artificial desert is a cursed and haunted place. Surrounding the World Mountain, it's where the veil between the spirit world and the prime material plane is weakened, allowing the spirits to visit far more commonly than anywhere else on the planet. No plants grow here, animals avoid it, and the weather is almost random. Making matters worse, occasionally a great storm forms and blows the desert sand across the steppes in an event called the Winds of Black Madness. The storm happens about twice a year and is prefaced by a lightning storm visible for miles. People caught in the storm will be driven insane, often fighting each other to the death without mercy while the winds blow around them. Because of this, few tribes will even approach the land of Black Sands, leaving spirits to do their own thing undisturbed. Ethengar has two forms of magic users that are unique to it. First are the Hakamans, their version of wizards. These are nothing like wizards from other lands, and have a special place in Ethengar society. First, Ethengarians who show the ability to cast arcane magic are immediately removed from their tribe. Not as a punishment, but the Khans realize the power of magic, and those that can cast it are to use it for the benefit of all Ethengar. A Khan might have a Hakaman advisor in his court, but the Hakaman does not need to be from his tribe. Indeed, a Hakaman who has the ear of a Khan can be from any tribe, but will serve the Khan's tribe loyally as his own. Hakamen do not have spell books. Instead, they have scrolls of vigils hit somewhere on their person. Each sigil is a different spell, though only Hakamen can read their individual sigil. Hakamen are known for their taboos, a restriction placed upon them when they start learning magic. Breaking a taboo causes a magical backlash, the effects being anything from losing spells of a certain level, being unable to cast damaging spells, or losing a set amount of hit points until the Hakaman atones for his misdeed through meditation. The second unique spellcaster is the Spirit Shaman, who serves as the voice of the spirits. They are not clerics, nor do they serve the immortals. Ethengar has its own immortals and clerics that serve them, and both the clerics and the shaman are held in equal regard. A spirit shaman is visited by a spirit guide at an early age. The guide merges with the child, giving him the ability to commune with this guide, though there is a toll taken on the body of the new shaman. Spirit shaman help their people maintain the balance between the two worlds, though the spirits aren't willing to always talk to the guides. The shamans serve the spirits as much as they serve mortals, and once a year the guides must travel to the World Mountain to commune with the spirit lords. This is normally a dangerous task, but the spirits recognize this pilgrimage and allow the shaman to pass without harm. To harm a shaman on their trek is to draw the ire of the spirit lords, who are on par with the immortals in terms of power. Other classes in Ethengar are slightly tweaked. What need is there to pick a lock when there aren't any doors? The horse warriors of Ethengar are obviously all mounted troops, lightly armored with a limited range of starting weapons. Horse warriors are all about mounted archery. They will use sabers and spears if pressed, but their primary tactic is to pepper the enemy with arrows and then ride to safety before being counterattacked. Horse warriors have no concept of chivalry, and they will always fight to win, rarely seeking glory in battle for themselves. A warrior that proves to be competent and effective will be noticed and rewarded. They don't have to show off to earn those honors. Braytaks are the thieves and rogues of the Ethengar. They possess the same skills as other rogues, but are trained like the warriors in mounted combat. They aren't expected to ride with the horse warriors, that would be a waste of their skills. Instead, they're used as spies, messengers, and scouts. Like the warriors, a Braytak that gets the reputation of being dependable in their task will be rewarded and recognized by their Khan. They typically avoid combat, which is actually accepted by the normally warlike Ethengarians, as the information they hold is far more important than the number of enemies they've slain. Clerics of Ethengar serve three immortals. Yamagu the Yurt Dweller is the most important immortal, as her teachings hold the Ethengar way of life together. A representation of her, typically a cloth doll, is found in every yurt in Ethengar. She is worshipped by all Ethengarians, as without her they believe the world would end. Tubok the Lawgiver teaches the importance of law in the lives of the Ethengarians. His clerics serve as judges in trials and mediate disputes when asked. Tubok is also considered the patron of Ethengar's armies, and they look to him to provide them with strategies for the upcoming wars. Krishia, the Lord of Chaos, teaches the Ethengarians not to take life too seriously. They see themselves as entertainers in Ethengar society, performing pranks and jokes on their fellow tribe members. While highly chaotic in nature, they usually aren't normally malicious. Krishia's clerics serve as foils to the clerics of Tubok, each reminding the other of the need for the worship of both. The current leader of the Ethengar is Moglai Khan of the Minrothad clan. He is a charismatic leader and is considered a tactical genius. But his ascent to the Golden Court of Ethengar was not easy. His father was Khan of the Merkits, but was murdered by Moglai's uncle when the boy was just 12. Faced with death at the hands of the new Khan, Moglai fled Ethengar to build up his skills and learn more methods to regain his throne. His adventures took him to various nations, including Ylaruam and Rockhome, where he befriended his two closest advisors, Ahmed ibn Yusuf and Gimlik the Horse Warrior. With the help of the Yalari wizard and the Dwarven warrior, Moglai returned and overthrew his uncle, then began a campaign to reunite the tribes. It took him 12 years, but eventually all the tribes swear loyalty to Moglai Khan, because those that don't were utterly destroyed, and the survivors absorbed into the Merkit tribe. There are 8 major tribes in Ethengar. All of the minor tribes will swear loyalty to one of these tribes in exchange for protection or aid. The tribes all swear loyalty to Moglai Khan, but their true loyalty can often be just in words alone. There's bad blood between several of the tribes, and though they are sworn not to wage war against each other, old grudges still remain and violence is common between them, just not as visible. The Bortax live in the far northeastern part of Ethengar, close to the borders of the Helden freeholds and Vestland. They do enjoy some of the best grassland in all of Ethengar, and were the first to support Moglai Khan during his rise to power. They are instantly recognized by their facial tattoos, traditionally the sun and the moon on different cheeks. They have a large number of spies in Vestland and the freeholds, posing as horse merchants. These spies inform the Great Khan of the level of fortifications in the various towns, in case the Khan ever wishes to invade. The Kairuts live in the northern portion of Ethengar, where they constantly battle the goblin tribes that contest the land. They're known for being fierce warriors, and though they allow the caravans to enter their land to proceed unmolested, even providing security for them if they need to. They are steadfastly loyal to Moglai Khan, and he rewards them for that. They possess a number of powerful Hakuman, which help both fight the goblins and maintain their influence in the Golden Court. Kairuts are known for the color red. It's sacred to them, and they tend to dress head to toe in it. Kiots live right on the border of Vestland, and have long been trading partners with the Northmen. The Kiots are well known among the tribes of Ethengar as excellent spies and scouts. Most of their traders in Vestland are there to gather information. The Kiots avoid conflict, but won't shy away from it if pressed. They're one of the more religious tribes, even having opened temples to their immortals in Vestland, though the Vestlanders don't fully understand the religion. As a sign of faith upon reaching adulthood at the age of 14, Kiot will amputate one of their little fingers as a sacrifice to Krisha, with the more fanatical sacrificing all but the thumb and forefinger. While they have no long-standing grudge with other tribes, they are considered cowardly because of their avoidance of conflict. The Merkits are the ruling tribe. They roam the rich central part of Ethengar known as the Sea of Flowers. They are the least nomadic of the tribes, as Moglai Khan has realized he needs a central location to rule from. While the Golden Court moves locations during the season, it seems each season it moves just a little bit less. The Merkit tribe has benefited greatly from the wisdom of Moglai Khan, leading other tribes complaining that the Merkits are growing soft from all the tribute paid to them. Still, Merkits are a powerful military force and are more than willing to show to their detractors that they're just as warlike as the rest. Merkits can be identified by their clothing, specifically their conical hats that frequently sport a horse's tail streaming from it. Taijits are the most warlike of the tribes. They are on the border of the Broken Lands, and the constant supply of humanoid enemies pleases them greatly. They are known for, after a battle, taking the heads of all of the fallen and piling them into a giant mound as both a monument to the immortals and a warning to anyone who would oppose the Taijit. They're mortal enemies with the Yaka tribe, and the only constant warnings of the Golden Khan keeps the two from open warfare. The two tribes still fight and kill each other, but only more clandestinely now. Taijits, for religious reasons, never expose their bare heads, and they're always wearing a scarf or a helmet outside their yurt. The Ugrs are the most militant of all the tribes, living north of the Sea of Flowers in the land of Black Sand. They want nothing less than a full invasion of the Helden freeholds, who have long been the enemy of the Ugrs. They massacre any freeholders found in Ethengar, as well as any that settle too close to the border. They are held in check by Moglai Khan, who does not want to give the freeholders a reason to unite against the Ethengar before they're ready. This just makes the Ugrs believe that the Merkits have grown soft in the Golden Court. Moglai lets the Ugrs right into the freeholds to let off steam, but eventually the problem needs to be addressed. Ugrs, upon reaching the age of maturity, perform ritual scarring on their cheeks to show that they are now full members of the tribe. The Yakas, aside from being the mortal enemies of the Taijits, are a wealthy tribe near the southern border with Darokin. They're known for their crafting abilities. Yaka swordsmiths provide much of the weapons for the rest of Ethengar. They benefit greatly from the trade with Darokin and Rockhome, and are known for dressing in the finest clothes possible. They are friendly to everyone, both foreigner and Ethengarian, except of course the Taijits. Despite their reputation as merchants first, they are deadly in combat, in no small part due to the high-quality weapons and armors they're famous for. The Yugatais only have one goal in life: destroy Glantri. They're right on the border of Glantri at the end of the Moldavian Pass, where they're expected to intercept any parties coming out of Glantri. They also help the Kairuts fight the various goblin invaders when needed. The Yugotai would love to finally invade Glantri, but every time they've tried, they've always run straight into an ambush. They suspect a spy, but can't rule out magical divination on the part of the wizards. Yugotai are known for gaudy jewelry, specifically oversized hoop earrings that they find appealing. So why do you want to play an Ethengarian? They aren't exactly friendly to outsiders, their style of conflict is out of place in mountain-happy Mystara, and their culture tends to creep people out. But they are a proud warrior race, known for their loyalty and pragmatism, and they present a different type of adventurer compared to the standard races and classes people normally play. The next book up for remastering is the Shadow Elves, the not Drow. Come and check out how different the Shadow Elves are from the Drow, including different alignments, different skin tones, and a refreshing lack of cliches, and a whole bunch of other rules actually detailing the elves. Until next week, seriously, check out the Who when they go through your area. Sure, by the first encore you're ready to invade China, but it's still an awesome show. If these guys ever start selling out stadiums, Beijing better watch out. Welcome to Mystara for the latest remastered guide, as we are going underground to talk about the Shadow Elves and their strangely complex yet simple lives. A race of elves not as evil as the Schottenelfen, not as cliché as the Drow, and largely misunderstood by those who haven't read the Gazetteer because underground elves equal evil in a lot of people's minds. Shadow Elves might be misguided, and more of a few of them count as evil, but they aren't lingerie-wearing edgelords who demand worship and tribute. But enough about OnlyFans. I'm Mr. Welch, and I hope that joke doesn't age too quickly. The Shadow Elves are one of the most perplexing of all the races because they seem to be an entirely different race in every single appearance. In the Elves of Alfheim, they're almost monstrous traitors, hiding in the shadows waiting to conquer the Elven homeland. In the video games, they're bikini-wearing purple bad guys with little characterizations besides just being people to stab. In their own book, they are long-suffering penitents who want the lands they were promised but are being used as pawns in their leaders' political games. Later in the almanacs and other books, they're back to being cartoon villains doomed to incompetence as they conquer Alfheim, then can only watch it wither and die because they have no idea what they're doing. So what's their actual story? That's where it gets complicated. Shadow Elves in comparison to the other elves are slightly shorter, but not enough to be outside the norm. They have pale skin and lightly colored hair. White is possible, but more often than not they're just going to be blonde. Their only physical trait that stands out is their ears are a bit longer than other elves, but then again not enough to make them instantly recognizable. They speak an archaic tongue of Elven. This dialect is normally spoken quickly, and the elves have a high-pitched voice while talking in their native language. They can quickly learn enough Elven to use the surface dialect without flaw, though they still have a habit of speaking quickly. You can't look at a Shadow Elf and immediately notice that they're a Shadow Elf. Not that people would even know what they're looking at anyways. Shadow Elves are unheard of in most parts of the world, and in the parts they are known, they're described as the boogeyman anyways. The story of Shadow Elves start, like all good children's books do, with the end of the world. Thousands of years ago, the elves that would become the subject of this video lived on the surface in what would become Glantri, which doesn't make any sense as it's been clearly established that Ethengar was the North Pole at the time, making Glantri and its mountains the fantasy equivalent of northern Canada. Here in this Arctic blasted wasteland of permafrost and hypothermia, the elves frolicked, cavorted, and thrived as they practiced all the normal elven traditions like talking bad about people behind their backs, playing keep-away with unwilling halflings, and spitting infant dwarven blood on each other during Thursday siestas. At least that's what I assume elves do when they're left alone to their own devices. The game isn't actually clear on what they do for fun in an Arctic environment, despite nothing about Shadow Elves mentioning they once lived in the Arctic for thousands of years. So just assume Glantri was a lot bigger back then, and the Shadow Elves lived in the southern part of the region, which reached a temperate zone. Some days I feel less like a writer and more like a welder trying to get these continuities problems to make sense. That is, unless you're following the timeline in the boxed text, instead of the history detailed on page 5 of the DM's guide, as the timeline has them clearly migrating to Glantri after Blackmoor explodes. Major continuity error in the same book 3 pages apart. Yep, time to put on the welding mask again. Use the box text timeline rather than the freestanding text. Glantri before Blackmoor was in the Arctic or quite close to it. It makes no sense for them to migrate there before the Great Rain of Fire. Okay, welding mask off. So Blackmoor explodes, the elves go underground to avoid turning into pointy-eared candles, and that marks the first Shadow Elf foray into the world below. At the same time, another group of elves followed, looking for the first, not knowing those elves had been driven underground. These elves settled into what was about to become the Broken Lands, and gave up their elven cousins for dead. Then the second group found a Blackmoorian device that was somehow still attacked, and couldn't resist pushing all the jolly colorful blinking buttons, and then everybody in hundreds of miles died a hot fusion death. The underground elves started coming out of their subterranean exile, saw all the mushroom clouds and people dying from radiation poisoning, and noped back underground where the light was poor, the food was terrible, but at least their flesh wasn't sloughing off their bodies. You gotta take the victories when you can get them. These elves would become the Shadow Elves. They developed a fear of the surface, as the last 2 times they lived there, somebody decided to make Chernobyl sequels in their backyard, only without the charisma and power of Stellan Skarsgård and Jared Harris. Never knew Jared Harris was Richard Harris's son until recently. which kind of explains why he's such a great actor. It runs in the family. And since this is my mandatory Winona pick, and since actual pictures of shadow elves are in the single digits, just going to pretend she's a shadow elf and use her pictures instead of having to Google albino elves several thousand times and not get those radar-eared wow abominations for the first 50 results. Not everything was going badly for the shadow elves, though, for in the world below they made a fantastic discovery. Deep below the surface they found a city that was already built and ready for them to live in. All they had to do was drive out all the humans that built it and were living there first. Of course, being elves, they were no stranger to driving people out and taking all their land. Fortunately for them, the patron immortal of the humans was happy to take them under his wing in exchange for their worship and devotion. Unfortunately for them, the patron was Xanthiodal and he was a major dick. As they weren't making little shadow elves fast enough for him, he flooded the area with lava and toxic gas, killing a large number of them and driving the rest away so he could find right proper worshippers. He also never forgave them for not all dying when he killed them, so he still holds a grudge today. The elves fled further into the world below, far deeper than even the humanoids cared to follow. There they found the holy words of Raphael, known as the Refuge of Stone. Raphael was a former Blackmoor technician, relatively new immortal, and future patron of the Shadow Elves and all-around nice guy. Raphael's ascension was accidental. He doesn't even know how it happened. There was a huge boom, and instead of being randomly scattered atoms, he was now a deity. As he didn't ascend with a patron, he didn't know the first thing about being immortal, and he was alone in the multiverse. Then he saw the Shadow Elves, who were also wandering around lost and alone, and he felt a kindred spirit and decided to help them. What a nice guy! Raphael's Refuge of Stone was 14 verses teaching the Shadow Elves how to survive in the world below. They were delighted to have a patron immortal, especially one that was such a nice guy. They were mostly instructions about how to govern themselves, especially following the advice of the elves that Raphael designated as his shaman, but he also instructed them to build a city where they found his teachings. This city was located in a pocket of anti-gravity and was actually built on the roof of a great cavern. The Shadow Elves built a huge temple to Raphael, and all was right in the world. Well, for most of them. They found themselves constrained by the physical boundaries of the region, as there's not a lot of safe places to live in. Because of this, the Shadow Elves were instructed by Raphael to take the rather extreme measure of exiling the elderly and leaving deformed infants to the elements. But Raphael, because he's such a nice guy, leads humanoids or other groups to find the infants, and helps the elderly find safety, often on the surface. Raphael doesn't explain his reasons behind these rules to the Shadow Elves, but they are for the benefit of the elves, even if they don't realize he's taking care of them behind the scenes. The elves are highly religious, following the teachings of the Shadow Elf shaman. These elves are marked at birth by symmetrical purple birthmarks, and upon reaching the age of 10, they are turned over to the temple for training. Shaman are predominantly women, but men make up about a third of the total number. Once taken to the temple, the acolytes are trained for a century before starting on the path of the shaman. Here they will provide aid and comfort to the various Shadow Elves, as well as learning the secrets behind their people's history. The most sacred artifact for the Shadow Elves is the Soul Stone. These purple gems bristle with magic, and are explained by the shaman to contain the souls of future Shadow Elves. These are incredibly brittle. They can't survive on the surface, disintegrating in direct sunlight, and even being kept in complete darkness won't prevent their destruction. They're mined by the elves, taking great care not to damage them. In rare instances where elves encounter other races that have discovered them, the elves pay large sums to obtain the soul stones. They are stored in the great temple, where the shaman watch over them and use them to help the city. In reality, the soul stones contain radiance magic from the nucleus of the spheres under Glantri city. The radiation from the artifact materializes as the soul stones, which can be used to power the elves' spells. There is a price, as while the stones protect the elves from the normal detrimental effects of the radiance, it twists their children with hideous mutations. Shadow Elves' most valuable artifact is also the source of their greatest shame. This is a secret known only to the highest-ranking shaman. While Mystarans do reincarnate, the soul stones have nothing to do with that. They allow the shaman to use many of the radiant spells, though they can't obtain immortality with them without Raphael's help. Raphael is using the elves to gather up all the crystals into a single area so he can contain the radiation and prevent it from harming people who just get near it, because he's such a nice guy. He's effectively turning the Temple of Raphael into the planet's largest nuclear waste storage facility. The region surrounding the City of Stars is steeped in magic both from the Soul Stones and the naturally occurring energies found in the region. Dragon Lake is the largest body of water in the Shadowlands, just south of the City of Stars. Here you will find an ancient dragon turtle, which is fortunately quite lazy most of the time. The elves use boats to navigate the lake, but have to watch out for the water from the boiling lake, dangerously raising temperatures as it flows into the larger body of water. The Cavern of Continual Rain is a series of passages known for their mist and drizzle. When the wind picks up, the water makes navigating all but impossible because of the restricted visibility. Open flames are immediately extinguished in this area, and spells that would alter the topography automatically fail. The Warrens are a nest of tunnels and passages that have never been successfully mapped. There are countless horrors found in the Warrens, but legends of great treasures keep Shadow Elves coming back for more. The Desert of Lost Souls is a large open cavern filled with an uneven floor and little else. The desert part is a misnomer. It is a cursed region because those that stay too long will start to go mad. Worse, the area attracts monsters of the worst sort that seems to stalk the region looking for prey. The Forest of Spiders is a large fungal forest, as the name suggests, is filled with spiders. Normally avoided, some shadow elves hunt spiders for both meat and silk. Recently, the normally singular spiders seem to be organizing their attack, something that terrifies the shadow elves. The soul mines of Alfheim are the largest source of soul stones in the Shadowlands. The miners there are considered artisans because of the difficulty in removing soul stones, generally taking several days to remove a single one. There is a growing resentment with the miners here because they believe the Temple of Raphael doesn't appreciate them enough, just taking the stones that they've mined and leaving without proper compensation for their work. Inside the City of Stars, the Shadow Elves live austere lives, wearing simple clothing, doing their jobs, and attending worship services. Their city is largely without decoration. Brightly colored clothing is considered a luxury here. Common surface items like glass are rare this far underground. The elves don't show strong emotions in public. People who act differently are generally regarded as odd or disruptive. Even public displays of affection are frowned upon. The difficult past of the Shadow Elves has made them rather passive in daily life. They do have holy days that encourage the elves to celebrate, feast, and display strong emotions, but those are the exceptions, and afterwards the elves revert back to their introverted ways. They do wish to return to the surface one day. They feel betrayed by their surface cousins who left them underground, though in reality the surface elves have a lot more on their mind than their cousins' well-being. The Shadow Elves have sent expeditions to find a new place to live in the past. The first one went the wrong way and discovered the Hollow World, but came out in an area inhospitable to life and assumed the red sun was indicative of the new surface world. The second expedition arrived on the surface but in the Broken Lands, and assumed the rest of the world looked just like that blasted region. The third actually found Alfheim, and their cousins were delighted to finally meet them. Then all the drama started. The Alfheim elves offered to help the Shadow Elves return to the surface, and even offered them land in Alfheim. Then King Celadril discovered the actual number of Shadow Elves, and it would have doubled Alfheim's population, so he retracted the offer. It didn't help that King Telamon demanded more than half the nation, and the crown as well, and wasn't willing to compromise. That's when the tensions began. The Shadow Elves started infiltrating Alfheim society, and occasionally sent a war party on a raid, though these were almost always defeated. One problem the Shadow Elves have is that many of their spies realize their king's description of their surface cousins isn't accurate, and that he's holding on a grudge that's almost entirely one-sided. The largest problem with the Shadow Elf-Sylvan Elf conflict is that both sides are unwilling to budge and their egos are getting into each other's ways. The Sylvan Elves view the Shadow Elves as entitled usurpers, demanding more than they deserve without earning any of it. The Shadow Elves feel their cousins are weak backstabbers who hoard the best lands for themselves and can't be trusted to keep their word. The reality is, Alfheim can't support the population of both groups of elves. It's just not large enough. The Shadow Elves could find a home elsewhere if they looked. Norwal would welcome their numbers. King Ericol could have them all in homes tomorrow. Darokin has a large amount of unclaimed territory they would be happy to sell to the elves if they just ask. But King Telamon is dead set at conquering Alfheim, despite not understanding how the magic of the forest works, and he would instantly surround himself with a hostile Darokin, along with making enemies of all the other Alfheim allies. But Telamon doesn't care. Telamon's stubbornness isn't going unnoticed, at least by those in power. His daughter Tanadelio is more than willing to return to the surface by any means, even if she has to go around her father to do so. Dissidents who disagree with Telamon have been exiled as punishment, and a few of them are trying to get the truth behind the situation back to their people. If Telamon would actually talk to the surrounding nations, he could find allies, but then he doesn't get his revenge. If they actually take over Alfheim, they get a nation of dying trees surrounded by enemies on all sides. So try to avoid the wrath of the Immortals timeline. There is a growing fascination with the surface among the Shadow Elves. They have toiled, bled, and suffered underground for centuries only to be told of endless bounties of the surface world. Exotic items such as glass, wood, and dyed fabric have been making their way to the City of Stars, and their people want more. Rumors of clubs where young Shadow Elves can meet privately and drink, talk, and, dare I say it, yes, even hold hands with members of the opposite sex, are whispered when the shaman aren't around. When adding sugar to your tea is considered a rebellious move, this is a society rife for a cultural renaissance. It's not like the Shadow Elves are naturally boring, it's just they have lived lives of such austerity that many of them have forgotten any other way. But as access to natural resources have started to slowly grow larger, they're starting to remember the good old days when they could openly frolic and cavort. But the leadership likes the status quo, and thinks the even marginally rebellious trends are a danger to Shadow Elf culture. To emphasize this, he's banned Kevin Bacon from the city just in case. You can't talk about Shadow Elf society without mentioning the Skinwings, large lizards capable of flight, able to carry up to 2 elves normally, with larger versions able to lift cargo as well. Because of the hostile nature of the world below, the ground is often dangerous to traverse. Not to mention large boiling lakes, rivers of lava, and entire caverns filled with quicksand. The safest way is obviously to fly. Skinwings are ingrained into Shadow Elf society. Most know how to fly them like a normal human would know how to ride a horse. They're used in all aspects of life, from transportation to war to work. They can't live above ground, quickly sickening and dying, which makes the Shadow Elf plans to return to the surface difficult. Shadow Elf exiles have a few options when cast out of the world below. Assuming they survive, with their magic that's often the case, they can either try to get out of the Shadowlands or find a place to live within it. As older Shadow Elves often look like humanoids, some of them prefer to hide among the creatures in their old age. Some Shadow Elves make it to the Hollow World, though find the strange restrictions on magic stifling. For those that make it to the surface world, they quickly find that their former king's description was far from truthful. Most exiles try to avoid other elves and seek out areas on the frontier where they can avoid awkward questions. But there is a small but growing number of exiles that are working together to help their brethren on the surface. A few of them even want to return to their homeland and expose their king's lies. Using Shadow Elves in the game is tricky, because they are a secret race. Only a few in Alfheim know of them. They aren't even boogeymen to the average person there. They just don't exist. They don't interact with other races on the surface. And underground, they normally just fight with the humanoids. They don't trade with them. The king is the obvious baddie, but his plans aren't exactly on the front page for what passes as a newspaper in the City of Stars. For the Shadow Elves, everything is behind the scenes, even their own city, the king's true plans, the secret behind the Soul Stones, their plans for Alfheim. But the Shadow Elf isn't paranoid or xenophobic. They've had a rough time of it. They've been betrayed or attacked countless times. Their neighbors want them dead. The land they're surrounded by wants them dead. Even their old patron Immortal wants them dead. They don't make friends easily. You can run Shadow Elves in a variety of ways. First is the Shadow Elf only party, which if you're going to be running around the City of Stars is the only way to kind of do it. You're patrolling the Shadowlands, you're hunting for spies and traitors, and if you're lucky enough, you get to go up to the surface on a super secret mission. Shadow Elves can be the bad guys, especially if you're playing in Alfheim. They're going to be actively trying to conquer the nation. Or when you're adventuring in the world below, they like to paint themselves purple, dress up in bikinis, and randomly attack you. Or Shadow Elves can be individuals looking to survive on a world they don't comprehend, surrounded by people they don't understand. The fish out of water theme is difficult to pull off, but it's the best if somebody wants to play one, especially since Shadow Elves have the reputation of being the cave fish of D&D. But why do you want to play a Shadow Elf? They're incredibly distrustful, suspicious of strangers, and require a lot of effort to make one even fit into your campaign. But they're almost an anti-cliché in D&D. They're not evil, they don't seek to drag down others out of spite, they won't turn on their kind to further their own goals, and they don't try to impress upon random strangers just how edgy they are. Unlike Twitch streamers. While not a perfect match for a lot of campaigns, they are an interesting option, and a fascinating discovery for party members. Next time, we are looking at the last of the Gazetteer books, the famously rushed Atruaghin Clans. The book's so incomplete that it's been rewritten by fans more than once. But until then, break the silence, damn the dark, damn the light. Welcome to Mystara for the last of the remastered Gazetteers. After this, I've got Dawn of the Emperors, the Creature Crucibles, and about 25 modules left. This, of course, is one of the most problematic of the Gazetteers, the Atruaghin Clans. It's not problematic in a topical sort of way, but the book is considered incomplete. In fact, it was so rushed that it's no secret, the Word of God said that this book went from concept to print in about 3 months. It's not so much of an allegory towards the Native American tribes, but more like a skimmed-over Cliff Notes. Which means a large part of this video will be me covering the remastered Gazetteer, available at the vaults, because otherwise I'd run out of things to talk about in about a page. I'm Mr. Welch, and today I get to showcase the fact that I'm 132nd Chiricahua Apache. Going off the original book, it's obvious that it wasn't ready for print. The font size is around 14 compared to the normal size of 8 to 10. The margins are 1 inch across the entire page, and there's 25% more art than other Gazetteers, including full-page art for no apparent reason. There's no mention of tribal leaders, monsters, or cities, or other bits of information that you'd expect to see in a Gazetteer. The rules for the Shamani class are unplayable as written, with glaring errors like the XP chart starting off kilter to show that you started with 1000 XP at level 1 instead of just 0. And that was the most glaring error in the class. As such, the book is considered one of the worst of the Gazetteers, but it gets a pass at the same time because it was only printed to terminate the series. To summarize the official book, the Atruaghin are the descendants of the original Oltec and Azcan people before the majority of them were sent to the Hollow World after the Great Rain of Fire. They hid underground in caves while the world above burned, only to leave once the chaos had died down. There they split into 5 clans: the seagoing turtle, the equestrian horse, the traditionalist elf, the cliff-dwelling bear, and the ferocious tiger. They were led by Atruaghin, a powerful mortal who arrived from the Hollow World to help them thrive, but after he left on his quest for immortality, everything went wrong and the humanoids invaded and enslaved all the races. And they remained slaves for centuries before Atruaghin returned and liberated all of them with the help of powerful magics he learned while seeking immortality. He drove out the humanoids, and then raised the Great Plateau to keep the tribe safe from future invasions. Well, 3 of them. He sort of forgot the turtle and the tiger clans that were south of the plateau, but that was fine because nobody was going to attack them. Unfortunately, the immortal Etzanthiotl, Atruaghin's greatest foe, was able to corrupt the immortal patron of the tiger clan, Dan'l Tigerstripes, and turn the majority of the clan to evil, much to Mr. Rogers' dismay. That's pretty much the entire story of the Atruaghin in their own book. Their own timeline doesn't mention them for the second half of it, only talking about events in other lands. It says the 4 tribes live in perfect harmony without conflict. But that leads to quite a few problems because the Horse clan is obviously based on the Comanche, a tribe whose name literally means enemy in Paiute. That means being trapped on a plateau with no way off. You've got the Cherokee and the Navajo living peacefully with the tribe that proudly boasts that they do not play well with others. Worse, the Turtle clan is completely cut off from their cousins by a giant cliff with no way to get up. But somehow they can communicate and trade with them without a problem. And like other books, this one is bottled up, so the Tiger clan only attack their cousins, which are just the elk at the top of the plateau, and the turtle to the west through the forest. The book has very little tension, not much in the way of conflict, and the happy natives live in harmony all by themselves, which makes for a really boring book. So it was updated. Right after Hurricane Harvey, I was trapped in my house and decided to fix the Atruaghin book, with lots of help from Mystara fans and some volunteers from the subreddit Indian Country. While I do have noticeable Apache ancestry, I'm also 31 seconds not Chiricahua Apache, so I needed some help. Several of the volunteers were intrigued about writing a book regarding the various tribes from their culture, even though most of the people helping, well, only one of them was from one of the allegorical tribes, with Tom of the Chinook. Marco helped with the art and much of the Aztec lore, even if his tribe was blood enemies with those guys for centuries. He made more than a few heads explode with his loud and vocal approval of the Spanish conquistadors when we were getting feedback on the book. One man's conqueror is another man's liberator. Regardless, we filled out the details of the Atruaghin, added 2 new factions in the large open area south of the plateau with the Nunahey and the Lighthouse Expedition, tying the Atruaghin directly to the Fae of Tall Tales of the Wee Folk and the Hollow World, because I love me some tie-ins. The theme of the Atruaghin clans is now change. For centuries they've been in a bit of a cultural stasis because that's the way their patron immortal wants it, but societies that can't change become stagnant. One of the clans, the Elk, are perfectly happy with the way things are. But the Horse are a warrior culture that wants to run free on the lowlands. The Bear clan can't stay culturally isolated right next to Darokin and the goods their merchants bring. The Turtle clan is physically cut off from their cousins, having more in common now with the Ierendi and Sind than others of their own heritage. The Elk clan is having to deal with the fact that the rest of the clans aren't happy with the status quo, and either let them change or try and force them to keep the old ways, a split that is tearing at their own clan society. Last, even the Tiger are experiencing problems of their own as there's a 3-way power struggle between its leaders, while other members of the clan are realizing that their habit of making enemies is about to come back and bite them. Adding to the turmoil in the land are different groups that have taken an interest in the affairs of the Atruaghin. The Nunahey are a kingdom of Fae that have taken up residency in the Singing Forest and are fascinated by the Atruaghin, being old allies of the Confederation of Clans. The Hollow World Expedition is a much smaller group, numbering around 60, of explorers from the Land of the Red Sun, who use a magical elevator to discover the surface world. Darokin has become partners with the Bear clan through the use of the completely mundane but enormous world elevator to bring goods both to and from the plateau. Point Theopolis is a secret Thaetian military base on Roaring Surf Island, constructed with the help of magic as the island has no natural ports. There the troops keep an eye on foreign fleet movements, with a keen interest in the expanding influence of the Turtle clan. The revised history of the Atruaghin hasn't changed much at all, aside from the arrival of the foreigners. They still found themselves attacked by the humanoids coming from the Broken Land. Atruaghin raises the plateau and the Tiger clan is corrupted as normal. But in 934 AC, with the construction of the world elevator, the cracks begin to form with the Confederation of the Clans. They've always kept to the old ways, which was a series of laws that they were held to, though not all of the laws were practical to uphold, and for some of the clans almost impossible. Further contact with foreigners increased the stress put upon the Atruaghin to keep the old ways, leading to the Turtle to practically abandon their past laws, and the Horse clan to start a plan to leave behind their cousins and seek their own way in the world. The religion of the clans, aside from the Tiger, who have rejected the teachings of Atruaghin, include a lot of laws that when they were created were designed to protect them. Some laws are universal and still held up today, such as never harming a totem animal, prohibitions against inbreeding, and to keep a fire going at all times inside of a tribe's territory. Others are impractical because of the isolation of the Turtle Clan. As much as the others would gladly come to their defense, you're not getting a group of braves down a 1,000-foot cliff anytime soon. And others the clans have just started ignoring, like the ban on metal tools or the restrictions on arcane magic, except the magic that was taught to them by Atruaghin. The land of the Atruaghin are divided into two primary areas: the lands atop the Great Plateau and the southern forest to the south. The plateau has three distinct regions: the Three Lakes area to the northwest, and the large forest to the southeast. In between these two areas are the Thundering Plains, where the bison roam and the Horse Clan hunts them. Also living on the plains to the northeast along the cliffs is found the Bear Clan villages, though all of these are built into the side of the plateau as well. Another area on the plateau of note is called the Buffalo Home, a naturally occurring portal to the spirit world, where all manner of animal spirits are found and the Atruaghin stay well away from. Below the plateau, the clans control a small strip of land to the north, at least on paper, but the large swaths of forest directly south of the plateau are directly under the control of the Tiger and Turtle clans. Near the nation of Sind, the foothills to the north are populated by a large number of pachydermians, who largely do their own thing. The Singing Forest is home to the Turtle clans and the Nunnehay. This is a large conifer woodlands with enormous trees and abundant wildlife. The Forest of Death houses the Tiger clan, and resembles more of a tropical jungle, which shouldn't be supported in the climate it resides, but this is caused by the magics of Ansantiodal, who has made the Tiger clans resemble the Azcan nation that he first corrupted. Off the coast of Atruaghin are 3 islands, only one of which is actually used by their people. The Island of Spirits is a mountainous island that is overrun by malevolent elemental creatures of air. In the middle is a portal to the Plane of Air, though fortunately for mariners, none of the creatures venture far from the island. Roaring Surf Island, again, is occupied by Thaiatians, operating out of a fort in the middle of the island constructed in secret. They spy on passing ships and keep an eye out for pirates. They pose no threat to the Atruaghin, being more concerned with the Ierendi and the Minrothadian navies. Whalebone Island is the largest whaling station for the Turtle Clan, who share the island with the Ierendi whalers. The two groups cooperate in this task, as the catch in the waters is plentiful. The coordinated industry between the two nations has led to great strides in mutual respect between the peoples. In the northernmost part of the Singing Forest you will find the Eternal Powwow, where the Nunnehay have created their own kingdom, styled in the fashion of the Atruaghin. Here the drums never stop, as the Sidhe and other fey creatures mimic the Atruaghin in their own misunderstood way. Chief Haw the Diagonal rules over the Nunnehay and is the sworn protector of the Turtle Clan, whether they want it or not. The Nunnehay dress in a manner akin to the Atruaghin and arm themselves with similar weapons, though they don't have the same restrictions on metal that the Atruaghin do. The plateau itself is largely mineral poor, leading to the clans, apart from the Tiger, having no access to most metals. While they have a prohibition over the use of metal weapons and tools, all clans except the Elk are starting to question this restriction. The Turtle Clan has begun to abandon this law entirely, and the Horse Clan views metal weapons taken in combat as prizes. The Bear has openly kept the prohibition, but there is a thriving black market thanks to their connections with the Republican Darokin. Only the Tiger Clan will use metal weapons, but the mineral deposits in their territory is mostly precious metals, meaning the weapons and tools they have are almost always stolen. Without common metal ores like iron in the plateau, the clans have no knowledge of smelting or forging, so all metal weapons found among the Atruaghin are from another nation. Many of the common monsters found in the known world are largely absent on the plateau, except those that can fly. Humanoids have no presence in the lands of the Atruaghin, though the plateau does host several large creatures like purple worms and at least one Hephaeston. While the Braves will try to drive away non-humans, these creatures are typically too powerful to be defeated and are left alone. The Elk are by far the most traditional of all the clans, holding closely to the teachings of Atruaghin. They are found to the southeast of the plateau, living in the forest there. They consider themselves first among equals, the keepers of the old ways and the defender of the Atruaghin culture. They have a bad habit of imposing their views on the 2 other clans found on the plateau, something that annoys the Bear Clan and irritates the Horse Clan. They are the largest of the clans in size, with 8 cities in their territory. The Atruaghin Confederation was founded in the Elk city of Kin Nash Dulba, which serves as the center of the Bobcat tribe and the capital of the Elk clan. Here you will find a city laid out by Atruaghin himself, filled with temples to all of the Atruaghin patron immortals, though the largest temple is reserved for Atruaghin, and the Elk clan's patron Mahmadi running Elk's temple is the closest to his. The Elk are the largest producers of food in the Confederation, growing all manner of food and luxury crops like tobacco. They also create large amounts of artistic goods, usually of a religious nature. The exotic foods and art they create would fetch a fortune among the traders in the lands below, but the Elks are the most isolationist of all the clans and refuse to do business with the Darokin merchants or any foreigners that approach them. Most outsiders are forbidden from even entering Elk territory, though they are considered guests of the Bear Clan. They will be turned back without harm, most of the time. If an elk suspects a bear or horse clan merchant is looking to resell elk clan goods to outsiders, they will cancel the sale. Some elk clan braves have taken it upon themselves to be moral guardians for the rest of the clans, and act as roving customs officials to check the visitors new to the plateau for items that are forbidden by the old ways, confiscating and destroying anything like metal weapons or holy symbols of immortals from lands outside of Atruaghin. Not everybody in the elk clan shares this belief, though. The Owl tribe uses a loophole in the old ways to study arcane magic, using only the spells taught by Atruaghin or discovered on their own. The wizards see that the clan is stagnating and are advising others to become more tolerant of outsiders. The beaver tribe has gone so far as to begin constructing a scaffold that will reach to the lowlands, allowing the elk clan to interact with the turtle clan without magic. Needless to say, this plan does not have the approval of other tribal leaders. The bear clan is in a state of internal conflict. It was considered the poorest of the clans, living in the most arid regions and producing little outside of pottery and a few crops. Darokin changed all that when they offered the clan a fortune in trade goods in exchange for being able to construct the Great Elevator, a mechanical device that can raise entire caravans to the top of the plateau. Overnight, the bear clan found itself one of the richest of the clans, with the trade goods making the lives of the tribes closest to the elevator one of almost luxury. Almost instantly, the clan began making trade goods to send back to the Darokin caravans, and even had hundreds of its people leave the plateau to live in the lowlands to maintain the trading posts at the bottom of the elevator. The wealth did not come without turmoil. The more traditional members of the bear clan were disgusted with how easily the youth of the tribe gave up their teachings to benefit from the goods and the materials provided by the men of coin. While some of the tribes have almost abandoned the old ways, other tribes doubled down on their adherence to them. What makes the situation worse is that the leader of the clan is an indecisive man who angers the poorer tribes with his noticeable bias towards the richer tribes. The fact that many of the goods designated to help the poorer tribes are taken by unscrupulous merchants and chiefs in the other tribes is infuriating the poorer tribal chiefs. The fate of the bear clan is very much in question. With many people abandoning the clan for the cities, the clan might find itself torn apart from the strife. The horse clan never wanted to be on the plateau in the first place. They view themselves as warriors. If you can't wage war against a foe, you aren't much of a warrior. In the days long gone, they would fight against the red orcs that took their names from the horse clan warriors. They would raid the cities of other humans and take down monsters for both fame and honor. When the plateau was raised, all the clan's enemies were suddenly left behind in the lowlands. Now all the horse warriors could do was occasionally raid the sparse farms of the bear clan or the distant cities of the elk clan. But they could not wage war as that was forbidden. Plus they had to live with their cousins. Starting an actual war with them was not in anybody's best interest. The horse, unlike the other clans, worshipped a patron immortal before the arrival of Atruaghin. Long before he arrived, Takati Stormtamer ascended to immortality and served as the only Atruaghin patron. Under him, the Horse clan conquered the other clans. Before Atruaghin arrived, liberated everybody, and started the confederation we have today. Because of this, the Horse have always had a strong independent streak compared to their cousins. They view the bear as too timid, the elk as stodgy, and they haven't seen the Turtle clan in so long they forgot what they originally thought of them. They have turned to hunting instead of warfare in the century since their isolation. Their hunts are almost military campaigns in their own right, but hunting buffalo or the occasional flying monster like a griffin pales in comparison to riding down orcs and humans. But it will have to do for now. The biggest change in the history of the horse was the discovery of what was initially thought to be a cave, but upon exploration was revealed to be a tunnel carved by a purple worm in recent years. The braves that dared enter the tunnel followed it for miles as it wound its way through the rock until it ended at the bottom of the plateau. A way down to the lowlands had been discovered. While many in the clan, upon hearing the news, wanted to leave immediately, cooler heads prevailed by pointing out the tunnel needed to be widened to allow the horses through, and the tribe couldn't leave without taking the bison with them, as that animal was crucial to their survival. A wizard was hired through a proxy, and now the clan waits with increasing excitement as the day of their freedom draws closer. If the Turtle clan had close ties to any of the other clans in the Confederation, even they don't remember it. Located south of the plateau on the border with Sind, the Turtle have been isolated from their cousins for so long they don't even remember why they follow the old ways. They have long interacted with the nations of Sind, Ierendi, Minrothad, and Darokin, even building docks to handle large ships for trade. The Turtle clan has become a bit of a cultural chameleon, stealing aspects from different lands to improve their own culture. They pay lip service to many of the old ways, while others they have flat out abandoned without apology. They don't use metal coins, but instead use paper currency like Darokin does. They traded with Alfheim for ironwood to use in place of metal tools and weapons for the few members that still use that restriction. Elephants from Sind plow their fields and work their shipbuilding yards. The original culture and traditions of the Turtle clan have mostly been replaced or evolved into new ones because of their interaction with their neighbors. The question that the Turtle clan will have to answer sooner than later is if they're even part of the Confederation anymore. Their location is cut off from physical interaction with their other clans. Their shamani can visit the other clans through magic, but the average member of the Turtle Clan will never see another member of the Confederation in their lifetime. They have built themselves up as a strong nation economically and can defend themselves with the help of their newfound friends. Turtle Clan ships are becoming common sights in the island nations, and Darokin and Minrothad are starting to become concerned about the clan's growing economic strength and focus. At the same time, the clan is looking hard at its own customs, leaving behind the ones they find obsolete. But they're finding it harder to object to leaving the crueler customs in the past. The Tiger Clan is in danger of self-destructing dramatically. 3 men vie for control of the clan, trying to gain advantage over one another, while the clan's numerous enemies are growing in strength. The clan is normally ruled over by a tribunal with the clan chief, the Viper, and the Tiger High Priests. In reality, the Viper High Priest has held all the power, leading the worship of Azantiotl. The Tiger High Priest leads the temple devoted to Danal Tiger Stripes, and is important only because of his vast wealth that he gained through bribery. The clan chief has long been a figurehead, but the latest ruler wants to be more, and is plotting against both priests. Of course, the Viper Priest has expected this, and is looking to remove the chief in favor of one more pliable. The 3 men plot and conspire against each other, looking to remove or discredit each other in hopes of gaining total power. Outside the capital, the Tiger Clan is looking at foes in almost every direction. Once they raided the cities of Darokin with almost impunity, relying on their savage reputation and their lightning-fast strikes. But Darokin has adapted to the Tiger Clan's tactics, and the last major raid resulted in a massacre of the Python tribe's braves. Only the belief that the tribe had held braves in reserve kept the Darokin army from destroying them entirely. The Tiger have long been the enemy of the Nunnehay, and with the Fae having grown tired of the constant aggressions, have begun taking the offensive. Even the Turtle Clan, a longtime favorite target of the Tiger Clan, has strengthened themselves with the help of their allies and the improved weapons and armor that their wealth can obtain. The Tiger Clan needs slaves to appease Azantiotl, and they're discovering that all the easy sources are drying up, and even worse, fighting back. Atruaghin are fairly rare outside the region with the exception of the Turtle Clan. That's not to say you won't find them on the lowlands, but they're going to need a reason to be there. Fortunately, other than the elk, the other clans do have some underlying reason why they want to travel. The Turtle Clan, with its abandoning of the old ways, is pretty obvious. The Horse Clan has a way off the plateau, but so far only small numbers of them have made the journey, mainly as scouts or to raid unsuspecting villages. The Bear Clan lives on the side of the plateau, and their sudden infusion of wealth has made several of their clan want to see what the outside world has to offer. The Tiger Clan, despite its reputation for evil, does have members that don't share the clan's worldview. This isn't the healthiest attitude to have in the Forest of Death, so self-exile is often the better option. Even members of the Elk Clan could have a reason to travel, especially the Wizards of the Owl tribe, but they will almost always be encountered individually. So why do you want to play in Atruaghin? They're reclusive, technologically backwards, and just getting off the plateau is often an adventure in its own right. However, they're quite rugged and natural survivalists. They live through their wits and have a unique fighting style involving hit-and-run tactics. When you don't have iron, you don't have heavy armor and quickly learn how to dodge. That was a problem with the original book, as their armor class was constantly borderline pathetic. The 5th edition book rectified that, but they will still need to be played differently as fighters in Beckme and in the Rule Cyclopedia. I normally don't rely on unofficial fan creations for videos, but the Atruaghin book was devoid of things to talk about. You can find the revised Gazetteer books on the Vaults of Pandius, and I'll add a link so you can find them. There's a player's guide and a DM's guide. They also have the corrected rules for the Shamani, which again were unplayable in the original book. There's rules for new magic items, new monsters, and a whole host of NPCs, and lots more. Check it out. A lot of people helped me with it, and I couldn't have done it without them. And before you ask me how to pronounce the city names that were provided for me in Navajo, I will give you the same answer I was given when I asked that question. You don't. Next up for remastering is Thyatis, as I'm splitting the box set in 2. Until then, Pocahontas should have realized she was a side chick the minute the guy introduced himself as John Smith.